In one military camp, a man was banging on a frying pan in an attempt to wake up all the knights. Some had already woken up and were getting dressed, while others were trying to fight this awakening, not wanting to get out of bed at such an early hour. One of the knights, while putting on his shoes, began to complain too loudly that bugs had crawled into his boots, thus driving away the last echoes of his comrades' sleep. Some of the knights reluctantly got out of bed. Some stretched their muscles. One of them prayed to the gods. Another was busy with his own affairs, waking up much earlier than the others. But there was also that man who, despite the noise surrounding him, continued to sleep. After a series of misfortunes, Encrid was demoted to commander of these knights. And on that day, they all encountered the enemy. Encrid didn't have any special powers or anything like that. He managed to get into the army thanks to endless training. However, today, his end was too close. He was not special in any way. He did not wield a sword as well as he would have liked. He could not boldly face danger, and on the battlefield he had to be saved by other knights. His dreams remained unfulfilled. In this battle, while Encrid tried with all his might not to lose his life, others lost theirs to enemy arrows and swords. This guy sincerely hoped that even if everyone laughed at him and said that it would never happen, he would be able to achieve his goal. He believed that as long as he had a sword in his hands, he would be a knight. But his dream was not destined to come true. The enemy plunged a sharp blade straight into his neck. Dropping his sword, Encrid fell to his knees. He didn't even know that he would die such a miserable death. In the darkness, he saw a blue light and someone's face. Encrid stood on the surface of the water, where ripples appeared from his presence. Then the boy woke up in his bed from the sound of a frying pan being banged on. Jumping up, he grabbed his throat, wondering if it was all a dream. And the knight putting on his shoes on the next bed asked himself what was in his boots. When the man turned the boot over, he was outraged that a beetle fell out of it. Since this had happened before, Encrid looked at his comrade with concern, wondering if this was déjà vu. Once again, the commander was on the battlefield, defending himself with all his might. And for the second time, he died, struck in the neck by a sword. The same fate awaited Encrid for the third and fourth time. Every morning, the commander was awakened by screams and the sound of ladles banging on the frying pan. And each time he grabbed his neck, remembering how the enemy struck him in the neck, after which Encrid felt a burning pain and choked on his own blood. This unfortunate day repeated itself again and again. This strike was too perfect. The tip of the sword flashed before Encrid's eyes for the 17th time, and for the 17th time his life was cut short. He was on his knees, bleeding, and his opponent turned away indifferently, walking away. If Encrid had swung his sword with more force and tried harder, perhaps he could have avoided death. The ferryman of the souls of the dead held a lantern with a blue light in his hand and asked if the knight really thought so. Encrid tried to get up, and the death's assistant noted that the man tried so hard and gave up, unable to overcome the wall. The knight sat on the surface of the water and was in despair. He was angry at the carrier's words and did not want to come to terms with death. The sound of knocking on metal was heard again. Once again, Encrid woke up on a bed in a military camp. Pulling on his boot, the comrade noted that the commander had gotten up a little early today. Encrid warned Rem that there were bugs in his boots. The surprised man looked inside his boot. He then turned the shoe over, causing an insect to fall to the floor. Irritated by this, Rem hastened to crush the beetle with his bare foot. Pulling on his second boot, the man assumed that all of this was a joke from the commander and asked why it was necessary to do this. And Encrid, leaving the room, asked him to be quieter and explained that it was only a metaphor, like insects crawling into his comrade's shoes. This was the 18th time the commander had seen these dead insects. As he left the tent, Encrid wondered how many more times he would have to go through this and whether he could prevent his end. He trained with a sword since childhood. His teacher was a former mercenary soldier with a prosthetic leg. He ended up in the village by accident. The man praised Encrid and said that with his current skills, he could definitely become a knight. This is how the boy's dream was born. Encrid wondered if he could really become a knight. Will he be able to single-handedly deal with 1,000 and turn the tide of battle as an invincible hero? He wanted to become a knight who would end the war, whom people would call the Knight of the End. The guy believed that the main character of this wandering artist's song was him. Encrid decided to leave his village and become a knight, but in the future, he was ridiculed. While drinking alcoholic beverages, the men discussed how the new guy had fallen and how he had dreamed of becoming a knight at a time when he himself was afraid of mongrels. They believed that the guy was not even fit to be a mercenary. Encrid was sitting to the side at that moment, bandaging his wounds. He had left his native land and joined this squad, after which he realized that his talent might not have been so special. At that time, he felt it was too early to give up just because of one mistake. The guy was sure that hard work would pay off one day. He believed that since he had no talent, with time and effort he would overcome everything. He gained experience and earned recognition from those around him for his strength and endurance. He became stronger and was confident that he could become a knight. But this firm hope was shattered into small pieces. A child from the village where Encred was staying challenged him to a duel. He was 12 years old and he had taken up the sword 6 months ago. Encred had rubbed his hands raw, trained for over 10 years, and yet he looked so pathetic in front of this boy. Kneeling and writhing in pain, the commander wondered if it had all been in vain and that nothing could be done. But despite this, Encred did not give up his dream of becoming a knight. Everyone around him could humiliate him and say that it was pointless. But the guy slept and ate several times less than the others in order to train with all his might in his free time. He did it over and over again. Due to the lack of opponents, Encred struck the trees with his sword. So the guy trained day and night, not missing a single opportunity. He continued to do this even though he was very tired. Through exhaustion, Encred raised his sword and struck again. And one day he decided that even if he did not become a knight, he would at least be an experienced soldier. So 3 years later, Encred ended up in the Cyprus Division, which consisted of 4 platoons, 4 companies, under which there were 4 detachments. The guy became the commander of the so-called second-rate squad. It was the best he could get after endless training. Being an ordinary soldier was better than a wandering mercenary. Coming out of the tent, Encred turned to Jackson, who was sitting next to her and sharpening his knife. With a hint of displeasure, the soldier asked what the commander wanted. The commander asked his comrade to take over his shift today. Jackson stared at Encred, wondering whether to agree to this. Rising to his feet, he said that the commander was owed. As Jackson walked away, Ram noted that the guy had the habits of a wildcat and pointed out the way the soldier looked at his commander. Ignoring this, Encred turned to Rem, who asked if the commander really wanted to drop something on him too. Encred replied that he wanted to try the beast's heart again. Ram looked at the commander in surprise. The soldier asked if Encred had surrendered last time and if he was sure that everything would work out this time. The battle between Norelia and Aspen has begun again. It was in this battle that Encred died. He came back to life and lived that day over and over again. Even though Rem taught the commander the heart of the beast technique every time, he still couldn't lay his eyes on the tip of the sword that brought him death. But Encred was sure that something would change today. On this battlefield for the 21st time, everything was supposed to be different. The commander knocked one of the opponents down, but another was already approaching him. However, after so much time, Encred learned everything. He knew he should have dodged the spear behind his back. Then, from the blow of the guy behind, something else bad was also supposed to happen at this moment. One of the squad members, Val, was fighting very close by and was soon to die. No, he could have already died from the arrow flying towards him. However, Encred managed to arrive in time, and the arrow flew to the side, hitting his shield. Turning around, a shocked Val asked what just happened. And at that moment, an enemy was flying at the soldier from behind, raising his sword above him. Val wouldn't have been able to react to this in time, but that wasn't necessary because Encred was still nearby, having cut off the enemy's head. Finally, the commander's actions worked. Even though he had previously blocked the arrow, Val was still dying because of the attacker from behind. The first goal was accomplished for today. However, there is still one obstacle left, and now it was killing another soldier. The knight plunged his sword into his opponent's chest without a trace of regret and then pulled the blade out roughly, spraying blood. Every time it ended with this man with a burning, bloodthirsty gaze. This knight heading towards Encred has already thrust his sword into his neck 21 times. The commander held his sword in front of him, ready to fight again. The enemy knight rushed towards Encred with a wide smile, who was confident that he would be able to survive today. The commander recalled his training, recalled how Rem, throwing and catching the hatchet, said that Encred closed his eyes in the face of danger. With a jerk of his hand, the soldier brought the tip sharply closer to the commander's goal. As usual, dumbfounded, Encred closed his eyes, and Rem explained that the commander there would quickly die on the battlefield. The soldier advised the commander to be braver, not to panic and not to get lost, to become someone who had no idea what death was. He said that being like the beast was the heart of the beast, and now again the tip of the sword was approaching Encred. However, now, surpassing himself, the commander did not close his eyes. He thought about the heart of that very beast that was not afraid of death. Encred wondered if he himself now feared this death. The man came to a negative conclusion, deciding that death made him stronger. The blade should have gone straight for the commander's throat, but he still managed to avoid it. This result made Encred's heart beat faster. Today, the commander finally managed to dodge this knight's attack. Encred moved forward and found himself behind the knight. The opponents turned to face each other and decided to attack simultaneously. However, the knight turned out to be faster than the commander. His sword pierced Encred's neck again. Spitting blood and grinning, the soldier fell. And so the commander found himself on the water's surface in front of the boat in which Karen was meeting him. The carrier noted that the guy was trapped in this endless day and he was in pain. The commander was in despair, and Karen suggested that he get up and get into the boat, accept his weakness, and calm down. However, Encred was not going to accept his fate. The grinning soldier announced this, insulting the soul ferryman. The commander saw the tip of the enemy's sword with his own eyes and managed to dodge, and this meant a lot. One of the soldiers habitually banged on the frying pan. Encred rose from his bed, and Ram noted that the commander had woken up early today. Filled with determination, Encred moved forward step by step and was about to fight for the 22nd time. Once again, a fierce battle ensues. People rush at each other and try to somehow defend themselves, but death still gets to them. On the 33rd time, Encred could clearly see the blade. The commander dodged before the enemy's sword reached him. However, the knight was too fast. In the end, Encred continued to suffer defeat. He fell to the ground, sprinkling it with his blood. And from the cut rope on his neck, a blue medallion framed in silver flew off. During his time as a mercenary, Encred took on several orders to destroy monsters. It wasn't that he was obliged to do them. He just stumbled upon a random village where he was asked for help. The reason why the commander decided to help them was because he dreamed of becoming a knight, and protecting the weak was a knight's duty. Putting something into the boy's hand, the old man said that his village was poor, so this was all they could offer their savior. This was the same blue amulet with silver. It was a ridiculous reward for Encred risking his life. Then the old man said that this amulet would reward him with what he so desperately prayed for. Now, being wounded, looking at the amulet, the commander assumed that perhaps this thing was what made today repeat itself over and over again, just so that he could become a knight. The enemy soldier said that Encred must have been in a lot of pain. Raising his sword over the commander who was trying to get up, the enemy said that he would be merciful to him. But Encred didn't need this mercy. He knew what a disgusting person stood before him. A man who enjoyed killing others. The one who brought Encred back to the beginning of the day. And then the metallic ringing dispelled the sleep again. Getting out of bed and beginning to bandage his hands, Encred told Ram that he had placed a bug in his boot. Shaking an insect out of his shoe, the disgruntled soldier asked if the commander had really gone completely crazy to have been making fun of him since the very beginning of the day. Encred, crushing a beetle that jumped out in front of him, told his subordinate to stop chatting and leave. The commander demanded to teach him the heart of the beast. The sun shone brightly, warming the air. A bare-chested ram swung an axe. Encred's gaze was fixed intently on his movements. The commander was able to avoid a side attack from a gun that passed within a millimeter of him. He was also able to successfully avoid the blow from above. Encred's reaction puzzled Rem. The soldier asked how his heart had become stronger, and the commander replied that he had trained, but the subordinate found it hard to believe because it was not something that could happen so quickly. But Ram did not know that it had already happened more than 10 times. The soldier said that there was no chance that his family's secret technique would be taught to anyone else. Encred agreed with this, because it was a feeling he learned from death. The commander asked what was so important about it. Maybe he learned it by accident. Suddenly, Encred froze in place, thinking about something. He then suggested that the soldier have another sparring session. The corner of Ram's lips lifted and he replied that it sounded interesting. Encred knew that even if he mastered the heart of the beast, he would simply be killed if he couldn't strike back. One attack after another, the commander continued to simply avoid. As he struck again, Rem asked how long Encred was going to dodge. The guy dodged the next attack too. The only technique Encred currently possessed was the sword technique of the mercenary Valen, an anomalous technique created by a mercenary known as Valen. Some people spoke badly of her and called her a petty trick, but still, among what Encred had, this technique was the most worthy. Rushing towards the enemy, Ram said that the commander's lower body was too weak. Pulling his elbow back, Encred got into a fighting stance. Seeing this, Rem became wary and took the enemy more seriously. Trying to repeat the blow of the knight who was killing him over and over again, Encred lunged. However, Rem easily knocked his sword out. While spinning, the weapon flew too far. Encred was surprised that he was able to imitate the villain's blow for a moment. Since he had died from the knight's blow dozens of times, his body remembered it. Scratching the back of his head, Ram said that there should have been a little blood from it, a statement that puzzled the boy. The soldier explained, "Of all the blows you showed me, this one was the most dignified, so it should be like this." with a little pressure, understand? Yes, your hand was bound to bleed. Rem noted that Encred doubted himself too much. The commander said that this attack could not be failed and asked what he should do after it was blocked. The soldier replied, "You should think, I can't escape this," and say, "Now you're going to die," which will convince you not to lose your grip on the sword. As Encred looked at his hand, he thought that although Rem had explained it poorly, he seemed to understand what was being discussed. There was a difference between Encred's blow and that knight's blow. The commander had no confidence in his sword. He must have struck with the intent to kill. Thinking about this, Encred made another lunge with a shout. His sword was knocked out of his hand again. Before my eyes, there was always a knight who said that he would be merciful to the commander, after which he pierced his opponent again. Encred was sure that even one step forward, no, even if only a quarter of a step, he would advance. His attempts to survive still ended in death. On both the 111th and 123rd day, the enemy knight killed Encred, saying that he would be merciful to him. On day 124, the commander continued training with Rem. The soldier parried Encred's thrust again. However, this time the sword did not fly out of the guy's hand. Rem asked if the captain had gone crazy. Encred's hands were so exhausted that blood was gushing from them. The soldier asked why the commander was laughing like a madman. Encred was glad that he had finally mastered his enemy's strike. Now he himself attacked the enemy, a little faster, with the intention of killing. He lunged, but the sword only slid across the helmet. After this, the enemy again injured Encred's neck. The commander's first attempt to attack failed, but he promised himself he wouldn't blink. He promised that he would not lower his sword. Everything that happened, from every blow of their swords to this maneuver, it was all in Encred's head. Stepping on the commander's chest, the knight said again that the boy must have been in a lot of pain. Again, the enemy raised his sword over him and said that he would be merciful. But with his next words, Encred puzzled the winner. He declared that he would definitely kill the knight tomorrow, and it was all in his head. Smiling broadly and grinning, the enemy said that there was no tomorrow for the dead, and then pierced Encred's chest. The amulet was once again working as it was supposed to. The beetle, trying to overtake the commander, was crushed by a boot. Holding onto the hilt of his sword, Encred explained that he had seen the insect crawl into Rem's shoes. The soldier thanked him for this, and Encred replied that if Rem was grateful, then he should have taken on the duties of the security commander himself. The surprised soldier wondered why the commander was ordering him so habitually. Today was the 125th day, and the guy decided to better prepare for the fight. So he turned to the guy with red hair who was wiping his face with a towel. He asked this big-eyed guy to get him armor, a shield and a dagger, promising to pay for them later, which the guy didn't like too much. Encred quickly walked away, and the guy shouted after him that he would believe him only because he was the boss, and explained that he usually did not provide such services. And Rem, who approached him, asked if the commander had been so impudent with his subordinates before. Sitting nearby, Jackson noted that they always dumped their tasks on the commander and called them weaklings, which somewhat angered Ram, who began to make threats. 2 more soldiers approached them, one of whom said that he was sending his blessings to his comrade, and Rem thought that the commander really was acting strangely. Encred wasn't usually this tense. The commander felt incredible pain every time he died. He wondered what would happen if he could never win even after 1,000 or tens of thousands of tries. What happens if he doesn't find a way to avoid the blow and survive? Should he go to sleep and wake up tomorrow, or will he still wake up in this day? Now he was stronger than before, which could well be a reason for joy. But this choice was not for him. Encred had to get past this wall. He had to learn how to strike, so he practiced his attacks on a tree. Encred had no intention of giving up his dream. Before the battle, he donned the armor provided by his comrade and took up a shield. He was given a blessing, and he had to move forward. People blew horns to announce the upcoming battle. Encred's squad was also preparing for this battle. The men were stretching their muscles and bandaging their hands. And so a fierce battle began, where no mercy could be expected. Encred, a man with no skills, was able to survive this battle thanks to 3 things. It was preparation, luck, and calm. On the 46th day, the commander's shoulder was broken by a spiked mace. On the 47th day, he turned to avoid a mace, but someone smashed his head. Encred learned to dodge in order to kill his opponent first. On the 71st day, the soldier cut off his leg, so he could do nothing to this man. On the 89th day, his head was split open by someone throwing an axe. Encred knew that if he left the enemy alive, he would hinder him in the battle with the main enemy, so leaving him alive was not an option. The commander had been practicing throwing weapons for countless days, so it wasn't difficult. After all this, Val found himself right behind the commander. The man saved his subordinate from an arrow and from an attacker from behind. Then came a sniper called Hawksclaw, but Encred had no time for him. It's time to hit the wall. Here, Encred and the enemy knight stood opposite each other again. Without a moment's hesitation, the enemy attempted to strike. However, the commander stopped him with his shield. Dodging and striking alone did not give Encred any chance of winning. In front of him was an ordinary soldier, but even so, the knight was strong, almost at the level of a gifted one. When the commander stopped the next attack with his sword, the enemy thought, "It looked like he was attacking me," but instead, he simply blocked the blow. Encred guessed that the man lacked experience in real combat, so he was easily surprised. And it was at that moment that the commander hit his opponent with his head. Mercenary Valen's sword technique, with its many variations, was effective against him. The knight began to miss attacks, trying to defend himself at least with his hand. Raising his sword back, the commander jumped towards the enemy. The knight, not at a loss, also tried to strike, making a lunge. However, the tip of the sword could not reach Encred's neck. By inertia, the enemy moved forward, and the commander found himself behind him. The angry knight, with bloodlust in his eyes, turned sharply to Encred. Then he made another lunge, the deadly one. Now the commander knew everything about this strike. Confident, Encred decided to parry the attack. When the enemy's blade touched the commander's sword, it shattered into pieces. At that moment, an archer was aiming straight at Encred. Then he released the bowstring, and the arrow headed towards the target. The shocked knight dropped the rest of his sword. Encred was confident that he had finally won. Lightning fast, the arrow covered the distance between them, approaching Encred from behind. However, she was unable to reach the commander's back. It was broken into two parts by a hatchet thrown by Rem. Now it was Encred's turn to kill his opponent. An angry Ram screamed that he would kill this claw, and Jackson said that it was too late, and there was no point in wasting his energy. The knight's neck was bleeding from the sword thrust into it. Now it was not Encred who had to come to terms with death, but his opponent. The other soldiers were still fighting each other. Breathing heavily and sweating, the commander loomed over the defeated man. Still alive, the exhausted knight knelt and grinned at Encred. He saw the soldier raise his sword. At this point, the commander said that he would be merciful to the enemy, after which he swung his sword and cut off the knight's head. A wide smile of joy appeared on Encred's face. Finally, he was able to break through this wall. But in the end, everything turned out to be much more complicated than the soldier thought. Encred was suddenly thrown back by a humanoid creature. Falling on his side and apparently breaking his arm, the boy cried out in pain. Seeing this, Rem rushed to the commander. He shouted that this humanoid was a frog. The humanoid stood next to Encred, who was lying on the ground holding his arm, groaning in pain. The frog had put in a lot of effort to raise this knight, and now this creature could not believe that someone like the commander had managed to defeat him. Without saying anything, Encred continued to grunt and grin. Wishing the soldier's death, the humanoid swung at the commander. However, Rem stood up to defend him and knocked the weapon away. Then the subordinate struck back, but the frog warrior was able to stop this. So they continued to attack each other, parrying blows. Taking advantage of the moment, one of the enemy soldiers raised a spear over Encred, intending to kill him. However, Jackson arrived in time and cut off his head. Neither the frog nor Ram could defeat each other. They pulled away from each other and stopped for a moment. Ram said that if the humanoid wanted to cut off their commander's head, he would have to go through him first. The surprised humanoid asked if it was really this weakling who was the commander, and not Ram. A warrior race the frogs were born to kill, and could either be burned with magic or pierced through the heart with a single blow. The man didn't understand why there was someone like that at this insignificant battle. To kill the humanoid, Rem had to put his own life on the line, but he still believed that the battle was worth it. Suddenly, the humanoid straightened up, coming out of his fighting stance. Then, for some reason not wanting to kill the soldier, he turned away altogether and walked away. Rem called him a coward, but sighed with relief. Jackson was flying towards another enemy warrior. Standing behind him, Rem cut off his opponent's head. One enemy was dealt with, but another one tried to attack Jackson. Destroying one enemy after another comrade from their squad approached them. The battle became more and more difficult, and the enemy soldiers seemed to never end. Encred's men huddled together as the enemies surrounded them. Encred was still lying on the ground, unable to get up. Someone commanded the army to retreat. Feeling helpless, the commander just closed his eyes. And yet this time, Encred managed to defeat his main opponent in this battle. The drop hit the water's surface, creating new splashes. And again, the commander found himself in this place where the carrier said that he was destined to live for a day. And that was all. Karen stated that Encred would not be able to cope with the walls that would appear in its path. It was his destiny to despair and give up. However, the commander did not like this. He rose, leaning on his knee. Encred stated that walls were meant to be climbed. Karen smiled wickedly and said that he would look forward to the moment when those eyes, filled with joy and ambition, would finally lose their shine. This time the commander woke up completely bandaged and without the metallic ringing. Finally, the place of his awakening changed. He wanted to know where he was and was told that it was the hospital. Sitting next to him, a member of the 4th Squad, Rem, explained that Encred had been sleeping for 2 whole days. He also said that he saved the commander from that damn frog and asked if Encred remembered it too. As the man sat up, he felt a pain in his chest and thought that it was amazing that he survived, since there was this frog at the end. The soldier explained that the commander's bones were not broken, although they said his head was shaking badly, so he asked if his comrade remembered him, his best friend. Encred replied to the noble hunter that he never said they were friends. At that moment, Rem covered Encred's mouth, demanding that he remain silent. He looked around to see if anyone else in the room had heard it. Rem explained that just because it was a secret of someone Encred had nothing to do with, didn't mean the commander could just blab about it. And the boy, pushing his hand away, asked him to decide whether the subordinate was his best friend or someone Encred had nothing to do with. A new day came after today. The commander still managed to survive. The red-haired boy, a member of the 4th Squad, Kreis, demanded that the commander return him 3 times as much and asked if he knew how much the soldier himself had spent to get the commander to this place. And Encred had previously been surprised why an ordinary soldier like him, who would have simply gone to the tent himself, ended up in the infirmary. The commander noted that Kreis seemed to be nowhere to be seen during the battle, as always. Smiling good-naturedly, the soldier replied that he would give Encred a special discount, and just for him, so the man could simply pay double the amount. It was already getting dark, and the sky above the hospital was turning crimson. The commander was visited by a member of his squad, Jackson. Relaxing on the bed, Encred asked what happened, if he had business with him. Then it was worth starting to talk. Then the soldier silently threw a round box to the commander. As he left the tent, the man said to apply it twice a day, morning and evening, and not to ask where he got it from. Inside the jar was the ointment that Jackson used, which seemed strange to Encred since this soldier was someone who didn't like to share personal things. Even later, the commander was visited by a sorrowfully crying Auden. Such a presence, filled with sadness, brought discomfort to Encred. He suggested that the soldier just leave, since he was not dead yet. Finally, night came, but Encred still did not sleep. The commander tried to understand what was happening, whether the members of the detachment were really working in shifts after all this, when they were busy with their own affairs. Closing his eyes, he assumed that his subordinates might be worried about him. Another member of the squad entered the room, pulling back the curtain and biting into an apple. But what he saw here surprised him a little. Ranga asked why the commander was in the infirmary. Without waiting for an answer, he headed back, waving his hand at the commander. Range, as usual, didn't give a damn about anything. That was the kind of person he was. Besides Encred, there were 2 more soldiers in the infirmary. One was a platoon commander from another company who entered the battle with the 4th Detachment. The other was a soldier whose name the commander did not know and who spent his time forever staring into space. He looked like a man of low rank, so Encred wondered how he got to this place. Their attention was drawn to the unexpected guest. It was a fair-haired elf dressed in armor with a sword on her belt. She asked who was the commander of the 4th Squad. Encred was surprised by this, not understanding why such a girl was looking for him. One of the men was amazed that a fairy appeared before them. She asked what group he was from, and the soldier replied that he was Vergens, commander of the 3rd Platoon, in the 2nd Company. The girl asked if this was really how their company taught them to declare their race when meeting their superiors. The man lowered his head and asked for forgiveness. Encred assumed that this fairy was the new commander of the 4th Company. Then he replied that he was the commander of the 4th Detachment, 4th Platoon, 4th Company. The girl explained that people said he worked well with difficult squad members, so she expected his assistance. Then the fairy turned around and walked away, and the guy was surprised that she came here just to say that. But then the girl suddenly stopped. The new commander asked who the 3rd soldier in the infirmary was. Nervously, he replied that his name was Krang. Encred felt like the man had just made up that name. His behavior in front of the company commander was simply terrible. Encred wondered if this man was a nobleman. The fairy only remained silent, giving Krang a gloomy look, after which she simply left the infirmary room. Encred looked after her with some doubt. The dark night was driven away by the sun rising from behind the mountain. Encred clenched and unclenched his hand, from which the bandages had been removed, checking its functionality. Most of the pain was gone, and now he could put strength into his body, which meant he should start training. As the commander began to put on his shoes, Vergens asked where he was going, and the boy replied that he was going to the training area. Calling him an idiot, Vergen said that he acted so cool when he was just a low-ranking soldier. Krang, as usual, did not say a word. The sun made the metal of the blade shine. Encrid needed to remember the last battle. It was one of the most useful methods. The commander spent a lot of money to master it when he was young. He thought about the last-minute strike, about what would happen if his last attack failed. However, he knew that it wasn't the best idea to put his strength into just one thing. If that one attack failed, he would die. If all of Rem's axe attacks were lethal, the commander wondered what the next move would be if Encrid struck with his sword with all his might. Suddenly, someone interrupted his thoughts, noting that he had been working hard. It was Krang who noted that he didn't know what the commander was doing in the barracks. His hands were twitching all the time, and now he was just here. Encrid explained that he did this to train his grip strength, and he repeated the battle. The soldier asked why this was necessary, and the commander replied that he did not want to screw up. Krang asked what would happen next, whether Encrid wanted to become someone while keeping his life. Encrid thought about who he wanted to become. As soon as he voiced his dream, the people around him immediately burst into laughter, a dream he had already satisfied with his low talent. But the man never stopped carrying it out. Raising his sword to the sky, Encrid nevertheless voiced that he would like to become a knight. In Krang's eyes, one could see surprise, and perhaps even admiration. Encrid admitted that it was the first time he had seen someone who didn't laugh after his words. Rising to his feet, the soldier said he had simply forgotten, but suddenly remembered something. Heading in the opposite direction, Krang said that after looking at the commander, he understood what he needed to do. This was the first time Encrid felt supported. Krang said, "If you become a knight, remember my name, friend." To the sounds of a musical instrument, the soldiers discussed this battle, discussed Cypriot's victory in it. Vergens was indignant that they still hadn't received their food. After waking up in the infirmary and waiting for breakfast, Encrid took a short leisurely walk instead of going to the training room, and on the way he met Jackson, who asked the commander how his injuries were. He replied that the medicine worked well and thanked his comrade. Jackson said that if the commander was grateful, he should have hurried and returned. Night fell, and the darkness in the hospital room was dispelled by the weak light of candles. As he lay down in bed, Krang wished Encrid good night. Wishing the same for the soldier, the commander decided to go to bed early. At that moment, Vergens, who was already trying to sleep, demanded that they shut up. This day turned out to be a day of idleness for the commander. Early in the morning, he woke up to the sounds of contentment and realized that the wandering minstrel had come to them again. The commander wondered why this man was here a second time if he needed to travel. Vergens was again indignant. Why they didn't bring breakfast? Did these people really plan to eat everything themselves and feed the wounded with the leftovers? Encrid was unhappy that the soldier was so damn loud and said the same thing as yesterday. And at that moment, he realized the catch. These guesses caused a cold sweat to appear on the commander's skin. Walking through the camp, he again ran into Jackson, who asked how his wounds were. The commander answered him the same as last time. His comrade's answer also did not change. Now Encrid was sure that it was the same day as yesterday. He remembered Karen saying that another wall would stop him, so he should try to survive. The commander assumed that he had died in his sleep without even noticing it. This time he died more hopelessly than when he received the sword blow, and this made the commander feel terrible. Another test made him more determined. A weak candle flame flickered in the dark room. Lying on the bed, Encrid wondered who killed him and how. The enemies had to go through all their defenses to get to the infirmary, which meant that only knights could do it. However, this was unlikely, so the commander assumed that there was an assassin hiding among them. He knew the location of the infirmary and was skilled at hiding his presence. He was someone who was a professional in covert assassinations. The fairy's quiet, light step was ideal for stealth assassinations. Encrid assumed that the reason the new company commander came that day was to gather information. The boy needed to see his killer to confirm his suspicions. There was only one entrance to the infirmary. The soldier could prevent his death by screaming and waking the others when he saw it. He lay on the bed and tried not to close his eyes even for a millisecond, setting his goal to wait for the assassin. But suddenly something thin pierced his neck. He became nervous, realizing that it was a poison dart. Groaning, the commander tried to grab his wound. With great difficulty, the soldier was only able to roll out of bed. He could neither move nor speak. It was a powerful, paralyzing poison, and now the commander knew exactly how he died without even realizing it. The other soldiers in this chamber were not spared either. Vergens was also killed with a dart. There was a man in a robe standing above Krang, mentally insulting the killer and holding his neck. Encrid tried his best to keep his head up so he could see what was happening. Krang was in a deep sleep and heard nothing as the assassin raised his sword over him. His eyes opened only after the tip pierced his chest. Encred was angry to see his comrade's life drained away, but the commander could do nothing about it. Then the fabric of the tent was cut by the sword of another man in a robe. The killer was calm, which meant that he did not work alone, and the one who entered was his accomplice. The man's head was pressed to the ground, but he could still look at these people. The second assassin had blonde hair, pointed ears, and a sword with a hilt that looked as if the tree itself had wrapped around it. This served as proof of Encred's suspicions. One of the killers was indeed a company commander. Playing the liar, the minstrel asked the soldiers who the hero of the battle was, and they exclaimed that it was Cypriot. Encred sat on the bed, leaning on his knees, the same morning repeated 3 times in a row. The commander didn't sleep a wink, but still couldn't sense the alien presence. Even if he managed to stop the killers, he would have to immediately face the company commander. The man was overcome by a disgusting feeling of helplessness. He felt the same way a few days ago, on those same recurring days when he had to fight with the knight on the battlefield, suffering defeat. But despite this, in the end, it was Encred who won. The commander was confident that he would definitely be able to find a way if he did not give up. After some thought, the man tore the blanket off Vergence. The soldier, dissatisfied with this, shouted and asked if the commander had really gone crazy. Encred realized that he had probably been mistaken in thinking that the assassins had already infiltrated the base by this point. He decided that he should have checked outside, and a disgruntled Vergence asked the madman if catching cockroaches with a sword was really part of Encred's stupid training. The man grinned and said that it suited him just fine, since Encred was a failed soldier. The commander replied that he did not know that Vergence was so worried about him. The man, indignant, explained that it was sarcasm. But he didn't realize that Encred's answer was also completely saturated with sarcasm. The soldier was demanding that the commander finally leave the infirmary since he couldn't stand him. Krang entered the tent and asked if they had been arguing again. He also asked if he should have come later. Encred replied that everything was fine and allowed the soldier to enter, and Vergence, outraged by these 2 guys, went back to bed. Encred glanced sideways at Krang, who was tidying up the bed. Considering how closely the assassins were watching this guy, the commander was sure that he was their target. This soldier was acting strangely, and Encred wondered who he was. The commander didn't want to get to the man if he himself didn't want to tell anything. Encred had no intention of acting like those crazy soldiers in his unit. But thanks to this soldier, he was drawn into the murder, so he decided to ask directly. Encred asked Krang who he was. The guy turned to him and confused him with his silence. The commander wondered if he had expressed himself incorrectly. Perhaps his communication skills were no different from those of Ram. After repeating Encred's question, Krang thought for a moment. Then he said he couldn't answer that question. Encred asked why this was so, and the soldier explained that it was a long story. The commander didn't know how to make the guy answer his question. Yet he accepted such an answer, which outraged Vergence. The soldier asked if they were making fun of him. He didn't understand why Encred had to ask such a thing if he was going to accept that answer anyway. Vergence stated that Krang was definitely from another country. It was enough to look at his manners. He demanded an honest answer and asked what country Krang was spying for. But just one glance from his comrade made Vergence nervous. Krang walked towards his comrade, who began to cover himself with a blanket. The soldier declared that he had never betrayed and would never betray the kingdom. It was evident in his eyes and in his movements. Krang had an aura similar to that of a knight. Vergence was indignant, stuttering. He asked if that was how one spoke to a superior in rank, in response to which the soldier only laughed. Encred doubted that this man was a knight because he was also helpless before the assassins. However, he was definitely hiding something. Encred and Krang said goodnight to each other. Vergence, as before, wanted to say something about this, but in the end he suddenly changed his mind and only coughed. Since Vergence was unusually quiet, the commander realized that Krang had scared him. Then his gaze fell on the entrance to the infirmary. He knew that if the assassins had broken in, the soldiers would all have died. Encred rose from his bed, which puzzled Vergence. The soldier asked what the commander was doing instead of sleeping. Encred replied that assassins were about to burst into the tent, and if the man wanted to survive, he had to cooperate. Vergence looked at the commander doubtfully. Turning away and settling down more comfortably, he said that the commander must have gone completely mad. Krang was completely calm and did not pay attention to this conversation. However, this was exactly the reaction Encred expected. Suddenly, someone outside the tent asked how the commander had noticed this, after which the tent fabric tore and Encred's neck was wounded. He couldn't understand when the assassins managed to get close to them. After Encred, the killer wounded Vergence in the neck, who didn't even have time to get out of bed. He then jumped on Krang and immobilized him, piercing him through the chest. And again, Encred failed to do anything. Now the fourth morning of the same day had arrived, and since there was no evidence that the killers would come, he could not get help from Vergence and Krang, so he decided to report everything to the leadership in order to get reinforcements. However, the management did not believe this either, and only threatened him. Then Encred thought that perhaps he could predict when the assassins would attack and scream before anything happened. Crouched at the entrance to the infirmary, the commander wondered whether he should shout now or later. Finally, the soldier decided that it was time and tried to scream, but suddenly a blade passed through his neck. Blood gushed from his throat, preventing the man from saying anything. These assassins were too fast. The commander could not get help from others, so he decided to catch the killers by surprise before they did anything. However, it was difficult to fight an enemy you didn't even see. While he was unable to even see them, they saw everything. It was clear that until Encred could avoid their poisoned darts, he would die without the ability to do anything. Here comes the 20th morning of repetitions. Encred was unhappy that he couldn't do anything at all. However, he still did not lose hope. The commander thought that he had died only 20 times. First, he had to figure out a way to dodge the poisoned darts, and then figure out how to deal with the rest. A quicker way to avoid attacks than their eyes could detect was Jackson. Encred asked Ram why Jackson was called a perverted wildcat. The soldier was surprised by this question, and the commander explained that this is what everyone in his unit called this guy. Ram replied that Jackson was a fucking dirty pervert. He never fought the enemy directly and preferred to stab them in the back and run away. The soldier asked if it reminded Encred of a perverted wildcat. Believing that this soldier could easily defeat the killers, the commander again came to Jackson, who asked if his wounds were okay. However, Encred knew that he could not take him with him because he did not have enough authority. Even if he could, he would have to climb that wall himself. In that case, he himself decided to become Jackson. Turning to the soldier, Encred asked if someone like Jackson were to stab him in the back, what the commander should do to prevent it. After thinking about it, the guy replied that he didn't even know that, because no one had ever survived his ambush. This answer stunned the commander, and his enthusiasm sharply diminished. The commander looked intently at the soldier, and Jackson realized that they would not leave him alone. The soldier rose from the box with a sigh. He said that Encred needed eyes in the back of his head back then. The commander did not understand this statement. Life in the military camp was in full swing, and Encred asked what kind of eyes on the back of his head his comrade was talking about. Jackson then asked if the commander had seen the cart behind the tents. Surprised, Encred couldn't understand how the soldier managed to notice something so far away. He wondered if Jackson really did have eyes in the back of his head. With his eyes closed, the soldier said that she was about to fall apart. Then a wheel actually bounced off the cart and a man fell off it. The amazed commander asked if Jackson was some kind of prophet. He asked them to stop making fun of him and asked how the soldier knew about the breakdown of the cart. Jackson replied that Encred seemed to have spent too much time with the savage. He explained that he determined this by hearing. The soldier heard the cart's axle creaking. When you hear what's going on around you, you can predict what will happen next. Encred was surprised that Jackson heard such a quiet sound because he didn't even hear the cart drive up. And the soldier said that, in fact, you didn't need your sight to understand what was happening around you. As an exercise, he suggested trying to listen to the surrounding world, concentrate and isolate sounds. Encred noted that Jackson explained it well, and before it seemed to him that the soldier was too lazy to even answer him normally. Jackson explained that he wasn't lazy, but it was better than having his commander following him around. Lately, it seemed to him that Encred would stop at nothing, and now that ill-fated night has come again. The commander lay on the bed with his eyes closed and tried to listen to everything. He stood before the second wall in the form of a faceless death. He had a chance to survive if he could feel her. Encred heard the usual footsteps that belonged to the patrolmen and the crackling of torches. But the assassin's approach was still out of his reach. Encred was still tormented by the question of where the killer was. It seemed as if the assassin moved silently. The dart was again thrust into the commander's throat. It was obvious that he had failed. Encred didn't move a single step, but his body remembered everything clearly. It remembered the learning experience, the beast's heart, and the lunge. Jackson explained that a lot of information could be gleaned from a single sound, depending on how loud it was and where it was coming from, allowing one to determine the location of the target. And when the commander could distinguish barely noticeable distant sounds, his ears would become a second pair of eyes. Suddenly, the soldier raised his hand and snapped his fingers. He explained that sound is a wave, and a wave spreads in all directions no matter how quiet it is. In the chaos of 1,000 sound waves, the commander had to single out just one. Walking through the noisy camp, Encred heard many sounds among the voices of soldiers talking to each other about something. He wondered what sounds were mixed in the web of waves. He needed to hear, isolate, and categorize each one. The flags still sounded like one big flag to him. He couldn't determine their exact number. From the sounds of footsteps, the commander was able to determine that 3 soldiers were closer to him, and 2 were further away. According to Jackson, the commander was trying hard to feel the waves, hear familiar and unfamiliar sounds. Suddenly, Krang called out to him, calling him Enki. He asked the commander what kind of training it was. Encred asked why Krang called him Enki. The soldier explained that such an abbreviation was quite suitable for the commander's name, although Encred himself did not agree with it, but still allowed him to be called that. He then said that he was just sitting there like a fool and asked if Krang thought it looked like training. The soldier noted that the commander would not waste time. Encred looked at Krang, who seemed to know him well enough. Unfortunately, the commander still hadn't mastered his hearing well enough, so a dart was thrust into his neck again. Encred saw again how Krang's flesh was cut by the sword. And when the blade was pulled out, the fair-haired guy was coughing up cow's cough in agony. It was the 33rd morning, and the commander was again faced with another failure. On the 34th day, the commander again heard nothing. So failure followed failure. Encred continued to sit in the middle of the camp, trying to determine the number of flags by ear. He understood that experience would not help him overcome this wall, just like heavenly providence or sudden revelation. He just had to do what he had to do over and over again. He heard a bird landing on the flag's peak. The sound was almost as quiet as the assassin's footsteps. As Encred approached him, the commander opened his eyes. The surprised soldier noted that he was trying to sneak up on the commander and asked how the man knew he was coming. Krang noted that the commander had been sitting like that with his eyes closed for a long time and asked if he had trained his attentiveness. The soldier noted that the commander was not a fool and did not waste his time. Once again, the killer tried to throw a poisoned dart at the commander. However, Encred was now trained enough to move away in time. The commander then grabbed the knife that was under his pillow. When the assassin tried to throw his dagger at him, the soldier managed to duck. The assassin who fell to the ground was frightened. He did not even suspect that anyone could resist him. The killer's face was frozen in horror, and Encred said that now this man was no longer a faceless death. Jumping to his feet, the assassin called the commander a rat. Encred realized that this assassin was clearly not as good at fighting as that death-obsessed knight. This meant that Encred could handle it quite well. The commander looked at the rest of those present. Vergence, who had not even gotten out of bed, lay unconscious due to the poisoned dart. Krang, who had jumped to his feet, was still alive and grabbed his sword, preparing to defend himself. The commander understood that he could not relax his vigilance. After all, this man whose blow Encred dodged was an experienced killer. Since the blow was useless, the assassin decided to throw another dagger at the commander. Even though Encred tried to avoid being wounded, the dagger still scratched his chest. Since the commander was still on his feet, the killer rushed towards him. At that very moment, the sword cut through the fabric of the tent, after which the company commander appeared to him. He understood that if he didn't strike first, he would die. Avoiding the assassin, Encred rushed towards the girl. However, the assassin who appeared behind him fired several darts at once, asking if the commander really had any security. The darts flew in all directions, heading towards both Encred and Krang. The alarmed Krang would hardly be able to fight this off, so he could only mechanically cross his arms in front of himself. At that moment, the fairy headed towards the assassin, passing the commander. In just one moment, the girl stopped the darts, catching them with her red cloak, thus saving the boys. Encred thought the company commander was the killer's accomplice, but it turned out she came to cover for them. Encred opened up to the assassin. He knew that, whatever the case, this was his chance. He held out his dagger and rushed towards the killer. Once close enough, the commander knocked the weapon out of the enemy's hand. Realizing his failure, the killer hurried to escape. He flew out of the tent in an instant, so the commander would hardly have been able to catch up with him. Since it was all over, the commander relaxed a little. Krang, who approached him, said that the assassin had most likely come for his soul, and the commander replied that that was what he understood. Surprised, Krang asked him how he figured that out. The commander replied that no one would hire an assassin to kill a worthless officer like him or Vergence, and the fairy confirmed this. Grabbing the hilt of the sword, the girl noted that Encred was quite smart. Seeing this gesture, the commander realized that no one was supposed to know about what had happened. He guessed that the fairy had no intention of leaving witnesses. The soldier was on guard. He was already preparing to fight the new enemy. However, Krang suddenly said that he had one request. He told the company commander that he wanted there to be no deaths today. The commander could only watch the fairy's reaction. Bowing, the girl replied that she would fulfill this request. Krang also wanted virgins to be okay. He asked if the soldier was still alive, and the fairy replied that they had an antidote, so he should be okay. Encrid guessed that this girl was knowledgeable about poisons. Krang said that now they had to clean up the mess, because if people found out that a killer had visited here, there would hardly be any problems to avoid. The most important thing was that no traces were left. The commander already had a simple solution for this. In the middle of the night, the hospital was engulfed in flames. Worried soldiers carried buckets of water to put out the fire in the tent. Someone noticed the two survivors, which were virgins, still unconscious, and Encrid. Now all traces of the assassin were covered up. The rest had to deal with the consequences. Krang walked through the forest with a bag in his hand, and a fairy followed him, who said that if that squad leader had not intervened, the guy would have died. The girl asked if Krang had changed his mind because of him, and the man confirmed this, asking if she had thought Encrid was an interesting guy. In response to this, the fairy only remained silent and looked away. Krang, however, was thinking that he was trying to avoid this. The moment when the commander was training hard in the early hours of the morning flashed before his eyes. Stopping, Krang said that it must have been Enki who had influenced him so. Walking towards the sun, he said that they would meet again under appropriate conditions. Encrid managed to change the outcome of his life again. The commander stood on the water's surface in front of Karen's boat. The carrier said that he still had to meet the guy, and the guy replied that he was ready for this meeting at any moment. The commander was again faced with the repeated today. He survived a silent death and woke up to a new day. Encrid felt the presence of almost everything around him, but he did not notice that fairy. He still had a lot to do upon returning to the squad. Fortunately, the commander was not injured, so he could leave immediately. Vergens, who was sitting nearby, asked why Encrid had pulled him out of the fire. The commander was unhappy that this soldier was still picking on the fact that he was saved. Encrid did not understand how he had offended Vergens so much. The commander explained that he had saved him because they were comrades, and asked if another reason was needed. After these words, Vergens felt disgusting. After all the bad things Encrid said, the commander, without thinking, pushed back the date of his death, for which the soldier called him a selfless bastard. He then asked if the commander was returning to the detachment, to which the man answered positively. Vergens noted that today was an unlucky day for Encrid, as it was not the best day in his squad. The commander asked what had happened, and the soldier told him about rumors that the camp was cursed. Insulting his comrade, Ranga said that he was not joking with him. After these words, he grabbed Ram by the shoulder. However, after such impudence, the man lifted him above himself. The knights nearby hurried to get as far away as possible from the members of the 4th Detachment who had started a fight again. People wondered where their commander was, because these soldiers constantly started a fight in his absence. Ram threw Ranga into someone's tent, causing a hole in it. Someone shouted in displeasure, and he was told not to come near or he would be beaten too. Ranga stood up and threw a box at his comrade, who broke it with a kick. Then Ranga was hit in the face with a fist. Grabbing the axes, Rem threw threats towards his comrade. Those around him, seeing the weapon in his hands, shouted for everyone to hide quickly. Ranga also responded to his comrade with a threat, armed with a sword, while the other soldiers asked at least someone to stop these two. Encrid arrived just as the boxes and other objects were being blown to pieces. He didn't know what was up with that damn camp, but those scumbags could very well be considered Encrid's personal curse. As the man approached, he commanded them to go to their places. Rem asked how long he had been there, and Ranga admitted that he thought the commander had died long ago. Encrid replied that the soldier would not live to see that, although his head could easily fly off because of the two of them. 4 days have passed since Encrid returned to the squad. He lay on the bed, still in a doze. Hearing someone's footsteps, he immediately opened his eyes. However, in front of him was not an enemy, but only Jackson. The soldier explained that he wanted to leave quietly and asked if it was he who woke up the commander. Getting out of bed, Encrid gave a negative answer and explained that he was going to get up and go train anyway. Jackson noted that Encrid had started relatively recently, but had already developed his hearing quite well. The commander replied that he had been practicing. Praising Encrid for his success, the soldier said that one day it would save the commander. As winter approached, battles became less frequent. The commander believed that it was necessary to make the most of free time and train. One of these workouts was one-arm pull-ups on a tree branch. Someone wished good morning to Brother Commander. It was Auden doing push-ups with a boulder on his back. The soldier asked if Encrid had returned from morning training, and he noted that the commander had not wasted his time. Then Auden decided to get up and threw the stone off himself. The man said it was very good. Towering over the commander, Auden declared that a trained body was a weapon in itself. This muscular soldier was several heads taller than the commander, and smiling good-naturedly, he said that one had to be able to withstand a blow from a frog. He advised Encrid to continue to pump up since the commander was still too thin. Thinking that it was probably Auden who had been pumped up, Encrid replied that he would try to do so. Then the soldier mentioned the exercises he had told the boy about earlier. An angry ram kicked Ranga off the bed. He was unhappy that his comrade, whose turn it was to cook the food, was still lying down and sleeping. Finding himself on the floor on all fours, Ranga crawled to a nearby sword and grabbed the hilt. Then, standing up abruptly and swinging his sword, Ranga advised the soldier to eat some fried nails. Ram looked at his comrade with disdain, expecting another fight. However, their quarrel was interrupted by Encrid and Auden entering the tent, and the commander asked if they had really been fighting again. Encrid told them to calm down, and Auden noted that senseless violence would solve nothing. Pointing his thumbs at Ranga, Ram replied that this soldier would starve them to death. The commander said that since it was Rangi's turn, he should start cooking, but the soldier did not object. Insulting his comrade and handing him towels, Rem asked what all this was for if he was going to go cook anyway. Throwing aside the towels, an agitated Ranga told him to leave him alone, claiming that the soldier stank. After sniffing the fabric, a puzzled Ram said that it smelled quite normal, and Encrid asked him to stop picking a fight for no reason, and asked if he was really bored. Rem replied that his hands were itching to fight. The commander advised not to take it out on the first person he came across and suggested sparring. The previously clear sky was covered with rain clouds. At this moment, Encrid dodged Rem's attack. The soldier advised him to take the blow better. Then he chopped with his axe so hard that the commander almost dropped his sword. Encrid tried to stay calm with the help of the beast's heart. He also decided to use his hearing to block blows. What followed was what he trained at the cost of hundreds of deaths. Rem was already prepared for this blow. Encrid used the same lunge that had belonged to the enemy knight earlier, but the soldier avoided it by leaning back. Then Rem made a movement with his hand so that the axe caught the sword. With the blade neutralized, the man grabbed Encrid by the collar. Still holding the commander like that, the soldier said that he had expected more, since he had been doing much better lately. Rem wondered why the commander had suddenly become so boring. The same attack was already starting to bore him. The soldier asked if there would be something new. Encrid rose, leaning on his sword, now realizing that he had become different. From now on, in order to improve, the commander was able to repeat everything hundreds of thousands of times. Encrid asked to spar again, promising that this time he would give the soldier what he deserved. RM realized that Encrid's skills were clearly lacking. However, the soldier would never get tired of this purposeful look of the commander. He said that Encrid would have been able to talk like that if he had left even a scratch on Rem. Suddenly, large drops began to fall from the sky. Under these conditions, the men decided not to continue sparring. They hurried back to their squad's chamber. Standing at the entrance, Encrid reflected on how the rain began and ended whenever it pleased. Covering himself with a blanket and examining his foot, Rem said that soon mushrooms would start growing on his feet too. Ranga was half asleep, and Auden, sitting next to him on a chair, holding a cross in his hands, was praying to his god. A disgruntled Christ returned to the tent, wondering how many more times he would have to cancel fights because of rain. He was already ready to believe that they were cursed. Encrid asked what the soldier was talking about, and Christ asked if the commander didn't know about the rumors. Only now did the man remember that Vergens had already told him about something similar. Sitting down on the bed, Christ said that the weather was strange, the losses were increasing, and there was also a fire among the scouts. In particular, Beta, Jack Bow, and the Rotten One, they were all wounded, so the soldiers were chatting about the curse. Apparently, the guy himself didn't think they were actually cursed, but the capricious weather only added fuel to the fire. Encrid noted that the command would not leave something like this unattended. Drying his hair with a towel, Krace asked why the commander continued to stand at the entrance, and Encrid replied that he was training his senses. The guy was surprised that the commander was doing this in such a downpour, and the man replied that this was exactly why he trained them. A disgruntled Ram asked if Encrid really thought he was a wildcat. The soldier didn't understand what good it was, and Jackson, reading a book, noted that it was a good way to exercise. Encrid did well. Ram cast a puzzled look at his comrade. He asked what Jackson taught him, and since when the soldier cared about the commander's friend. But Jackson continued to ignore him, which angered Ram even more. But Encrid thought that this place was too noisy, so much so that he couldn't even hear the rain. Auden said that if the commander was thinking about training in a tent, some things could be done lying down, and Ranga asked if Encrid wanted him to take another look at the commander's stance. Looking around at his comrades, who were paying suspiciously much attention to the commander, Ram thought that they had noticed the same thing as he had. Encred was different from the simpleton he had been before. In one of the tents, someone was telling the commanders to keep an eye on their soldiers. Another reconnaissance detachment had to be equipped before winter set in, so the commander-in-chief was willing to listen to proposals to fill the gaps. As a candidate, the fairy proposed the commander of the 4th Detachment, 4th Platoon, 4th Clan. The commander-in-chief thought Encred was a useless guy, so he asked her if she was sure, because he would only get in the way of the scouts. The girl replied that this commander could bring unexpected results. She was asked why she thought so, and the girl replied that it was simply a fairy's intuition. The morning of a new day began not with rain clouds, but with a sunny dawn, and Krita was summoned by the commander of the 4th Company to tell her the news. He was surprised that he was sent to the scouts. When Kreis found out about this, he asked if Encred had done something to anger the company commander. The man asked why he decided so, and the guy sitting there asked why else the fairy would choose the commander. Encred wondered if the girl had been planning to finish him off when Krang left. Rem asked if the commander really was going to go on reconnaissance. He asked if the commander was aware that the soldier could help him get out of this mess. Encred replied that he, unlike Rem, would not allow himself to raise an axe against a superior in rank, and noted that a subordinate should not do such a thing either, and Rem explained that he would never have suggested such a thing. Turning away, Auden prayed to God not to take their dear commander. The commander was puzzled by such strange behavior of his subordinates. Ranga even suggested that Encred go instead of him. The commander replied that he might have sent others, but not Ranga. Jackson asked if management had told Encred that he would have to scout out the tall grass fields. He advised paying attention to changes in the noise of the grass and noticing interference. This was the first step in detecting an ambush. An indignant Ram stated that the cunning Jackson thought he could teach the commander something else. And once again, he demanded that the soldiers stop teaching Encred these strange things. The commander thought that when he left, there would be no one to separate them. He doubted whether he could leave them alone at all. But even Encred agreed that no one was better suited for these guys than him. After joining the service, due to the commander's lack of skills, he was constantly transferred back and forth to fill gaps in the units. The only thing he was useful for was becoming a commander of a squad of scum. When Jackson and Ram started fighting as usual and rushed towards each other with weapons, Encred stood between them. Putting out his hand in a stopping gesture, he asked the soldiers to calm down. Then Rem asked if Encred was brave or just a fool. Jackson said that he should thank the commander, because if he had not intervened, there would have been an extra hole in Ram's heart. And the disgruntled axe lover said that Jackson's head would have been the first to fly off his shoulders. Encred knew that these thugs were really capable, so it was impossible to lose them. Compared to them, the loss of a commander would not have much of an impact on the fighting force. There was no need for these sudden reflections. Encred knew what he was like in terms of abilities. He just needed to get stronger. The scouts went to the front, so the soldier could spend time training his senses. One of these scouts, addressing Encred as the commander of the scum squad, told him to get ready. Andrew Gardner stated that they may have been of the same rank. But Andrew was the commander of this reconnaissance unit, and if something was wrong, they could settle it with their fists. One of Gardner's subordinates asked if Andrew really thought that this man would have the courage to fight him, since he was from a detachment of outcasts. And another already asked whether this fool even knew which side of the sword to grab. Andrew said that of course he would try not to offend the outcast commander too much if he went out of his way to call Encred useless. Gardner said that his outcast squad existed solely because of the fighters. He then turned away from insulting Encred and said that when meeting an enemy, everyone should smash their skulls. Encred was unhappy that this commander was being too loud. He wondered if these people didn't understand what reconnaissance was. Andrew was still very inexperienced, so the outcast commander doubted whether the reconnaissance mission would be successful. One of the scouts noticed the tracks and called his commander. Andrew recognized that they belonged to a beast called Nu. Gardner suggested that they follow them so that they could have some shashlik that night. Encred knew that the Nu moved in groups of at least 20 individuals. He wondered if Gardner was serious about getting involved with them. The soldier didn't understand what was going on in the man's head. Another scout stated that it was not Nu, but a gazelle. Then the guy looked at Encred and became a little embarrassed. He understood that this soldier also considered the intelligence commander to be far from the best. A former hunter from a mountain village, Henry didn't bother much with the commander. He and Encred started chatting and soon became friends. Henry told them about the basics of hunting, which turned out to be quite useful. He said that usually in such fields, animals trampled their paths, and tomorrow he promised to tell them more about them. So they spent the whole day searching for non-existent Nu. The reconnaissance squad's time was wasted. They made a halt. And the reconnaissance commander, while everyone was sleeping, was nervous that they had not managed to find anything. He stubbornly believed that those tracks really belonged to New. He couldn't return to the camp empty-handed. He needed at least some results. Finally, morning came, and the reconnaissance detachment set out again. The commander stated that they were on site. The squad was supposed to inspect this area, Green Pearl, or useless field, overgrown with tall grass. This grass was actually even taller than the soldiers themselves. Andrew shouted that they would cross this field and find a detachment of enemy scouts, capture them, and take them back, for which they would be rewarded. Henry asked if they were seriously going there, since they were only supposed to reconnoiter up to the border. Calm Encrid noted that this was still an order from the squad leader. It was difficult to get through the tall chutes, so the outcast commander thought he would soon give up. Suddenly, Andrew took the matter seriously and didn't even complain. Henry noted that there was little animal droppings here, and Encrid asked what was wrong with that. The scout explained that this meant that the animals did not live here, in this place with a lot of food, which was completely at their disposal. And indeed, somewhere among the tall grass the enemy was hiding. Suddenly, someone's clawed paw fell to the ground. Encrid, hearing this, became alarmed. The next second, a blue-eyed panther rushed past him. Encrid placed his hand on Gardner's head and pressed it down, demanding that he duck. A second later, the heads of 2 men were pierced by bolts. Andrew shouted that they were enemies. Several enemy soldiers lurked in the grass, armed with crossbows. The reconnaissance commander gave the order to run, and everyone rushed away. The enemies caught up with the 2 scouts quite quickly, after which they cut their throats. Henry was killed next, and being armed with a bow, there was no way he could have fought back. Only Encrid was still alive, and he was being pursued by enemies from all sides. The commander of the outcasts ran as fast as he could, hoping not to be caught by the enemy. At that moment, he heard a crossbow being loaded. The instinct he learned from Jackson clearly helped, as he was able to avoid being hit. But it all only helped. In this chaos, Encrid could not figure out who was where. This time, it wasn't just one bolt that was aimed at him, but 11 at once. Encrid didn't have a chance. All 11 arrows hit their target and pierced the outcast commander through and through. When you know you're walking into an ambush, it makes sense to try to get around it. When Encrid tried to tell Andrew about the danger lurking in the tall grass, he realized that these people would never listen to him. He wondered if he would have to figure out how to save himself alone. Once again, the scouts were ambushed. Encrid tried to escape in different ways, but his enemies stopped him every time. And yet there was nothing terrible in this, because the commander of the outcasts could always find a new way. On his side was the repetition of today. 20 crossbowmen caught him in the east, and he died, riddled with bolts. He went north to avoid the crossbowmen, but met a detachment of spearmen. They did not stop pursuing even when Encrid managed to escape from everyone. Their uniforms were painted green, as if they were waiting for enemies. The soldier did not understand that it was even possible to guard this field in order to prepare like this. Somewhere among the grass he managed to see tents lit by a fire. Bloody, torn flags fluttered among them. When Encrid saw this, he was killed again by a sword thrust into his neck. At that moment, bleeding, he wondered what the Aspen bastards were hiding. As was the custom in a repeating day, Gardner said they would cross the field and catch the enemy scouts. They had already tried to do this dozens of times, but it was clear that if they entered, they would not get out alive. The Hispanas were clearly hiding something in this field, and the soldier made it his goal to find out what exactly. However, if he had given up on this mission, he wouldn't have had to die, and it could have ended today. However, such an easy path was not to the liking of the outcast commander. He decided that he would not back down under any circumstances. Suddenly, Encrid froze in place, and Andrew, calling him useless, asked who they were waiting for. One of the scouts said he understood the soldier. Andrew was getting on his nerves, but the outcast commander just had to tolerate it, since Gardner had his own problems, and Encrid asked why. Shaitan replied that he too had a limit to what he was now prepared to accept from Andrew. Then Encrid angered him by asking rudely if he was tired of sucking up to his childish commander. Placing his hand on the brown-haired man's chest, as if trying to push him away, Encrid said that he was no longer going to play these games. Gardner grabbed the hilt of his sword and asked if the soldier had refused to follow direct orders. Realizing that he needed to change the situation radically, the outcast commander said that disobedience could not be allowed, and from that moment on he would start giving orders. Encrid already knew that he couldn't survive alone, but they could get out by using each other's strengths. According to the soldier's observation, the commander of the scout detachment, Andrew Gardner, survived the longest, like that soldier and Henry. Encrid especially singled out the brown-haired man, who fought as powerfully as he looked. He was the most capable in the squad. despite the fact that he followed Andrew around. Perhaps he was like some kind of nanny or a kind of bodyguard. An angry gardener said that Encred could try to take command, but only if he could defeat him, of course. Noting all the details, the outcast commander looked at Andrew. He knew that ordinary soldiers did not have security. From Gardner's stance, it was obvious that he had been trained well, but with such skills he lacked experience. He must have been the son of some rich lord or something. However, in that case, he would not have been so eager to curry favor, so perhaps he was from some noble house in disgrace. Holding his sword forward, Andrew said that it was strange that Encred had achieved a command position based on his abilities. Apparently, he was one of those losers who hoped to get money and fame but didn't even train. Whoever this guy was, Encred could no longer follow his orders. Gardner shouted out that he was not like that at all. He had a mission. He wanted to say something else, but Encred interrupted him, saying that he was too talkative, waving his finger and stating that he wouldn't even need a sword. The soldier urged Andrew to attack. The embittered reconnaissance commander immediately rushed at the soldier. Encred knew that normally he would have a hard time dealing with such a capable guy, but Andrew underestimated him. Hasty action led to inattention, and inattention to failure. Encred simply pushed away the sword that Gardner thrust forward with his hand. This action, and did not immediately understand what to do next. But the commander of the outcasts immediately struck him with his elbow in the solar plexus. This made Gardner vomit everything he could. Andrew fell to all fours, clutching his stomach. The rest of the scouts were shocked that their commander could be defeated with just one blow. This was something unimaginable for the men, because they heard that Encred was sent to them only because there was no one else. The winner said that from that moment on the detachment would be under his command and asked if there were any objections. In response, the guys just bowed their heads. They had nothing more to say. This was the first step on the road to salvation. The reconnaissance detachment continued to make its way through the tall grass. One of the outraged scouts wondered what Encred was thinking. At this point, the outcast commander asked Henry what he dreamed about. The man was surprised. He did not understand why Encred was asking him about such a thing. And yet the former hunter replied that he would like to marry a beauty, with a flower shop to boot. And Encred replied that to do that he would have to survive today. Then the rogue commander asked what another scout was worried about. He replied that his beloved wife had recently given birth. Then Encred replied that if he didn't want the child to grow up without a father, then he too would have to get out of here alive. The other two guys wanted to save money and start their own business, or just go back home. Then it was Andrew's turn, who replied that he wanted to fulfill his mother's last wish. His dream, his mission, was to revive the Gardner house. Encred explained that their answers were similar in some ways. To fulfill the wishes, it was necessary to get out of this place alive. Encred suggested that they try to do just that. This time the boys began to understand that they were indeed in danger. But they still looked at the outcast commander with a bit of doubt. These guys needed to react actively. There was nothing more motivating than the will to live. The enemies were about to appear, and Encred planned to break through the encirclement. Pointing somewhere into the tall grass, the outcast commander told Henry to shoot an arrow there at head level, which surprised the scout because he did not see anyone in that direction. Encred said that he would not repeat it a second time, and the man still had to shoot. Obeying Encred, the archer fired an arrow in the indicated direction. She hit one of the aspinists right in the head. The boys became alarmed when they realized that there really were enemies nearby. Rushing forward, drawing his sword from its sheath as he ran, Encred ordered Andrew to follow him. Gardner followed the order without question, but he didn't like it at all. The boys were rapidly approaching their opponents. Having closed the distance sufficiently, the outcast commander pierced one of them. Previously, Encred had thought incorrectly that in order to gain an advantage, he needed to find the Hispanians first and attack them suddenly. The opponents were stunned by the sudden appearance of the enemies. One of the Hispanians ordered to kill them all. However, with his throat cut by Gardner, Encred knew they had to take advantage of the moment of surprise and thin out the enemy lines as much as possible. If the rogue commander had led Andrew, his bodyguard would certainly have followed them. And with this man, their chances of winning increased significantly. Initially, there were 20 enemies, but the scouts reduced their number to 8. The frightened Hispanis shouted that they had been ambushed and asked for someone to come to their aid. A crowd of enemies was advancing towards the reconnaissance detachment. Encred commanded to finish them off. The Hispanians, drawing their blades, attacked the reconnaissance detachment, but they were all killed one after another. Suddenly, a black beast jumped out of the grass. He flew right past the Spanish man, who threw an insult in his direction. Stopping, the panther turned to face the man. However, the soldier, pointing his spear at her, wished the animal death. But death eventually came to the Aspanian himself at the hands of Encrid. In a field of such tall grass, it was also difficult for the enemy soldiers to find anyone. But they came across the reconnaissance squad first, and all because they were chasing the beast that Encrid had noticed the first time. The Espanist discovered them completely by accident. This time, the enemies didn't notice the ambush again because they were focused on the chase. Thanks to this animal, everything went as it should, so Encrid wouldn't let them die stupidly. Finally, all nearby enemies were defeated by the reconnaissance squad. Encrid commanded to go further, and the same panther followed him behind. With the single loss, there were 6 of them left. Even after many cycles, it was not possible to save everyone, but this time the most people survived. The mission to save himself and others continued. Thanks to the repetitions of today, Encrid knew the number and location of enemy troops. If they had continued to move forward, they would have been exterminated by 30 crossbowmen, so they had to turn right to get around them. The spearmen who were persistently pursuing the outcast commander, today, had to be quickly removed, otherwise they would interfere with the scouts. It was worth avoiding unpleasant clashes, in other cases using the hit-and-run tactic, so that gradually the soldiers could escape from the enemy encirclement. Andrew's bodyguard could see that Gardner was already worn out, and he knew that once it got dark, finding a way out would be more difficult. So it was necessary to get out before the sun set. Encrid commanded to go further, and the brown-haired man asked where he was going. Because they would only climb further, the commander of the outcasts answered that he knew about it, and that was the direction they needed to go. He was not going to accept any objections and simply ordered them to follow him. The bodyguard's next action left Andrew and Henry stunned. The man held a blade to Encrid's throat and asked him if he had a conscience. Shatton stated that he had no intention of going to his death after Encrid, and was confident that he would survive, even if he had to kill the outcast commander. And the man countered that the soldier himself should have realized that it was too late to return along the beaten path. After everything they had done there, the retreat route was full of enemies. Shaden asked if they really had to go after the rogue commander now, and Encrid offered to clarify something. He said he wanted to survive too. Andrew reflected on how he had previously considered Encrid to be trash. He thought this man was someone like his father, who simply gave up and lost the wealth of their home. But Encrid turned out to be completely different. The boy recalled how he sat by the bed where his sick mother lay, and said that their home was finished. But she still hoped that Andrew would become a person who would lead others. She asked her son to gain the trust of the people, become a real leader and revive their family name. From then on, Gardner always wanted to be the person who paved the way for others. This is exactly the kind of person the commander of the outcast turned out to be, who for months asked them to trust him and survive this hell together. Stepping forward, Andrew said he believed in Captain Encrid. The bodyguard wanted to object, but Gardner noted that Encrid was currently in command. He also stated that the detachment was following the orders of its commander. Encrid squatted down and said that until he gave the signal, everyone was to goose-step behind him. The scouts obeyed and landed on the ground. The first stage in overcoming today was seizing the initiative, attacking the enemy by surprise and consistently breaking through the encirclement. The second stage was supposed to be a critical point that Encrid discovered after many repetitions. Making their way through the thickets, the reconnaissance party found themselves too close to a multitude of spearmen. Anxiety and fear for their lives settled in the hearts of men. The sun was already setting below the horizon, gradually handing over the reign to the night. The scouts hid in the tall grass, trying not to make a single sound. The Hispanis were passing very close by. They moved across the field in small detachments, none of which encountered the scouts. It was in this place that soldiers could hide from the enemy and avoid combat. After some time, all the Hispanians finally moved a sufficient distance away from the reconnaissance detachment. The guys were able to breathe a sigh of relief and relax a little. Everything went according to plan, and now the final stage has arrived. The sun was setting and darkness was following it. The reason they never managed to get out of this field was clear. Encrid led the scouts to a place they absolutely did not want to go. They found themselves right at the enemy camp. Aspen's soldiers killed everyone to silence him. And all because in this field was hidden something that no one was supposed to know about. Encrid wondered what would happen if the enemy had a bigger problem than just catching them. The commander of the outcasts ordered them to follow him. He believed that now they would definitely have a way out. The soldiers were hiding behind one of the tents, and the brown-haired man was asking if Encrid was really going to set fire to the enemy camp. The man asked if the commander had gone crazy. Because they were in the very center, they would definitely be surrounded and finished off. Encrid only asked his name. The bodyguard replied that his name was Mac. Addressing him by name, the outcast commander declared that he would not tolerate disobedience. This arrogance angered Mac so much that he even cursed, and Andrew demanded that he shut up. Then the outcast commander rushed forward and Gardner followed him. Dissatisfied, Mac thought that Andrew was of no use to him. It was clear that the scouts would not find the way while the moon was behind the clouds. Now there was nothing left to do but trust the commander. Encred tore through the tent's awning, which shocked the brown-haired man. Running inside, the scouts determined that it was empty inside. Mac didn't understand what was happening and how Encred knew what would happen. The commander jumped over the boxes, and the brown-haired man was amazed that Encred was going to go through the enemy camp. What was even more surprising to Mac was that they never encountered a single enemy soldier, even though they were right in the middle of their camp. At some point, Encred commanded to stop and wait here, behind the tent, with patrolmen ahead. Encred had infiltrated this camp dozens of times already, and when he first noticed that flag and touched it, the entire army focused its attention on him. The outcast commander explained that Aspen's soldiers were hiding that flag in that field, and their main task was to protect it. Encred wondered what would happen if he set the flag on fire, and Mac was surprised, not understanding how the guy knew there was a flag there in the first place. Then suddenly, an idea occurred to him. He thought that the company commander might have told Encred about this, and it was she who assigned this worthless person to their squad. As Mac pondered, the rogue commander said that the Hispanians would be too busy defending the flag. Shaitan thought that Encred had most likely suddenly taken command of the squad and infiltrated the enemy camp because he was carrying out a secret mission. The commander said that they could escape in this confusion. Encred said that they would split into two groups. One would act as bait and attract the attention of the enemies, and the other would start the fire. Mac decided to join the decoy team. Encred was surprised by this because the brown-haired man had always expressed his dissatisfaction and then suddenly decided to cooperate. In any case, this made the commander feel even better. He had led a squad into the enemy camp many times before, but he had never been left with only people. This was the best today Encred had experienced so far. He had a good feeling that he could handle it this time. Someone threw a stone at the head of one of the patrolmen. It was Mac, who immediately rushed away. The soldiers shouted that there were strangers in the camp, and some immediately ran after the enemy. The outcast commander at that moment headed towards the torch. Grasping it, the soldier was confident that he would cope and wake up in tomorrow. But at that moment, an enemy appeared right next to him. The man made a powerful swing with his sword. So he cut off the burning part of the torch. Encred was shocked by this because he didn't even hear the enemy. It was an enemy warrior that Encred had never seen in any of his todays. The guy couldn't understand where such a strong man had come from in this camp. Holding his sword tightly, a gloomy Aspen called Encred a rat. The outcast commander said indifferently that his comrades were late. A second later, a nearby tent was engulfed in flames. The Aspenist shouted that a fire had started and all the tents were burning. Another soldier reported the intruders, pointing to scouts running with small barrels in their hands. Encred's enemy ordered the fire to be put out first. Mac lured away most of the enemy forces, and the outcast commander took the attention of the rest, while Andrew set the tents on fire. Encred knew that now he just needed to escape. All attacks began with the movement of the legs. From the push that directs the body forward, Encred saw a hole in the enemy's defense. Therefore, stretching out his sword forward, the commander of the outcast tried to attack the enemy. Another moment and the blade would have reached the Hispanian's neck. However, at the last moment the enemy was able to dodge. Thus, the shocked Encred found himself behind the enemy. Surprisingly, the Spanish managed to wound him in the side. The rogue commander made his most perfect attack, but it ultimately failed. The enemy soldier, with contempt in his eyes, called Encred a weakling. The commander understood that he could not defeat this man, at least not with his current level of abilities. Encred barely made it here. Along the way, there were ambushes in the fields and countless deaths. The soldier thought he had finally passed the test of this today, but it turned out that the real obstacle today was this soldier. Encred knew he would die like a dog if he challenged him. This meant that it was necessary to take command of the detachment again and run across the fields in the process of numerous repetitions of today. The soldier was going to survive all these senseless deaths and defeat the enemy. The Hispanian was angry to see the smile on his opponent's face. He walked towards Encred, saying that he would cut him into pieces and feed him to the dogs. As usual, the outcast commander had no intention of giving up. He was determined to overcome this obstacle. Encred decided to try to strike first. However, the Aspenist parried it with ease. Then the enemy raised his sword back, as if he had become twice as big. He launched a slash that Encred was able to avoid with a jump. However, the Spanish immediately managed to make a second attack. Encred was surprised that the man was able to strike from such a position, but the outcast commander still managed to parry this. The Spanish man's movements were quick and precise. The enemy did not give a single opportunity to counterattack. The difference in abilities was too great. Encred decided to throw a dagger at the enemy, but thanks to his quick reaction, the enemy blocked the blade with his hand. Encred was surprised that his opponent was able to deflect such a small object flying at him with his fist. After the defense, the Spanish immediately made a lunge. The fire continued to spread rapidly. The tip of the enemy's sword lightly grazed Encred's ear. Enemy soldiers were shouting that someone had spilled oil all over the area. The flames were aimed straight towards the flag. Someone called out to the platoon commander who was fighting Encred. The man asked if the man didn't understand what was at stake. This forced the Aspanist to stop. Looking into Encred's eyes, the enemy understood that the commander of the outcasts was not going to surrender without a fight. The enemy told Encred that they would meet again. Then the Spanish man turned and walked away. The outcast commander was surprised that his enemy decided to retreat so easily. This meant that he was not the real obstacle after all. Clutching the hilt of his sword as tightly as he could, Encred knew that even if he wasn't dealing with an enemy commander today, he still needed to improve. At that moment, one of the scouts ran up to him. He said they had to go now, but Encred kept looking at his opponent, confidently walking against the backdrop of flames. They exchanged glances as they parted, ready for a new battle. Then Encred, putting his sword back into its sheath, ordered everyone to retreat. All the Aspanists ran to the flag, trying to put it out. Now few cared about outsiders in the camp. To the sound of signal trumpets, the scouts fled from the enemies. One of the guys from the reconnaissance squad disappeared. Now there are only 5 of them left. Mac asked if that was the end of it, and if the Hispanians would send a large search party after them. The outcast commander replied that they were unlikely to do so. Henry, clutching his wounded arm, struggled to keep up with his comrades. Enemy soldiers who were nearby shouted to seize the scouts and not let them escape. Not wanting to lose their comrade, they all turned against their pursuers. The scouts successfully pierced their opponents and cut off their heads. When this group of Aspanians was finished, the commander ordered not to hesitate and to continue running. Someone decided to help Henry, grabbing him around the waist and putting his hand on his neck. The former hunter said that if they continued moving in the direction of the feeding areas of the field, foxes and snakes, the Hispanists would not be able to pursue them. But one of the comrades noted that it would be difficult for them to move there either. Henry said he knew a safe route, a hunting trail. Encred decided to rely on his comrade and let him lead them. The scouts could no longer hear the footsteps of their pursuers. All 5 who survived were able to escape from the thicket. Thanks to the efforts of Mac and Andrew, they were able to easily break away from the Spanish. If it weren't for Henry and his knowledge of the local trails, they wouldn't have disappeared so quickly. It took every member of the squad to get this far. Finally, the sun rose, lighting the way for the soldiers. The scouts ran across the meadow to their camp without a single stop. Seeing their shabby appearance, their comrades asked what had happened to them. The out-of-breath scouts could hardly say anything, and Henry was ready to pass out. Here comes another today of Encreda. A new day began in which Henry fell unconscious and caused everyone to worry. The flag that the Spanish people had so defended was almost completely burned. One of the Aspanists said that they had to do the training again. He called it unexpected that the famous Grey Dogs couldn't handle a bunch of little bastards. The commander of the Grey Dog Company really didn't understand it. The warriors positioned along the perimeter of the field of tall grass were the best of the best among the Grey Dogs. But a small detachment of enemy soldiers broke through the fence, started a fire, and escaped. The Grey Dogs were an independent company, allowed to decide for themselves how to proceed within the scope of the operation. The company's name was borrowed from a grey dog that inhabited the Principality of Aspen. He was distinguished by his particular tenacity and became strongly attached to the target he had set his sights on, whether in matters of love or war, which is why soldiers who went by the name of the Grey Dog were also called persistent lovers. The Grey Dog Company commander asked platoon commander Mitch Harrier if the enemy was tough. Mitch replied that if it weren't for the fire, he would have killed the guy on the spot. The company commander replied that this meant that this man was lucky, which in itself was also an ability. Harrier replied that this would not happen again. Encred sat in his squad's ward, wrapping his arm in bandages. The fact that he encountered an obstacle but did not overcome it made the commander nervous. He wanted to continue the duel. At this moment, Harrier and Encred's thoughts were similar. They both wanted to defeat the enemy, but they did not have enough time for this. The persistent lovers set their sights on the next target. Rem lay on the bed, throwing the axe, dying of boredom. The man was worried why there was still no news from the commander, because he should have already returned from reconnaissance. The soldier sat up and thought about the reason for Encred's delay. He even suggested that the commander could have died. In Rem's opinion, he had certainly become more capable, but he was still the same inexperienced youth, so it was entirely possible that Encred could really have died, and Rem had taken an unusual liking to him. But if the commander died, then nothing could be done, and the soldier was tormented by melancholy. At that moment, Ranga woke up and yawned, scratching his head. Opening his eyes, the awakened soldier noticed Rem in front of him. He looked at Ranga with bored eyes. The disgruntled man asked why Ram was looking at him so intently. In response, the bored comrade showed the warrior an offensive gesture. Ranga didn't lose his head and showed the same gesture, but using his leg. Smiling slyly, Rem asked if the soldier wanted him to kill him. Calling his comrade a psycho, Ranga began to pull his sword out of its sheath. The company commander asked if Encred had really accidentally found the enemy's secret hideout, penetrated into enemy territory, and just as accidentally started a fire there, and the man replied that he was lucky to make the right decision at the right moment. The fairy reluctantly had to believe these words. She told Encred to go and rest and get some treatment at the same time. The girl assumed that the soldier would do something, but the result exceeded her expectations. She wondered who this man was. As he left the tent, Encred wondered what was on the company commander's mind. On the street, he was met by scouts. Andrew asked Encred for forgiveness for being rude at first, because it was only thanks to the commander that he survived. Gardner asked if they could see each other again. Encred replied that this would happen if they found themselves on the same battlefield. The grateful scouts followed the commander with their eyes. Then, showing their respect, they followed Andrew by bowing their heads. Encred thought about what Gardner had said. The commander had indeed saved the four of them, but the man wondered if that was his maximum. In the end, Encred lost 2 soldiers on the battlefield. If he had been a little stronger, he could have saved them too. A series of identical todays allowed him to look beyond the limit. Now it was time to stop wasting his energy. Encred had to follow the path of the knight he dreamed of becoming, or move forward, transcending today. And to prevent it from happening again, he had to become even stronger. The soldiers were screaming that the psychos from the 4th squad were fighting again. Rem and Ranga had a fight with weapons. Madness and passion were intertwined in their eyes. It was the first time Encred had seen such an expression on their faces. The commander had sparred many times with the squad members, but had never seen them like this during a fight with him. The soldier standing nearby wondered if these guys were even human. They looked more like monsters. These guys didn't take the commander seriously from the start. Encred decided to move forward, assigning target after target. First of all, he was going to force his subordinates to make such faces in front of him. The metal rang from the powerful blows of Rem and Ranga. Suddenly, Ranga noticed the commander and stopped. Rem noted that Encred could have reported that he had returned, but instead he hid like a wild cat and spied. He asked the other soldiers if they had seen enough and told the boys to either entertain him or leave, causing the warriors to quickly hide from the madmen. Ranga asked if Encred was injured, and the commander replied that he had received minor scratches. Encred wanted to discuss how Ram had repelled Rangi's attack, but he had turned away, indignant that the commander had immediately started doing his own thing upon returning, instead of washing his feet and going to bed. The commander also wanted to ask Rangi about the attacks, but he suddenly stated that something was wrong with Encred, and this puzzled the soldier. Ranga did not explain this and asked to forget about it. The commander decided not to pick on the soldier and decided that he would say everything when he really wanted to. Upon learning of the enemy ambush, the battalion commander deployed all infantry closer to the field covered with tall grass. During the journey, Encred's wounds healed greatly, and in his free time he either studied strategy or trained. And so, late in the evening, the commander left his squad again. Chryse asked if he was really going to training again and suggested that he should rest. Assistant. Rem was unhappy that the commander had not yet fully recovered, but had already fled. The morning sun illuminated the world with its bright rays, warming it. Having slept well, Ranga woke up of his own free will. Looking at the neighboring bed, he realized that the commander had gone off to train again. Sitting up on the bed, the man stretched, preparing his muscles for active movements. Then he stood up, grabbing his sword. Rangi had a talent for fencing. Becoming stronger was easy for him, so he found a way to become a knight earlier. But he was not at all interested in titles. There was nothing Ranga wanted to do anyway, so he didn't see why he would waste his energy on becoming a knight. Seeing no point, he lost his goal and was now marking time. Somewhere among the camp tents, Ranga found the commander training. As he repeated the blow, pain shot through his side. This caused the man to drop his sword and cower. Ranga knew that the commander had been learning incorrectly from the very beginning, and that the basics needed to be mastered first. Having mastered all sorts of simplified methods, thereby instilling bad habits, one could forget about improving, no matter how much one trained. Still, Ranga didn't understand why the commander was trying so hard, pushing himself to the point of exhaustion. He decided to ask Encred about this directly. The commander replied that he wanted to become stronger. The soldier asked what he would do next, and Encred said he would become a knight. Ranga noted that the knight was just someone who was good at fighting, that's all, and he asked what the point was. The commander explained that he had his own convictions. For the sake of the weak and the disadvantaged, for the sake of honor, for the sake of his loved ones, he took up the sword. This is the kind of knight Encred dreamed of becoming. Ranga was satisfied with this answer. Physical force was only a tool. The soldier wondered what the knight meant and what the sword meant. Ranga wondered what he himself dreamed of. The boy realized that he would not know about this until he set foot on the path. Then Ranga turned to the commander. He asked if Encred wanted to learn how to use a sword. This was the natural desire of the commander. They stood opposite each other. It was clear that the commander was serious. Ranga decided that he shouldn't have mentioned it, as it only caused him unnecessary trouble. However, this look from Encred promised that it would not be boring. The soldier asked if the savage had taught the commander the technique of predator's guts. Encred corrected him, explaining that it was called the heart of the beast, and Ranga replied that this was the problem. He stated that Encred would have to forget about everything else. The commander asked if he would have to abandon the mercenary valence sword technique as well, and the soldier replied that it was especially necessary to forget it. Ranga explained that if Encred didn't forget about this, then when the time came to use a new technique, he would use something more convenient out of habit. Then it would be better to continue living as they had been living. The subordinate offered to choose, to distract himself from everything and gain completely new knowledge, or to be content with what he had. The commander replied that he wanted to gain completely new knowledge. Ranga fell silent and looked at Encred with a searching gaze. The soldier asked if his words were really serious. Encred asked where they would start. Ranga thought that this man could not be called normal. 1.5-handed sword would be suitable as a main weapon, so Ranga decided to give him his own, and Encred asked if his subordinate was sure about this. Ranga replied that he didn't care because he was going to pick up the sword anyway, and he told him to grab the hilt with his right hand on top and his left hand on the bottom, which Encred did. The soldier asked why the commander was holding on so tightly, and Encred replied that he didn't want to drop the sword, so Ranga asked who taught him that. The commander replied that it was Ram, and Ranga called him a useless monkey. The soldier then asked Encred to stand up. After this, the guy suddenly attacked the commander with his own sword. Then Encred stopped the blow with the weapon that his comrade gave him. The blade, like the commander's hands, was pierced by a slight tremor. Encred admitted that it hurt and asked what it was. Ranga replied that it was supposed to be that way. He explained that Encred would break everything if he stood there like a statue, relying only on force. The commander was like a branch or a column, or something like that. The members of the squad, without exception, were not strong in eloquence. Encred did not understand what this comparison was about. The commander assumed that the soldier was referring to the fact that Encred was straining his entire body to put strength into his arms. This meant he needed to become more flexible if he didn't want to break anything, and add maneuverability to his attacks. The sun was already high in the sky and metal was ringing beneath it. During sparring, Ranga told the commander to watch his center of gravity. He also pointed out the wrong direction of the socks. The soldier noticed that the commander had tensed up again and asked if he really meant to break his wrists. Then Ranga became indignant at one movement and asked if the commander had really been dancing. Thus, whole hours continued to pass in training. One of the blows caused the commander to fall to the ground. Ranga didn't think Encred was that incapable. He didn't even have the basics of swordsmanship. The soldier doubted that training could help in this case. Rising up, the commander grabbed his sword again, nearby, and watched him. Encred stood up and asked to continue sparring. Then Ranga suggested starting to learn to walk again. At the moment when the boys got into fighting stances, Ram approached them and noted that he now understood why he hadn't seen them all day. He asked if the boys had even skipped meals while playing at being friends. Rem wondered if Ranga was making fun of the commander and asked if Encred wanted the soldier to teach him a lesson, and Ranga replied that he would cut off his comrade's hand. The commander asked what happened and why Ram was dressed like that. The soldier replied that he dressed like that for the draft. All the other soldiers were also gathering as the enemy was approaching. Finally, all the warriors, including the entire 4th detachment, were already ready, unfortunately. Looking at Encred, Ranga thought that maybe he shouldn't have started teaching the commander fencing. Now he had an unfamiliar sword in his hands. He could get confused and not be able to fight at full strength. And he could also die because of this. The soldier decided that it was better not to go far from Encred today. But the commander himself was thinking about how he would like to learn more about swordsmanship. When the enemy appeared, the soldiers began to wonder why they were standing like that. The formation of the Aspinus seemed somehow strange. One of the enemy men declared that this was the end. Suddenly, fog began to appear everywhere. The fairy became nervous, realizing that it was witchcraft. Not understanding what was happening, the soldiers became worried. The fog was so thick that Encred could not see even those standing right in front of him through it. Everyone complained about the limited field of vision and asked where this fog came from. Suddenly, a strange sound was heard, frightening the soldiers. Alarmed people shouted and asked what the sound was, where it came from, and what was going on. Encred told everyone that they were arrows, and indeed, a whole barrage of arrows was directed at them. There were so many of them that the discouraged soldiers had no way to defend themselves. It was definitely not natural fog. No one could have imagined that the enemy would choose such tactics. The company commander ordered everyone to duck and raise their shields. They were fooled. The man among the aspens who had contributed to the fog's formation grinned, twisting his face into a disgusting smile. He spent so much effort to perfect this spell. He got the blood of all kinds of animals and water from the cleanest lake. He even had to periodically use a rain spell. Once the spell was activated, a thick fog deprived everyone of vision, but remaining under the flag, the transmitter of magic. It was possible to see and attack the enemy unilaterally, and it was called the Destroying Fog. Mitch noted that the sorcerer looked pleased, and the man replied that it couldn't have been any other way. He barely managed to complete the spell, considering that the flags were almost burned. But if it weren't for him, it would have been much easier. Harrier realized who was being talked about that same Encred who was also on this battlefield. Again, many arrows flew, which the commander dodged as best he could. Behind Ranga, Encred was told not to raise his head. Another voice belonging to Rem was outraged by the witchcraft and whoever had done it. The members of the 4th squad were right under his nose, but Encred couldn't see them. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to fight to his full potential. One arrow stuck into the ground right at the commander's feet. He had heavy breathing, a tense body and wooden legs. Encred hadn't learned anything from Rangi's lessons. And overall, he hadn't expected to master everything at once. Back in the camp, Ranga said that, even despite the training, Encred would not give up his old habits. It was best not to engage in battles at all right away until he had mastered the new knowledge perfectly. But if you don't fight on the battlefield, the commander could die. And it was precisely about death that Encred now thought. The clanging of metal and the whistling of arrows could be heard everywhere. Ranga asked the commander to retreat, but Encred said he had found a way. The next moment, the commander rushed straight to meet the enemies, while the rest of the squad wanted to stop the guy, but they couldn't. A spearman appeared ahead, and Encred came across his weapon. The guy's throat was pierced right through. He knew that this way he would be able to return to training with Ranga. The shocked spearman called the commander a psycho and told him to die. The Hispanian then knocked the warrior off his spear by kicking him in the chest. And so a new today began anew, in which the soldier asked the commander why he fell, and whether he was sure that he had learned the movement correctly. To be fair, the teacher from Ranga was so-so, but from the genius's perspective, all this was as natural as breathing, so the soldier didn't bother explaining. The man noted that the commander understood with his head, but his body could not keep up. He said that it was just a swing of the sword, and asked if it was really that difficult. Encred asked where the center of gravity needed to be moved. He understood that Ranga was not trying to reproach him, but was genuinely interested. The commander's question confused the soldier. Standing in a stance, he tried to figure out where exactly he needed to move the center of gravity. Encred knew. These geniuses didn't even really understand what they were doing. Although Ranga's explanation was meager, listening and remembering was one of Encred's abilities, and he knew that he would get used to how to hold the sword and how to stand after repeating it a few times. Once again, a large number of arrows were aimed at the guy. Encred tried hard to fight them off with his sword. However, his body was still made of wood. But it's okay. The commander could die and learn again. The next death was also from a spear. On the 30th today, the movements became flexible. Ranga noted that this move was very good and asked where the commander learned it. He stated that with this, Encred would be able to master the basics of fencing in an instant. He explained that the cut, thrust, and slash were the main attacks with a sword, and that the blade was to be used as a defense. If the sword was good, the blunt side would do as well. The minimum distance maintained between him and the enemy was called the line of attack. Blocking the enemy's line of attack and increasing his own was fencing. Encred had to picture the opponent in his head and then swing his sword. This time, Encred ran past the spear. He felt light on his legs and was confident that he could easily dodge. The commander managed to get behind the spearman, but there he encountered several more of the same kind. This time, the guy was hit by 3 spears, little by little. Today began to change, but slowly. During one of the training sessions, Encred was able to block Rangi's attack. The soldier was surprised that the commander was able to parry his sword. But even in this today, Encred died. He continued to train hard, swinging his sword. Now Ranga could no longer find fault with the angle of the blow. Again and again the commander ran to meet his death, and Ranga tried to stop him. The spears continued to pierce Encred over and over again. But he smiled, knowing he was getting better. Filled with seriousness, Ranga raised his sword. He made a slashing attack that hit Encred. The commander, instead of lunging, swung his sword. This time, he was able to apply enough force to not just block the attack, but to deflect the enemy's weapon. And this happened on the 100th today. This time, Rangi's gaze changed. He asked who the commander was anyway. Abilities that seemed to have reached their limit just now broke through to a new level. Encred once again rushed to meet the enemies, despite Rangi's attempts to stop him. He was again able to easily dodge the first spearman's blow. Encred was determined to reach this place. This time, he was able to get past several more Espanis. The knight's way existed beyond this pain. The commander ran forward, where other spearmen were still waiting for him. They all immediately plunged their weapons into the guy's body. But he, like some kind of madman, smiled, thinking about how much fun it was, so much so that it was enough to drive you crazy with joy. Today began again, and Ranga approached Encred again. Once again, he asked the commander if he wanted to learn fencing, and Encred gave an unconditional positive answer. In order to become stronger, Encred was ready to die more than once. Ranga said he didn't remember the commander being so skilled. He asked if Encred had been fighting so poorly on purpose all this time, and the commander replied that this was not the case at all. The soldier noted that his basic knowledge was sufficient. On the contrary, now he needed experience in real combat. And again, a barrage of arrows flew at the soldiers. More than 200 days have already passed. Encred successfully avoided all the arrows with both his sword and dodges. He rushed forward, deciding to test how far he could go with the strength he had mastered and the knowledge he had gained. As usual, he dodged the blow of the first spearman. But this time, Encred decapitated him and moved on. The commander remembered where the enemy was behind the fog and at what moment he would jump out. Even without seeing, Encred could hit a couple of people. As one after another died, the Espanis began to worry. They did not understand what kind of person was thinning their ranks, because no one was visible. Reaching another enemy, Encred cut off his leg. Others, hearing his cry, did not understand what was happening ahead. One of them shouted, "Look under your feet," which is why the crossbowmen began to aim downwards. Earlier, Ranga said to remember the eyes, legs, and hands. The eyes looked and predicted, and the legs moved. The hands brought what they started to the end. The commander laughed madly, pleased that today was different. This time the feeling was completely different than before mastering the basics. Pleased with his skills, the commander wanted to continue to be attacked. Ahead of him were several more crossbowmen, on whom he rushed without a drop of doubt. One of the Hispanians noted that Encred had fought well, and asked if he really thought he could return alive after fighting such a crowd alone. For the commander, this was not all. The soldier wanted to test himself further and challenge the Hispanis to fight with swords like men. The worried crossbowman thought the man was crazy. The Hispanis then fired a multitude of bolts at him. Once again, Encred found himself before Karen. The ferryman of souls called him a fool, who threw himself into the arms of death. The carrier asked if Encred had really gone mad. The soldier woke up not in the best mood. It had been a long time since someone had simply scolded him and left. Encred wondered if Karen had shown up just to insult him. Someone asked why the commander was in the clouds. It was Rem, standing very close, whom Encred did not immediately notice. Every time the fog covered them, this guy would scream that it was witchcraft. The enemy army's formation had no strategic importance. The same was true in the field when they were defending the flag. The commander was interested in the reason for all this, and he asked if Ram knew anything about witchcraft. The man asked why there was such interest, and Encred replied that he simply thought it was curious, and if the subordinate knew about it, he could enlighten him. Rem agreed to tell more about it. He asked if the commander knew what the difference was between magic and witchcraft. Encred replied that magic was more widespread, and the subordinate agreed with this statement. But the difference was that for witchcraft a guide was needed, or rather not just needed, but very important. Without a guide, there was no witchcraft. Now, Encred understood that the enemy had spread the fog using magic, and the flag was acting as a guide. In other words, if the flag was broken, the fog should have cleared. The commander asked if Rem's tribe used witchcraft. It came from the west, and as far as Encred knew, Rem was from the western lands. The soldier replied that he had seen it, but in fact, true sorcerers could be counted on one hand, and those who wandered around the continent were mostly charlatans. Encred headed out of the tent, and Rem asked where the commander was going. Encred replied that he had gone to training. Ranga noted that he was lucky that he and his commander were taught the same basics. He asked if the commander had heard of the 5 sword styles. 500 years ago, an extraordinary genius was born into a simple farming family, and at the age of 9, when their farm was attacked, he killed all 12 robbers with one poker. Having lost his parents early, he, mature beyond his years, mastered the principles of fencing, after which one nobleman learned about him. He found the child and took him into his family. So this genius received a new name, Lionesis Onyak. However, the heavens sent Lionesis not only talent, but also adversity. From the age of 10, his limbs began to lose strength, and before he was 12, he was struck by an incurable disease that paralyzed his entire body. Oblivion awaited the unfortunate genius. However, despite his illness, the 20-year-old Lionesis divided the continental art of fencing into before and after. He divided all existing fencing styles into 5 types, namely a straight and sharp sword, a heavy and powerful sword, a graceful and fascinating sword, a swift and sharp sword, a soft and smooth sword. Lionesis rewrote the history of fencing, and the Onyak family name became the strongest in the empire with his help. This style of fencing was passed down from generation to generation and is now firmly rooted in the minds of people. The heavy sword was common in the north, graceful and flowing in the central region, dancing sword in the west, and illusion sword in the south. In addition, there was the spirit sword in the east. There was one technique that Ranga mastered for the heavy ball of the north. He stated that in any case there was something more useful than the heart of the beast. It was called concentration on one point. Ranga forgot about everything around him, focusing only on the enemy and his sword. The soldier said that he would explain to the commander the main idea of this technique. After that, he made a sharp lunge towards Encred, so the blade made a scratch on the commander's neck. This blow was faster than Rem's axe. Encred almost died just now. Ranga asked if the commander felt anything. At that moment, Ram turned to him. He asked if Ranga had tried to kill the commander, master something. The head had to be on the shoulders at least. It took the commander a very long time, even to master the heart of the beast. Ranga replied that it was natural, since his teacher was a boorish barbarian, which angered the soldier, while Encred thought that they were both equally bad at explaining. Rem noted that Ranga himself was from the northern outskirts and asked if that was where the wild tribe lived. Ranga recalled that his comrade himself came from a barbarian village in the west. Rem told him to get ready and stated that his tombstone would read, "Died at the hands of the barbarian." The commander asked them to stop and asked if Rem had come about the convocation order. Finally, Ranga told Encred to try to feel how his nerves flare up in a moment of mortal danger. If the commander successfully mastered concentration on one point, the unnecessary surroundings would disappear and he would feel the sword begin to move in the desired direction. With the beast's heart, it was the same and at the same time completely different. The beast's heart grew brave in the face of death, and concentration on one point, on the contrary, made him tense up. The commander would have to fight in a real battle to understand the essence. He also thought about the flag, which was a conduit for magic, calling for fog. Only by getting rid of the spell could Encred repel the enemy's one-sided attacks. There were more targets on the battlefield, and the commander decided to break this flag first. If Ram or Ranga were with him, they would have easily gotten to him. Encred ran straight ahead, destroying everyone in his path, and every time blood splashed from his sword. He wanted to try to go as far as he could. Concentration on one point was impossible. Encred died over and over again, without even knowing its essence. Hearing training was necessary to avoid dying at the hands of an assassin, the heart of the beast to slash and maneuver on the battlefield. But he was still trying to learn how to concentrate on one point from Rangi, who would make sharp attacks every time, asking if the commander had grasped the essence. If it worked, Encred should have felt the tip of the sword slow down or something like that. The commander did not understand this at all. Perhaps the brave heart of a beast was hindering him, but it did not look like that. Ranga explained that the surroundings were blurred, and you only saw the enemy's sword. You could predict the trajectory of the blow. He asked if this was familiar to Encred. Still, The commander did not think that focusing on the fear of death was the right way. He asked how the soldier learned to concentrate. Ranga replied that there was nothing to learn there, just one moment and everything worked out. He explained that he had focused on one point and it had worked. Encred understood that it was foolish to wait for detailed explanations from Rangi. All that was left was to learn everything himself and leave the anxiety behind. Encred decided to continue training his concentration. First of all, he needed to break the flag. The commander intended to minimize the losses of his comrades and penetrate the enemy camp. This time, when the fog engulfed the soldiers, the commander immediately told everyone to duck. After that, everyone put up their shields as ordered by Encred. Then arrows flew at them, but they did not hit human flesh. But shields. This was the 300th today. Encred knew with his eyes closed at what moment the attack would take place. He could avoid it without any problem, while still catching his opponent off guard. He showed no mercy to his enemies, cutting off their heads and limbs. Calling Encred crazy, the Hispanians were in complete shock because this guy alone could deal with them so easily. An order was given to seize the man immediately, but no one could reach him alive. Everyone instantly lost their lives at the tip of his sword. One of the Hispanis shouted at his comrades to stop standing there like a pillar and stop this psycho. The enemy decided to stop one of Encred's sword swings. However, the guy's crushing blow broke the enemy's weapon and destroyed the Hispanian himself. It was already the 10th today that the commander reached this flag, and now he finally managed to break it. Something strange happened to Encred along with this. He definitely destroyed the flag, but for some reason the fog still hasn't cleared. The next moment, he was pierced by swords and spears. Mockingly, one of the Aspens replied that Encred apparently was familiar with witchcraft and fell for their deception. Only now did the commander realize that one flag was real and the other 5 were fakes. This meant that Encred had to find the one among them. Once again, the commander rushed forward without explaining anything to his comrades. The probability that the right flag was among the remaining flags was 1 in 5. The commander continued to run, moving further and further away from his comrades. At one point, he gave the command to bend down and put up shields. However, the soldiers who could not see anything could not hear Encred, and they did not understand what had happened. The next second, arrows rained down, flying past the guy. As the commander raised his shield, several arrows hit him. Most of his comrades were wounded. The commander did not understand why the soldiers did not listen to him. As in previous times, maybe it was an unfortunate moment. It was necessary to give them time to catch their breath and assess the situation. It took Encred 3 days to reach the second flag. And again, he turned out to be fake. There were still 3 left. The third flag Encred spotted was achieved by spending 5 days. And it also turned out to be another deception. It took 7 days to get to the fourth. But in the end, it all ended the same. There were only 2 flags left and Encred wondered which one was the real one. He suggested that the flag he needed was most likely located in the very middle. As usual, the sorcerer summoned the destroying fog. The soldiers, who did not understand anything, became alarmed. And Encred, who instantly dropped to the ground, commanded them to bend down and raise their shields. His comrades followed his order without question. A cloud of arrows flew straight towards the wall of shields. Rem was again indignant about the cursed sorcery, and Encred told him to follow him. The soldier obeyed, but he did not understand the purpose of this suicide. It was a long way to the center, and Encred couldn't get tired before he reached the real flag. Therefore, Rem had to distract the enemy's attention while the commander made his way to the flag. Having wounded one of the Hispanians, Rem asked whose hands this magic was. The enemy did not answer, and then Rem killed him, saying that in that case he would ask the next one. The number of days in which Encred died in the fog exceeded a year. The commander was rapidly approaching the last flag, the one that was located in the very center of the enemy formation. Swinging his sword at him, the commander was confident that now the fog would finally be over. However, someone suddenly blocked his blade, asking if he had dreamed it. Standing nearby was the same enemy soldier who had previously had to end the fight with Encred ahead of schedule. The man said that God heard his prayers. Harrier stated that he wanted Encred to die by his hand. Encred, who had completely forgotten Mitch during this year of endless todays, asked who he was. Harrier's face was frozen in confusion. For him, only a couple of days had passed, during which Encred had already managed to forget him. The slightly surprised commander asked again who it was in front of him. Gripping the hilt of his sword tighter, Mitch said that maybe he would remember that when the Spanish man cut him up. Harrier lunged forward. However, Encred successfully dodged it, which surprised Mitch. Encred pushed off the ground and headed towards the Spanish, making a counterattack. Harrier tried to avoid this blow by jumping back. Mitch wondered if it was really this man he had seen last time, as his skill had improved immeasurably. He guessed that Encred intended to catch him in just one step. Raising his sword back, the commander approached the harrier. He then launched a slashing blow which was stopped by the opponent's blade. Encred determined that Mitch was basically a strict follower of the sword. However, his attacks were mixed with the smooth flowing style of a sword. Trying to change the situation, Harrier pressed on Encred's sword. Not allowing the enemy to gain the upper hand, the commander pushed Mitch's blade away. Encred concentrated all his attention before his eyes. His balance was capable of collapsing with one wrong step. The commander threw forward all the forces he had. While fighting the harrier, he forgot about the flag. The commander forgot about the outcome of the battle and about fencing. His entire environment disappeared in an instant. Only one sword remained. Harrier himself was blinded by this battle. The soldiers simultaneously raised their swords back to strike, after which Encred felt a sharp pain. Mitch's blade pierced his chest. He coughed up blood, experiencing the now familiar torment. Encred said he remembered his opponent. He asked if the Aspinist was the one who blocked his path to the flag back then, on the field. The man introduced himself as Mitch Harrier, a platoon commander in the Duchy of Aspen's Grey Dog Company. Encred replied that he was the commander of the Norelia Kingdom Squad. One of the Aspinists asked if the enemy had managed to penetrate, and Mitch replied that, apparently, stealth was his special skill. The soldier noted that Mitch looked annoyed. Looking at Encred, Harrier asked why he was smiling. At that moment, Encred thought that what he needed was not the power of concentration that came from the fear of dying, as he understood from Ranga's explanation. He needed a worthy opponent, and the commander of the Grey Dogs Company inspired him. He put everything on the line, fought, risking his own life. Mitch noted that Encred, it turns out, was just crazy. Harrier then pulled the sword out of the commander, and with it the last of his life energy. Here, Ranga explained again that concentration on one point was reminiscent of the feeling of excitement at the moment of mortal danger. It seemed to him that the commander was listening with half an ear, which made the soldier wonder if Encred had decided to surrender. Ram approached and told them to finish training, as it was time for the training camp. With a very serious face, Encred told Ranga to come with him and get ready. The soldier began to doubt his thoughts. But the commander's appearance, on the contrary, was filled with determination. He considered the commander to be a very strange person. Ranga thought that maybe he should have a tough training session today too. Once again, the vision of Norelia's soldiers was obscured by a devastating fog. Encred commanded them to duck and put up their shields, and the soldiers obediently followed the order, after which they were met with a barrage of arrows. Going ahead, the commander told Ram to follow him. The soldier noted that this was madness, and Ranga stated that if they were going to break through, then he would join in. Rem asked where he was going. Did the arrow really fly into his head? Ranga told him to look forward if he didn't want the projectile to hit him. Encred ran forward, passing his opponents and leaving them to his comrades. The Spanish, without any problems. Encred broke through the same way as before and met up with Mitch Harrier again. He said he was glad to meet his friend and challenged Mitch to a fight. The enemy commander asked if the guy had really come for his soul. Encred asked if this was the first time the commander had received recognition, and explained that he had fallen in love with Mitch at first sight. Harrier replied that his Grey Dogs were a group of obsessive romantics, and it was the first time anyone had ever found him before he did. And the commander asked if Mitch was upset now. The man declared that this was nonsense and swung his sword. Encred tried to focus his attention back on the sword, but the blade pierced his chest. Harrier noted that Encred lost so easily and asked what motivated him to attack. Encred realized that he had made the wrong decision. He shouldn't have done it on purpose. He had to succumb to the charm of the sword. Reliving the moment over and over again, the commander was determined to find that feeling. And now, for the 18th time, Encred saw it again. On the 28th time, the soldier voluntarily entered a state of concentration. It was time for the 58th time. Ranga said that he would show the commander the main idea. Rangi's sword was rapidly approaching Encred's face. He could clearly see the tip of the blade that was about to reach him. He then made a sudden movement to block the oncoming sword. Ranga was amazed by such a quick movement, because just this morning the commander was a weakling who was incapable of anything to him. Ranga asked if Encred had just struck with concentration on one point. He didn't understand how that was even possible. The commander felt complete concentration. His body became one with the sword. The strength and skill increased beyond recognition before, today, repeated itself again. Turning away, he went somewhere, and Ranga asked where the commander was going. Encred replied that he had decided to meet with the company commander. It's time to step beyond this today. The fairy said that she had heard that the soldier wanted to see her and asked what the matter was. Encrid explained that it was witchcraft, and he remembered what he saw during his reconnaissance. Encrid reported that Aspen's soldiers called the suspicious-looking man Lord Sorcerer. The company commander asked to tell about this in more detail. In order to win this battle, Encrid passed on the information he knew. The battle began the same way as before, with the soldiers surrounded by impenetrable fog. At the commander's command, they squatted down and put their shields forward. Rem and Ranga also dealt with the enemies provided to them by Encrid. On Norilia's part, all that was left was to hope for a talented military leader. It was Encrid's duty to get through this guy. Mitch Harrier stood next to the flag guide, as if waiting for his opponent. The man's face darkened as he noted that the soldier was the same one. Encrid called him by name, and Mitch was surprised that the enemy knew his name. The soldier admitted that he wanted to fight Harrier from their first meeting. He said that he would definitely defeat the enemy today. The Grey Dog commander jumped back from Encrid's slashing blow. Mitch was about to strike back, but the soldier was already prepared for it. Harrier's blade struck the sword, the blade of which Encrid held with his forearm for greater stability. Mitch was outraged by this action. He did not like that a man whom he considered his unequal could so easily stop his attack. The commander of Norilia did not hesitate. He was already delivering the next blow, which Harrier still managed to parry. They raised their swords together, competing to see who was faster and more skillful. With a loud clang, the enemy's swords touched again. An astonished Mitch asked if Encrid had been hiding his talent, and the soldier replied that it just happened that way. Harrier asked what his opponent's name was, and Encrid gave his own. Mitch then sent the enemy's sword flying, but the soldier did not drop his weapon. As he began to attack, the enemy commander declared that he would remember this name. Encrid replied that it was useless, since if the enemy had forgotten him, the soldier would have reminded him. The commander watched the blade with concentration. He managed to concentrate on one point. Next, Encrid had to shift his center of gravity to his right leg, after which it was necessary to make a preparatory movement for a special cut. The technique that Encrid had taken from today, the experience gained from repetitions, putting it all together, he saw a clear picture before him. Both Encrid's sword and Harrier's blade reached the enemy's neck. Feeling the pain, the enemy commander suddenly became alarmed. Trying to avoid death at the hands of squad leader Norilia, Mitch went down. Now Harrier didn't understand why he thought he could take this man down in a couple of attacks. The platoon leader wondered if he was fighting some kind of scum on equal terms. Mitch gritted his teeth in anger, not wanting to allow this to happen. His slashing and flowing swords were close to the sword style that everyone was taught. They were not enough. But for this case, Harrier had a secret technique. To do this, you had to draw a large circle from the bottom up and hit it with a backhand. This was Mitch's circular cut. Encrid watched these movements with concentration, trying to understand what would happen next. Now he saw the Harrier's technique that had struck him down so many times because he had not been able to predict the start of the attack and its trajectory. This time everything was different. The company commander was glad of this meeting. By concentrating on one point and anticipating the enemy's attack, Encrid was finally able to parry the circular cut. Mitch was horrified that the enemy had calculated the trajectory in advance and blocked his sword. The Harrier family was one of the 3 key cities that dominated the Aspen Duchy, and the Harrier family was also a symbol of martial might, gathering under its wing all those who showed talent in martial arts, regardless of their family or title. Naturally, Mitch was one of the sideline relatives who was also taken in by the family, receiving the surname Harrier. He proved his skill with extraordinary talent. By the age of 15, Mitch could easily defeat 2 adult soldiers, and by the age of 18, he had defeated enough swordsmen in duels to fill an entire village. By the age of 22, his name was famous throughout the entire city. Based on his abilities alone, Mitch became one of the 3 strongest members of the Grey Dogs, and his worthy opponents could be counted on one hand. He didn't understand why he had to train until his legs were swollen. I didn't understand why I had to swing the sword until my palms bled. He had no idea what it was all about if you could learn it after a couple of repetitions. The man was satisfied with his current situation. He was proud of his talent and was too self-confident. So now he was seriously wounded by a man he considered scum. Now Encrid's blade pierced Harrier's chest, taking away his life and pride. With one sharp movement, the soldier pulled out his sword. Mitch was barely able to stand, clutching his mortal wound and coughing up blood. In front of him, he saw an indifferent, sweating Encrid. Harrier realized that he had been careless in thinking that this attack would definitely work. He noted that his opponent was inferior to him in both strength and skill. The company commander replied that the man was right, but victory was still his. Mitch was angry. He couldn't come to terms with this outcome. He continued to stand with the last of his strength. all he could do was reflect on his mistakes in the face of death. Raising his sword over the commander of the Grey Dogs, Encred said that it was fun. As the blade came ever closer to Harrier, he thought that if he hadn't been so frivolous and had put in more effort, he wouldn't have lost. Suddenly, someone shouted out that Mitch needed to be protected. The company commander prevented Encred from killing Harrier. One of the enemy soldiers, holding Mitch, asked him to wake up. The blonde man commanded that Harrier be moved to safety. He admitted that he didn't expect Encred to break through and cause so much noise. Then he said that the guy shouldn't have even hoped to leave here on good terms. Encred mentally agreed with this statement. It was impossible to forget that he was on enemy territory. The guide flag had not yet been broken, nor had the escape route been cleared. Until then, today has defined a new wall in front of him. The company commander ordered his subordinates to shoot. The crossbowman immediately launched a multitude of bolts at the guy. In front of Encred stood several spearmen and the commander of the company of Grey Dogs. The guy understood that he couldn't dodge all these attacks. He decided to endure the pain from the bolts piercing him and break through. Intending to hit him, the indignant blonde asked where he was going. He made a slashing move, which Encred stopped with his sword. The soldier was surprised that his sword had cracked in just one strike. The company commander was definitely a master of heavy sword technique. This meant that Encred needed to die another couple of times to break through to the front. But the current goal was to win this battle and destroy the flag. The conductor of witchcraft became useless even from the slightest crack. The commander of Norilia's detachment was confident that he would break through if he wanted to get to the flag. The guy was throwing knives trying to at least tear the fabric of the flag, which the company commander did not like at all. Dodging the enemy's blow, Encred launched another knife. He knew he had to aim for the connecting part of the flag and the flagpole. This time, the throw was successful and cut the connecting part. Somewhere in this fog, a fairy was fighting stubbornly. Even though she reported the witchcraft and asked for help, no one did anything. The commander thought that this kingdom was rotten. A sprouted potato, not a human, was sent to the front as a battalion commander. At this rate, complete destruction was only a matter of time. Suddenly, something unexpected happened to the fairy. The fog cleared, shocking all the Aspinis. They wondered what happened to the flag. One of the stunned enemies was pierced by the company commander. She knew that once the fog cleared, it had thrown the enemy into confusion, and that this was their chance to turn the tables. She commanded everyone to attack, and the soldiers rushed into battle. The absence of fog improved the situation for Norilia, but the fairy was still curious about who had broken the spell. She assumed it was the squad leader. Wounded in the shoulder, back, and thigh, Encred held the rest of the sword and breathed heavily. Now he realized that he had miscalculated. The guy expected that if he ran towards their camp, he would meet either Rem or Ranga, but they suddenly disappeared somewhere. Behind Rem, who was holding one of the Aspanians by the hair, there were many dead people, and in front of him stood still living enemies. The man demanded that they bring the spellcaster, otherwise they would all turn into corpses too. Ranga was also surrounded by soldiers, but these people did not attack him, but rather were confused. Inhaling and exhaling vigorously, Ranga was also perplexed. The camp he ended up in was not an enemy camp, but an allied one. So the guy couldn't understand how this had happened, and one of the soldiers shouted out where this idiot had come from and asked if he really wanted to lose his head. Encred was annoyed by his failure. One of the Aspanians told him to look at himself and asked if the commander still hoped to return alive. Raising his sword back, the enemy told him to stop fighting and surrender. Out of nowhere, a black panther jumped out and grabbed the man's hand in its mouth. Encred was surprised by this, because it was the same beast that he saw in the field. The Aspanis could not understand where this animal came from. Having wounded one of them, the panther jumped off him. The crossbowman wanted to neutralize the animal, but it turned out to be not so easy. The panther simply snapped the bowstring, preventing the soldiers from firing anymore. Grinning, the cat stood in front of Encred, as if protecting its owner. The soldier said that she should have just run away. He understood that the company commander was a bird of a different feather. Suddenly, someone touched Encred's shoulder and told him to back off. It was Commander Vergens who said he would save the soldier. The self-confident man immediately rushed into battle. However, one powerful blow from the commander of the Grey Dogs company was enough to dissuade the enemy from fighting one-on-one. Vergens dropped his sword and fell backwards, noting how strong the man was, and Encred asked how he was saved. Rising from the ground and grabbing his sword, the man commanded his crossbowman to shoot at the target. However, the commander of the Grey Dogs successfully deflected all the bolts flying at him, which made his opponents consider him a real monster. From somewhere behind him, a panther pounced on him. However, this decision turned out to be wrong for her. The man hit her with the hilt. Having thus thrown the cat aside, the commander of the dogs rushed forward. Encrid once again sank into a state of concentration on one point. He saw the enemy's blade heading straight towards him. Grabbing the other man's weapon, Encrid tried to analyze the situation as quickly as possible. He understood that this blow from the commander of the Grey Dogs could not be blocked by force. In this case, holding a short sword in front of him, the guy decided to slip. The soldier borrowed this maneuver from the Harrier. Encrid held the sword so that the enemy's blade passed along the blade, but did not destroy it and almost did not injure the soldier himself. This action puzzled the commander of the Grey Dogs. The man realized that Encrid had just used Mitch's sliding technique. Then the soldier asked a rhetorical question. It worked, didn't it? The next moment, Vergens lunged towards the commander of the dogs, who easily dodged the blow. The Hispanian looked away from Encrid and looked ahead to assess the situation. A whole crowd of soldiers was running towards him. The commander of the dogs understood that it would be difficult to deal with such a number of opponents. He decided not to participate in this battle and told Encrid that he would not forget him. Then, raising his hand, he commanded his soldiers to retreat. Running up to the commander of the 4th squad, Vergens noted that his shoulder was injured, but they had no bandages and the soldier should have hidden behind it quickly. And Encrid, dropping down to the panther, said that it needed to be taken. Picking up the soldier holding the beast, Vergens threw his arm over himself, calling Encrid a psycho and advising him to take care of himself. The man then ordered the 3rd platoon to retreat. Vergens asked the soldier not to close his eyes, but the boy had lost too much blood. The platoon commander kept demanding that Encrid open his eyes and wake up, but the soldier continued to lose consciousness. Calling Encrid stubborn, Karen noted that in the end he once again achieved what he wanted. The carrier asked what made the guy do this. The battle was still going on. Vergens was trying to fight off the enemies, holding Encrid. While in the room, the 4th squad discussed that the commander was seriously cut up, and Ranga and Rem got lost and lost him. Someone repeated again that Encrid needed peace and everyone should be silent. But they all prayed for the commander to open his eyes. As Encrid woke up, he couldn't understand what kind of commotion was going on here and what was actually under his hand. Opening his eyes, he realized that he was lying in an embrace with a panther. In front of him was his entire squad, among whom was Rem, who said that he thought that this time the commander would definitely die. Otter was glad that his prayers had been answered and Encrid asked what was going on. The commander said that his throat was dry. Jackson, handing him a cup of water, explained that this was because he had lost a lot of blood. He also asked if Encrid was okay. When the commander tried to drink water, his hand shook, causing the liquid to splash on the panther. Kreis reported that the doctor promised to improve the boy's condition, and the soldier also noted that the goddess of fortune was clearly on the commander's side. Encrid assumed he had passed out on the way back. Once the soldiers were convinced that the commander had woken up, everyone began to disperse to their own affairs. Surprisingly, the day was survived safely. Rem sat next to Encrid and looked at something carefully. The commander asked why the soldier was staring so intently, whether he really wanted to pet the panther, and the man replied that he was not interested in animals. He asked how Encrid managed to recognize the witchcraft. The commander thought if he said that it was because of the repeated "today," they still wouldn't believe him. Then he could try to lie. But Rem helped him so much that the man couldn't do that. He also had to answer with sincerity. Encrid replied that he knew a fellow settler like Rem, and it was he who told the boy about witchcraft and suggested that this could be it. The commander considered that such an answer was quite appropriate because he did not lie, as Ram told him about it. Sighing, the man began to rise. He said that Encrid could lie as much as his heart desired, but asked not to get carried away with witchcraft. From his appearance, it was impossible to say that he was very clever. The commander asked where Rem himself had gone from the battlefield. The soldier replied that he had gone to look at the face of the one who had planted the flag. But Rem didn't like this man, and the man beheaded him. Now Encrid, stroking the panther, understood why he had not noticed the spellcaster, and Kreis, sitting next to him, beckoned the big cat with a piece of meat, begging her to give him her paw. But in response, the dissatisfied panther growled loudly at the soldier, who immediately hid behind the next bed. The commander said to be careful, otherwise it could tear the guy apart, and Kreis said that then his heart would break if he refused 10,000 crowns, which intrigued Encrid. Kreis explained that he had heard from a guy named Henry, who was with the commander on reconnaissance, that it was a black panther, nicknamed the Lake Panther. Because of its blue eyes, reminiscent of lakes, it was a spiritual beast that fed on some kind of earth energy. One of her claws was worth 10,000 crowns, considering that she dropped them from time to time. Kreis was going to wait for the moment to get them. Encrid thought, if a copper coin was equal to 1 crown, then 10,000 crowns were equal to 1 gold coin, which was more than his salary. The commander was told that after his shutdown without fog, the advantage was on their side, but they had to return without an obvious victory, after which several days passed without withdrawal of troops or other sorties. Encrid thought about the slide he had made. He wasn't sure if he could do it again. When the commander, sitting on the bed, stretched his shoulders, Jackson asked him not to overdo it, otherwise his wounds could come apart. The commander replied that everything was under control and a warm-up would not hurt. Ranga explained that Encridu was not allowed to do anything except stretching anyway, and asked if it wouldn't be better to just sleep. Rem was indignant. Was the soldier really trying to instill his laziness in the commander? As Ranga stood up, he wondered where his sword was, and Rem asked if his comrade was planning to attack him, and the blonde replied that he was curious about something about fencing. Encrid said that he easily used a technique that he had never trained in his life, and that it was the first time he asked if it was even possible. Rem replied that this happened over time and there was nothing special about it. The beast's heart allowed him to see through the enemy, so Encrid could see in detail how he wielded the sword and how he distributed his power. Ranga said that if there was a foundation, the steps would become easier to understand, and Encrid had also mastered concentration. On one point, his vision should have become sharper, but with all this, the commander was also lucky. With his skills, he would have had to repeat something a couple hundred times to master it. The past today was not simple for Encrid. Hundreds of days of desperate rages, research, wasted energy in the name of victory. He didn't just learn the repetitive events, he became stronger on his own. Despite his meager talents, he was able to do it, to surpass himself again. Turning to Rem and Ranga, Encrid said that he wanted a duel. Rem replied that he had often been called a psycho, but Encrid had outdone him. And Ranga replied that it was surprising, but he agreed with the savage. The soldier asked what kind of duel could even be adequate, given the commander's condition. With Encrid's wounds, it would be too much. At this moment, Encrida was visited by the company commander. She asked if the broken witchcraft conductor was his doing. Encrid knew that sooner or later the leadership would have questions, but he did not understand why the company commander came to him. The soldier replied that he had seen the flag during reconnaissance and had some knowledge of witchcraft. Then the girl noted that there were as many as 5 baits. She asked how the guy found the right one. Encrid gave a short and exhaustive answer. He stated that he had marked this flag. The soldier asked if the girl had come to ask only that, and the fairy replied that she also wanted to look at him. The company commander expressed her assumption that they were supposedly connected to fate. Encrid didn't know how these words were supposed to be understood at all. A surprised Ram, ready to listen, asked what Encrid's secret was, and Ranga noted that the commander was not a failure, to which the man replied that everything was not so at all, and demanded that the guys shut up. Christ suddenly appeared and said that he now knew who would open the salon for noble ladies with him. He stated that the terms of Encrid's contract would not disappoint. The soldier replied that he would not do this and made him shut up. Encrid himself was wondering why the company commander had said that. The fact that she was his immediate superior only added to his headache. He was torn from his thoughts by Christ, who said that he had some news. The soldier said that a squire from the Knights of the Red Cloaks had arrived. The Encrida division was called the Cypress Division, after a knight, and this same Cypress belonged to the Knightly Order of the Red Cloaks. The knights were talented craftsmen, rare even on the continent, so the order was not only made up of them. The squire was a subordinate and apprentice in one person, following the knight. By gaining the knight's recognition, the squire became a junior knight. And at the last step of the Phantom Summit, there was a knight who had surpassed the human limit. Usually, squires did not go into battle without a knight, so their division's guest on the battlefield was going to be a junior knight. Someone commanded the entire camp to set out immediately. Christ noted that when they were waiting for the squire to show up, Rem said that the commander could use some rest. However, Encrid wanted to see it too much. Rem replied that it was written right on the commander's face that he wanted to leave here, and he told him to do so. Ideals that can only be achieved in dreams. Now some of these ideals were right before Encrid's eyes. 2 armies stood opposite each other. Esquire Norilia headed towards the Hispanians. The enemy archers raised their weapons, aiming at him. But the unshakable man continued to calmly and confidently move forward across the battlefield. One of the commanders ordered to fire, and a flurry of arrows flew at the squire. The future junior knight, his cloak blowing in the crosswind, seemed completely oblivious to the cloud of arrows that were only growing in number. The arrows quickly closed the distance, trying to hit the target. The squire dropped down, clutching the hilt of his sword. Ranga noticed that his ally was using will in his legs. The shells were approaching from all sides, and the squire continued to stand in such a low position, as if drawing strength from outside. He then made a lightning-fast dash, not only escaping the arrows but also ruining their smooth flight with the resulting gust of wind. Encrid saw his ally approaching the enemies with a speed no human could possess. As soon as the squire drew his sword, several Hispanians were immediately defeated. With just one swing of the sword, the opponents flew apart. Watching this, Encrid was in complete shock. This was what his impossible dream looked like. The Hispanis were terrified of losing their comrades, unable to understand how just one man could stand up to an entire army. Even when surrounded, the squire easily destroyed everyone, not allowing anyone to get close to him. The Hispanians did not understand how it was possible to fight such a monster. At that moment, they only wanted to retreat, just to stay alive. One of the commanders, who was sitting on a white horse, demanded that his stupid soldiers stop the enemy. However, the next moment, before he could even comprehend anything, he himself lost his head from the sword of a warrior who had leapt to reach the enemy's neck. Encrid watched the battle closely, knowing that he would never be able to repeat something like this. Ram thought that this squire was really good. It was not for nothing that he was called a military expert. Ranga thought about this man's level and was confident that he too would soon be able to reach it. Jackson thought that the Spanish had at least 5 chances to kill the squire. But the enemy commander-in-chief turned out to be an idiot. Auden prayed for those who died in this battle, and Christ was surprised that it was all over and they didn't even have to retreat. Encrid tried to determine whether the squire's fencing was a cutting sword. The soldier decided that he had combined the characteristics of both a heavy and a dancing sword. The slashing sword was a straight and precise style that pulled the enemy into attack range and delivered a decisive blow. The heavy sword was a powerful style that smashed everything in its path with force, delivering slashing attacks. The illusionary sword was a mind-bending style. Using it, the warrior would suddenly attack, fooling the enemy. The sword of the mercenary, Valen, was based on it. The dancing sword was a fast style. The soldier attacked with lightning speed. Flowing sword is a soft style, in which a person would evade an opponent's attack and strike back. The heavy, ponderous sword and the fast, dancing one were completely different from each other. But Encrid felt that both styles were used simultaneously by the squire. At that moment, Encrid realized something. Although the principle of each style of fencing was different from each other, they all had the same origins. If one could master all the elements of the 5 sword styles, treating the sword as a living being, one could become a virtually invincible knight. Thinking about this, the soldier closed his eyes. On orders from their superiors, the soldiers launched a counterattack. Ranga and Rem looked at their commander, who did not give any orders, continuing to stand with his eyes closed. Ram told his comrades that it seemed the captain was about to throw off the shell. He offered to stop the others from stopping him, and the boys lined up around him to protect Encrid. Even after achieving knowledge, the commander could not say that anything had changed. Lost in thought, the soldier found himself on the surface of the water again. He believed that knowledge merely indicated how far the path he had to travel was. The 5 boys stood, enclosing Encrid in a circle, thus preventing the soldiers running to attack from accidentally knocking him down and trampling him. The commander did not react at all to everything that was happening around him. Somewhere in another dimension, he was climbing a stone wall. Encrid decided to check what was up there at the top. The Knights of Norilia actively killed the Knights of Aspen, gaining the upper hand. Encrid, like a moth, continued to crawl towards the light, clinging to the ledges. It was noticeable that the Spanish had lost their fighting spirit, which played into the hands of their opponents, who already knew that they would be able to redraw the state borders that evening. Encrid continued to climb to the top. Norilia was able to achieve the victory over her opponents that they had been waiting for so long. The joyful cries made Encrid open his eyes, and at that moment he realized that the war was nearing its end. The coming winter and spring promised to be busy. The country, founded by 3 families, the Duchy of Aspen, was going through hard times. Before the Duke of Aspen stood the commander of the Company of Grey Dogs, the administrator and politician Ekans. His Majesty was indignant that the opponents had violated the unspoken rule of not involving the forces of the Knightly Order in the battle. Ekans explained that Norilia had used the appearance of General Frog in the enemy camp as an excuse. Only a member of the Knightly Order was capable of opposing him, so the Aspens had no excuse. Clutching his head, Aspen was not pleased that the general dared to interfere, and Ekans replied that this was expected, because Frog always acted as he pleased. Besides, their opponents would have found another excuse besides the general. The man noted that this would not have happened if the magic had worked successfully. The enraged Duke declared that the Grey Dogs should have been held responsible for what had happened. The platoon commander replied that they would definitely not leave it like that. After a protracted battle and Aspan's retreat, the detachment moved back. They arrived at the fortified city of the royal colony, the border fortress of Borderguard, a military town on the border with Aspen, where 1/5 of all the inhabitants were stationed army. Someone from the leadership stood at the podium and said that they highly valued the contribution of the heroes of Norelia who achieved victory in this battle. And now everyone, even ordinary soldiers who showed courage and loyalty, should receive a reward. The commander of the 4th Squad of the 4th Platoon of the 4th Company, Encrid, was awarded for destroying the vile sorcery of Aspan. The surrounding soldiers did not understand how this scum managed to break the spell. The boys wondered if this was some kind of joke, since this man was a weakling. They assumed that maybe he had taken credit for the work of his subordinates. The soldiers began to actively mock Encrid, saying various nasty things. Overhearing one of these conversations, Mac demanded that the soldiers shut their mouths. Andrew, who was standing nearby, also noted that these guys had no right to chat like that. Henry and Virgins, who were in the same line, like Mac and Andrew, considered Encrid to be a truly outstanding man. As a reward, the commander of the 4th Detachment was given a bag of money. When he came down, Kreis asked what Encrid would spend the money on, maybe on booze or women. The guy asked if he could recommend a good place. Then the commander asked to be taken to the most skilled blacksmith in the city. Kreis complied with the request, but he was outraged that Encrid decided to spend all the money on buying a sword. He stated that their swords were not so bad. The soldier also noted that too many of these weapons broke on the battlefield. Even Kreis himself picked up enough that their squad would last a lifetime. However, Encrid believed that in order to become a knight and prove his abilities, he first had to acquire a weapon for himself. When the commander examined one of the swords, Kreis asked why he needed such an expensive one. The commander said that he would pass the exam for promotion to higher rank. He did not want to continue sitting as a low-ranking soldier. This surprised Kreis, because he thought that Encrid was not interested in promotion, and the commander replied that he saw no point in remaining at the bottom all his life. The soldier noted that this was also true and asked if they would pave the way first. Norelia used a ranking system to raise the morale of the soldiers. Strong soldiers who went beyond the ranks were assigned to a special rank, and the essence of the whole system was that the attitude towards a soldier changed according to his rank. To rise, one had to fight in a duel and defeat 3 soldiers of the corresponding rank. Therefore, for the assembled soldiers, the spectacle turned into entertainment, on which one could even place bets, so that, being at such a gathering, Kreis shouted that he accepted bets in crowns, and asked among the soldiers of middle rank whether there were any who wanted to fight with Commander Encrid. One of the soldiers asked if a lowly scum had challenged a middle rank. He stated that all of Encrid's rewards were not earned by his efforts, so he should know his place. The soldiers shouted to be gentle with the young lady and not to give in, even if Encrid burst into tears. The commander, accustomed to ridicule, did not pay attention to this. He was assessing his first opponent, a former famous mercenary, one of the strongest of the middle rank. Someone was surprised that some fool would risk betting on a scumbag commander and wondered who it was. Smiling good-naturedly, Kreis replied that they would find out when the winner was determined. Encrid had grown stronger after a series of repeated deaths. But on the other hand, this fight was almost life-threatening, so the soldier only had one chance. The commander of the 4th Squad tried to look straight ahead and be on guard, thinking about mediocre abilities and the limits of efforts. The previous him would not have even dared to challenge the majority of those gathered here. Encrid ordered himself to remain vigilant, to fight as if death itself was before him. The famous mercenary rushed at Encrid, insulting him. The commander decided to find the enemy's blind spot and use the attack mastered during the previous battle. He made a powerful cut that caused the mid-ranking soldier to lose control of his sword and almost lose his balance. What happened surprised Encrid a little. Everything seemed somehow too simple. The enemy screamed in pain from broken fingers. Without losing such a good moment, the commander hit the soldier in the face with the hilt. The enemy fell to the ground. He was shaking, and blood was flowing from his mouth. Encrid didn't understand why this man was so weak. Everyone around was shocked that the scum had won. One of the knights was indignant. Could it really be Kreis who had bet on the commander, knowing everything? Kreis replied that it was not like that at all. He had no idea that the commander fought so well, and just wanted to save his face. The guy himself was shocked by this outcome. One of the soldiers said that since Kreis was the commander's subordinate, it was worth believing in him more. Encrid assumed that perhaps the enemy simply didn't take him seriously. But even if that was the case, the commander didn't understand why the victory came so easily to him. With an average rank, the enemy was no weakling. Since Encrid had doubts, he decided to try to fight someone again. The next soldier appeared in front of him, who asked if Encred had won by chance and now became proud. This time, the commander's opponent was a soldier from a heavy infantry unit, nicknamed the Elite behind their backs. Encred guessed that the man was spinning the tip of the spear to distract attention and attack unexpectedly. That's how it was. The enemy made a sharp lunge, but the commander cut the shaft. Encred didn't understand if this was all they could do. He assumed that maybe it was still a trick, after which the man was going to strike again with the shaft. However, judging by his shocked face, it was clear that this was indeed the entire attack. The commander was surprised. Was it really true? And he could strike back. Having finished his thoughts, he kicked his opponent in the stomach. The enemy lost his balance, confirming Encred's victory. The crowd of soldiers were shocked that the commander had won again, but those who really knew the guy continued to only admire him. The double victory was no longer a coincidence. A lower rank easily defeated two mid-ranking soldiers. Chryse asked if anyone else wanted to fight the commander, but no one dared to go out to fight. They were ashamed to go out and lose. Virgins called the soldiers fools, who themselves did not value Encred at all. And now they tucked their tails between their legs. One of the soldiers asked if he was not the one who despised the commander the most, and the man silenced him, declaring that there was no such thing. Since his last defeat, Andrew had been studying fencing with Mac day and night. Now he thought he could challenge Encred again. Mac saw him getting up and told him not to even think about it. He explained that the commander had become much stronger, and even Mac himself would now find it difficult to defeat him. Disappointed, Gardner sat back, clasping his hands in front of him. Suddenly, someone told one of those present to enter the ring, which outraged the man. Rem asked if this man had really insulted the commander like that, and now he was scared. Jumping up from his seat, the soldier began to deny this fact. Until now, Encred had been forced to fight with all his might, so he couldn't realize one thing. The mentally ill man he met on the first today was followed by an assassin. Not long ago, the commander fought Mitch Harrier. He also arranged daily sparring sessions with his subordinates. All this time, he had to take part in two difficult battles. Encred's previous fencing teacher had told him to never look down on his opponent. And as he approached him, the soldier asked if the commander had been thinking about something else before the duel. Encred answered negatively. He always thought that the advice would not be useful to him, but who knew that the day would come when the commander would consider the enemy weak? The soldier asked the commander what that expression on his face was. Encred grinned and said it was just funny. Now the commander became so strong that he could suppress his opponents. Suddenly he rushed forward, frightening his opponent. Encred made a slashing blow, which the soldier barely defended himself from, holding his sword out in front of him. The commander then repeated the blow, using more force, causing the enemy's blade to begin to fall apart. The soldier broke out in a cold sweat, stunned by the power he had seen. Encred swung his sword again, the weapon quickly closing the distance between him and the one who had previously mocked the commander. The blade froze a few centimeters from the soldier's head. The man, who felt such terror as if imminent death was approaching him, lost consciousness. Norelia was called the country of knights and revered the strongest. Here and now Encred was able to make a name for himself. The amazed soldiers stood and looked at this extraordinary picture. Now, all these people believed that the commander did not present the merits of his subordinates as his own, and really destroyed the witchcraft himself. Suddenly, Andrew rose from the bench again. He started shouting "Witchbreaker," and Encred couldn't figure out what Gardner was up to. The scout commander demanded that the rest of the soldiers shout it out too, because if it weren't for Encred, half of them would have simply died. Rising from their seats, first awkwardly, then with great enthusiasm, the soldiers shouted, "Breaker of witchcraft!" The warriors continued to chant this, praising the man as a hero. Watching this, the commander thought that it was not so bad. Chryse, who ran up to him, noted that it was great, but the commander replied that it was still a long way off. Encred stated that there was still a high rank ahead. The surprised soldier asked if the commander was really going to continue. Suddenly, someone from the crowd whistled, drawing attention to himself and noting that this was all funny. Noticing this man, all the soldiers became alarmed. They saw that he was wearing eagle epaulets, which belonged to the border guard detachment that was directly subordinate to the kingdom. That small elite squad consisted of soldiers of high rank and above. Those present did not understand what the killer of the outskirts was doing in this place. Approaching Encred, the man asked the commander to fight him. Encred and the outskirts killer stood opposite each other, and everyone around remained silent. Ram noted that the commander would have a hard time with this man. The border guard detachment was comparable to the Grey Dogs of Aspen. Encred suggested that, in that case, this guy could rival Mitch Harrier. The commander was curious to fight for the first time without repetition with a soldier of his level. Encred wanted to know where this would lead, and he told his opponent to attack. The fact that the commander was not afraid of him, a soldier of the border detachment, amused the killer of the outskirts. The man thought the commander was much more entertaining than when the man was watching him. All the soldiers began to support Encred, telling him to show what he was capable of. Cheering for the commander of the 4th Detachment, the soldiers began to shout, "Flower of the battlefield, infantryman!" The outskirts killer was unhappy with this, because those around him turned out to be ignoramuses who did not know that the special detachment was also infantry. These soldiers had accomplished only a couple of feats and were already proud. Rushing towards Encred, the elite soldier decided to knock them down a peg or two. The commander concentrated on one point, which was the tip of the enemy's sword. Encred held his weapon out in front of him, causing the enemy's blade to slide not across flesh, but across his blade. The outskirts killer was surprised by such amazing concentration and balanced movements reduced to a minimum. But still, grabbing Encred by the collar, the man was going to knock him off his pedestal. Then the commander grabbed the enemy's hand and raised his sword over him. At that moment, the elite soldier felt like he was about to die. The commander's sword aimed towards the enemy but ended up stuck in the ground. And all because the outskirts killer tried to jump back as far as possible. The elite soldier bared his teeth and attempted to stab Encred. But the commander, his eyes empty, grabbed the blade, stopping him. Then Encred pressed down on the outskirts killer's head and pushed him away from himself. The elite soldier became more serious and again rushed towards the enemy, who, left without a sword, took out one of the throwing knives attached to his chest. Both blades sought to destroy their opponent. However, they were stopped by the commander of the 4th Company, who made a chopping motion with her sword between them. Then she told him to stop this, because one more step and it could lead to the murder of an ally. Maintaining his fighting stance, breathing heavily and sweating, Encred remained silent. Jackson stood behind the elite soldier, holding a knife to his neck. The rest of the squad members were nearby, ready to defend their commander. Insulting the suburban killer, Ram told him to consider himself lucky. The man noted that it was quite harsh because it was just a fight, and he also told Jackson that if he did it again, he should expect a couple of extra holes in his body. Encred was thinking about how he missed a step in the middle of the fight and almost lost his life. And the other soldiers were noting that the commander had actually fought well and wondering if this was really the same scumbag commander they knew. The elite soldier said he didn't expect anything special, but he couldn't help but admit it. He introduced himself as a junior commander of the Taurus Border Guard Detachment and extended his hand to Encred. In response to the handshake, the man also introduced himself. The soldiers were surprised that this man had risen to the rank of junior commander, which meant that Encred's opponent was a soldier of special rank. People started shouting that in that case, Encred deserved to rise to at least a high rank. Looking back at the soldiers, Encred lowered his head and waved his hand. Torres chuckled and said he liked how the commander enjoyed the crowd's cheers and promised to see the high-ranking soldier Encred soon. Today, the commander of the 4th Detachment moved one step forward. The day was already drawing to an end. Everything around was turning red. The commander of the 1st Company and the commander of the Heavy Infantry Squad, Turtle Graham, offered Encred to transfer to their company. This was the 3rd offer to change companies, including the 2nd and 3rd, and all due to the high rank and the nickname Breaker of Witchcraft. Graham noted that his Heavy Infantry Squad, the Turtles, was the core of their division, and Encred should have understood the value of this offer. The commander of the 4th Squad knew that as soon as he accepted the offer, he would enter the path of the Army Elite. But he still refused, and Graham asked if the guy was afraid of the commander of the 4th Company. He promised to settle everything, but the guy explained that it was not about that at all. Graham saw that Encred did not regret his decision at all. The man stepped back and told them to forget about it and just know that he was upset. Encred asked if Graham wanted him to send Ram in his place, and the commander replied that he would generously give the fool to him. He also noted that it was thanks to the commander of the 4th Detachment that he survived the previous battles, after which he retired. Looking out of the room, a surprised Kreis asked if this time the commander was really being called to the 1st Company. He asked if he should pack his things, and Encred replied that he would not go. Kreis asked why the commander had refused everything, since with his current reputation he could have been welcomed with open arms everywhere. Encred hesitated, not even knowing what to say. At that moment, another guest arrived to visit them. It was Thors who asked how the commander was doing. The outskirts killer decided to get straight to the point. He invited Encred to join the Border Guard unit. The Border Guard was directly subordinate to the kingdom. It was even more prestigious than the Turtle Squad. Rem thought that in the past the commander had never even dreamed of such a thing. He believed that, even though Encred had rejected all other offers, only a fool would miss such a chance. Torres admitted that he clearly felt after a couple of blows that Encred was hungry for battle. The elite soldier stated that if the commander came to them, they would give him long hours of training and hellish battles. Reaching out his hand to Encred, Thor said that to join their ranks meant reaching the limit of his power. The squad members tried to hide their disappointment. They did not want to lose their commander, but were ready to accept any of his decisions. At first, Encred was silent, thinking everything over. But then he noted that there was no more suitable place for hellish training and battles than this. Moreover, Encred did not want to reach the limit, but to step over it. The 4th detachment spent the night in a very shabby, very dilapidated wooden building. Covering himself with a blanket, Ram shivered from the cold, thinking about knocking himself out with an axe blow to the head so he could sleep. Rem asked where the commander was going and asked him to bring a hot stone on the way back. The battle was over, and now these guys were as good as unemployed. Trying to take the blanket away from Rem, eventually tearing it, Auden said that they needed to move, then it would not be so cold. He offered to go with him and have training without weapons, and the disgruntled soldier demanded to let go of the blanket, not agreeing to this. Then, Auden asked how the commander viewed hand-to-hand combat. He suggested warming up the muscles that were frozen from the cold. Encred replied that he had to go to work, and they would arrange training as soon as he returned. When Encred left the building, Rem shouted at him not to forget about the stone, and the commander replied that he remembered everything anyway. The commander thought that it had only just gotten colder, but winter had already arrived. Traders at the local market were vigorously advertising their wares. The main duty of the border soldiers was fighting, but when there were no wars, they patrolled the streets to keep order in the city. Encred was supposed to be doing this with Jack and Bo today. The commander tried to remember where he had heard these names of intelligent soldiers before, and admiring Jack stated that it was a great honor to be on the same team with the famous Witchbreaker, and Bo said that he heard that Encred had also risen to a high rank. Bo was amazed that the guy was able to move from a low rank to a high one in one fell swoop, and Encred replied that he was just lucky. Jack was curious about what a high-ranking soldier was capable of, and suggested a duel when they returned. The commander replied that he was always happy to do so. The streets were quite calm, except perhaps for the wind. Jack and Bo, huddled close to each other, and Encred were indignant that they had to guard the streets in such cold, and the commander did not understand why the two were so stuck to him, because he was not so wide to shelter them from the wind. The merchants kept shouting at potential buyers not to pass by. The soldiers made their way through the crowd, and a man in a brown robe was walking towards them. As he got closer and closer to Encred, the man suddenly twisted his leg. The concerned commander extended his hand to him and asked if he was okay. But suddenly the man pulled out a knife and stabbed Encred with it. The commander did not immediately realize what was happening. The soldiers took him by the arms, pressing some kind of cloth to the commander's mouth, saying that Encred had gotten drunk in the middle of the day, and Bo asked if everything was okay with him. The commander realized that the guys were blocking the entire view, which meant they were all in cahoots. The man in the robe asked if Encred was surprised. The killer, with a disgusting smile, declared that the persistent lover never forgot his prey. It was half-elf, and Encred now knew that Aspen had sent an assassin after him in revenge for the destroyed sorcery. The killer suddenly pulled out the knife, blood splattering. After this, the traders released the commander, who fell to his knees. Jack noted that the mission was complete and told Rotten that they were heading back. Someone on the tower nodded approvingly. Now, Encred remembered that Craze had mentioned intelligent soldiers who had been wounded by the curse, among whom were Jack, Bo, and Rotten. Apparently, this was a pretext to leave intelligence and collude with Aspan. 4-on-1, Encred decided it would be fun. He fell to the ground and a pool of blood formed beneath him. Seeing this, the woman walking towards him started screaming. Lying on the bed, Encred suddenly opened his eyes. Rem asked if the commander had gone crazy so early in the morning, and Encred replied that he just wanted to start the day off right. Leaving the house, Encred turned to one of his comrades, and Rem asked to bring a hot stone. Meanwhile, Auden was pouring a bucket of water over himself. The smiling, steaming man asked if his commander had called him. Encred noted that the soldier said that there were supposedly training sessions that hardened the body. And Auden asked again whether the commander had said anything about training without aids. He explained that they were necessary so that the body would not become stiff in the cold winter, and a person could meet any situation in full combat readiness. The commander asked his soldier to share this. Encred clearly saw the killer take out his blade, but the boy was unable to react. His body froze, and the commander was unable to dodge. Encrid was in a crouch, but he was standing on only one leg, and the other, like his arms, was stretched out in front. Auden told him to hold on, and he had to stand. The soldier explained that if the commander couldn't do it anyway, his muscles would ache, and the commander replied that they were already aching. Encrid should have guessed about the betrayal even when Jack and Bo stuck close to him. At first, the commander thought about killing these two first, but in the end, he decided that if he hurried, he would miss the half-elf. Encrid decided that as soon as the persistent lover got close enough to be tracked and caught, the commander would attack them all in turn. Jack asked if Encrid wasn't cold at all, and the guy replied that he came from training. Bo noted that his reputation did not come out of nowhere. Once again, the soldiers huddled close to each other, noting that this winter had been particularly cold. This time, Encrid was in his best form, thanks to Auden. Right now, he was ready for the enemy to appear. He looked straight ahead, where, among the crowd, the persistent lover finally appeared. At the same second, he simultaneously hit the soldiers on the sides. Bo was outraged by the fact that Encrid noticed the trick. The commander assumed that his killer would either escape or join. He decided that he needed to get rid of these two quickly, and took out his sword. However, the next second, the persistent lover waved his hand, and Encrid heard a strange sound. A throwing knife was already sticking out of the commander's chest. Encrid was surprised that the object flew through the crowd from such a distance, which was masterfully accurate. The persistent lover once again uttered his signature phrase. As he fell, Encrid thought that when he recognized the sound of the flying knife, it had already pierced his heart, which was even faster than sound. People who saw the bloody body were worried and started shouting that the man was dead. Encrid understood that he would have to confront the enemy in close combat and at range at the same time. And now the commander was trying to figure out where to start preparing. Encrid knew that if the killer managed to get close, he would stab him with a knife. And if not, he would throw the knife from afar, which in principle was a fairly simple tactic. While actively performing the exercises, the commander thought that this wall was relatively simple. Placing his hand on Encrid's back, Auden helped him with the stretch. The commander said the word death, and the soldier asked if he really threatened to kill, and Encrid answered negatively, explaining that he was dying here. Ranga asked what they were doing, if they were training their endurance to torture, and Rem, still under the blanket, asked what was so difficult about it. Then Encrid shouted at him to come out and repeat after him, and Jackson, who was entering the room, wanted to say something about being on duty. Once inside, Jackson saw a very strange picture. Rem, Ranga, Auden, and even the Panther were in unusual positions and were talking to Encrid, who was sitting next to him on the floor about some kind of flexibility. The brown-haired man was perplexed by this, and someone asked what was wrong with his face and explained that they were just training. A little later, Encrid was already sitting on a bench outside, drawing his killer's throwing knife in the sand, thinking that all he had to do was fight it off. The commander mentally noted that this object was an order of magnitude superior to ordinary knives in terms of sharpness and speed. When Jackson got close, he asked if it was really a whistling dagger. Encrid asked if this was the name of a throwing knife, and the soldier replied that it was called a whistling throwing knife or whistling dagger because of the sound it made when thrown. If the opponent was a master, one could die before even realizing it, so Jackson advised it was better to avoid this. After a pause, the commander replied that he would definitely do so. He thought that no matter how skilled a knife thrower the half-elf was, it would have been enough to stop him in advance. Once again, Encrid simultaneously punched the former scouts. This time, the commander grabbed Bo by the collar and held him in front of him. Encrid wanted to first deal with the small fish, and then use them as a shield and hide from the knife, but the whistling dagger pierced him right between the ribs. The second knife flew straight into the trader's back. Another dagger plunged into Jack's neck. Encrid was surprised that in one short moment the half-elf was able to throw 3 knives at once. The merchants and their potential customers began to scatter, shouting that people had been killed. A thrower was approaching the fallen, bloodied soldiers, and Encrid thought that this half-elf also killed his comrades if they were useless, or if he had no sense of camaraderie at all. Dropping to one knee, the killer noted that the commander's tenacity was impressive. After this, the half-elf said his phrase again. Encrid replied that he could only rejoice. The killer was amused by the fact that the guy was joking on his deathbed. Calling it funny, the half-elf took hold of the dagger to pull it out. The commander admitted that he had taken the matter too lightly. Smiling, he thought that the wall was still a wall. Karen asked if Encrid was really enjoying himself and told him to laugh while he still could. The soul ferryman stated that the curse was not called that way for nothing, because the joy it brought was proportionate to the despair. After this, Encrid, who did not agree with this, woke up again in his bed. He believed that eternal rebirth was not a curse, but rather an awe. Having met with Jackson, the commander asked him to tell him about the whistling dagger. The surprised brown-haired man asked why Encred suddenly wanted to know about this, and the man asked if the soldier would tell him about it if he answered why. Jackson said that the dagger consisted of several layers of thin blades, which is where the unusual whistling sound came from when thrown. It was once called the knife that leaves only sound because its speed was difficult for the human eye to follow. Encred asked what to do if he wanted to see the whistling dagger to dodge, and the soldier replied that he could not do that. But the commander insisted and asked what if he absolutely needed to see it. After exchanging a glance with Encred, Jackson asked again, "Absolutely?" Shaitan was unhappy that the commander had started doing his thing again. He didn't understand where his comrade had even heard about this weapon. Jackson explained that there was no point in trying to see a knife that had already been thrown. To see it, you had to follow the movements of your hand. One way or another, the direction of the knife's flight was determined by your fingertips. However, of course, there was a technique for concealing the throw, but if you knew it, you could easily spot the hidden movements. Encred asked if technology at his level was available to him. Jackson replied that she was too tough for the stone throwers, and Encred thought that one of his subordinates and the other were both complete troublemakers and were teasing him. The brown-haired man asked the commander if he would like the boy to teach him how to throw knives. For Encred, since Jackson never suggested anything first, the soldier noted that if the commander was not confident in himself, then it was better not to start. However, the man said that he would definitely learn this. Once again, Encred was approaching a very busy market. Jack and Bo admired him, remarking that it was incredible to train in such cold weather. The commander recalled Jackson's words that the throw was instantaneous, that it was necessary to concentrate all the body's strength in the moment and throw. The same applied to dodging. Encred looked somewhere ahead through the crowd, waiting for his enemy. As soon as the half-elf appeared, the commander immediately pulled out his sword. Then Encred cut off Jack's head, who hadn't had time to realize what had happened. An angry Bo, screaming in bewilderment, grabbed the hilt of his weapon. However, Encred's sword passed right through him too. Concerned people began shouting and crowding around the scene of the incident. Between them, a killer was approaching the commander. Encred tried to wait for the moment when his opponent would use up all his strength and concentration. The commander believed that by protecting his heart he could avoid instant death, so he held the sword in front of his chest, and the man also decided to focus on the thrower's fingers. The first thrown dagger fumbled in Encred's forearm. The next throw was aimed straight at the heart. Losing his balance and falling backwards, the commander only smiled. Just for a brief moment, but he saw a beam of light flash for a split second. Coming closer to Encred, the thrower began to say his signature phrase, but it was the commander who finished it, which surprised the traitor. The killer asked how Encred had figured this out. The commander only replied that they would see each other again. He was sure that a couple more times like this, and he would see right through the half-elf's attacks. Encred's first priority was to eliminate Bo and Jack as quickly as possible. As soon as he did this, those around him screamed, and another traitor appeared in front of the man. Encred was no longer someone who could only dream of something. Now he could make it his own if he put in the effort. This time, Encred was able to see the direction of the first dagger. There were also bracers attached to his forearm, into which the knife was pierced. As he insulted Encred and reached for his next dagger, the knife thrower began to get nervous. Having rushed from the spot, the commander decided to go head-on. Twirling the dagger on his finger, the half-elf waved his hand, but did not release the weapon. Encred realized that this was a cunning trick, and yet he was unable to dodge the newly thrown knife. Losing strength and falling to his knees, the commander thought about how the thrower could control the moment, capturing the enemy's movement. Then the commander pulled out a dagger and began to examine the gun. Encred liked this ability of his opponent, and he wanted to learn the same and get the same weapon. The commander twirled two small blades connected to each other on his finger and threw them at the apple, but they ended up missing. Jackson asked what Encred was doing, and the commander replied that he was practicing throwing a whistling dagger, at which point the soldier noted that Encred was holding a completely different object. The commander replied that the real one was supposed to appear a little later. As Encred spun the makeshift weapon again, one of the blades broke off and flew right past Jackson's face. The incident created an awkward silence between the men. And now the 8th today has arrived. This time, Encred did not fall for the deceptive maneuver, but now a bolt from the man on the tower flew into his back. It became clear to the commander why Rotten was here. On the 9th attempt, using a homemade whistling dagger, Encred killed Rotten. Calling the commander a fool, the half-elf threw a whistling dagger at him, and the day again ended fatally. Encred continued his knife-throwing training, which allowed him to hit the apple on Jackson's hand. The commander noted that he used his arms and legs as a trigger mechanism, and that he also used the resistance force of his entire body. The man asked if anything needed to be improved, picked up the apple and pulled the blade out of it. The brown-haired man said that that was enough and asked if the commander had learned to throw knives somewhere. Encred thought that he had learned this from Jackson, but replied that there was one thrower on the battlefield, and the commander learned by watching him. Jackson began to wonder if Encred was truly a genius to have achieved such a level simply by observing. The soldier asked if the commander knew the style of the bullet blade. He explained that it was a throwing technique, and the weapon, once created by an amazing assassin named Gior, received this name by analogy with the whistling dagger. Gior sought to create a secret blade that would not even leave a sound, but it was difficult to use, so it was transformed into the current whistling dagger. Encred noted that this technology had a rich history, but Jackson could not believe that the commander had never heard of it. So the commander asked the guy why he thought so. Jackson explained that Encred's posture indicated that he was a master of the whistling dagger. On the 10th attempt, Encred headed somewhere away from the traders, and a surprised Jack asked where the commander was going. Encred then pointed out once again that he was going to patrol another place, which angered Jack, who stated that they were obliged to guard the market, and because of Encred, they could receive disciplinary action. The commander stated that he had the highest rank among them all and was ready to take responsibility. Encred told the soldiers to follow him. Jack and Bo started whispering to each other, trying to figure out what to do next. The guys decided to go after the commander first. Encred understood that the market was a stage prepared by the killers. He saw no point in playing along with the traders. Having climbed the deserted hill, Jack asked the commander if it would not be better for them to return to the market. Then, turning around, Encred asked what they got for spying. Realizing that they had been exposed, the soldiers immediately drew their swords. However, they didn't have time to attack, as Encred dealt with them with quick blows. The men fell dead on the cold ground, bleeding like cows. Looking ahead, Encred was already waiting for the half-elf and Rotten. Finally, the thrower and the crossbowman were already standing in front of the man. Rotten was clearly frightened by the fact that he was faced with such a serious opponent, but the half-elf did not show his uncertainty. Encred noted that the thrower was a bit late and told them to attack at once. The next second, the thrower threw whistling daggers at the commander. Avoiding them, Encred thought. Whether there are 3 or 4, it's all the same. The main thing is to see the movement of the fingers. Suddenly, Rotten appeared behind the commander, intending to shoot him with a crossbow. However, with a sharp turn, Encred threw a homemade weapon at him, killing the enemy outright, hitting him in the head. Throwing a dagger at the commander, the half-elf, as before, called him stupid because the man was distracted. But then the thrower regretted his words because the commander caught the blade with his bracer. Despite the protection, blood still flowed from Encred's forearm, but he didn't even flinch from it. Visibly nervous, the killer asked who the commander was. Pulling the dagger out of his hand, Encred replied that it was none of his business. The man also asked how many such blades the opponents had. The half-elf was surprised that Encred also knew how to throw knives. He wondered if they were really from the same sphere. The killer replied that he only had 2 blades. The commander replied that he was envious of this, since he only had 1 dagger, and the half-elf asked if the man really had problems with his head to joke like that. The assassin asked if Encred didn't know that it would be the end for him if he lost the blade. The soldier replied that the outcome of the battle could only be known when it was over. Encred was sure that even if the enemy skillfully hid his hands, it was impossible to hide their movement completely. Dodging without letting the enemy out of sight, that was what throwing instinct meant. Encred was able to notice that the thrower had decided to use 2 blades at once. The commander managed to dodge both daggers, after which he also threw a blade at the half-elf, but the weapon only tore part of the fabric of the robe of the enemy, who rushed towards him. Naturally, the thrower had more blades in stock, but Encred still had his homemade weapon. The commander threw it at the enemy, who was barely able to dodge. Drawing his thin sword, the half-elf was indignant that Encred dared to lie to him. The commander replied that it was mutual, thinking that he had not noticed the enemy's sword earlier. On the other hand, being an assassin did not guarantee that the enemy would only attack from a distance. The half-elf used an unfamiliar low stance. His movements were swift. Encred had come this far only to face another attack. Catching the assassin by the hand, preventing him from wounding himself, the commander said that he didn't care about it. The soldier declared that here and now was the very end. Then Encred raised his weapon to the sky and slashed at the half-elf. The blade split the former killer's skull. With a sharp jerk, the commander pulled the blade out of the dead man's head. It took Encred 10 times to challenge himself to overcome that wall. Fighting, suffering defeats, becoming stronger again and winning. For the commander, it was incredibly fun. He stood next to the corpse with his head raised, feeling relieved. That was not all. Encred looked at the dead body. On the half-elf's chest, he found whistling daggers, which of course he took for himself. The soldier reported everything that had happened to the company commander. The fairy asked if the guy had really been nearly killed, and, anticipating this, he changed the patrol route. Encred explained that it was an accident. Then the girl asked if it was really an accident that the guy had fought 4 opponents and only received a scratch. The soldier replied that the goddess of fortune must have helped him. The company commander gave the man a sullen look, but he didn't even bat an eyelid. With a sigh, the fairy told him to return, and he accepted the order. Encred returned again to the wooden house full of holes. Coming out from behind the wall, the man tried to tell his subordinates that he had returned. But suddenly the soldier saw an axe flying at him. Encred dodged and the weapon stuck into the wall. A pleased Rem noted that the commander had successfully avoided a sneak attack, and Encred asked if his comrade had gone mad, since the commander had almost died. The soldier replied that assassins could now descend upon them, so special training was needed. So, throwing a hot stone at Rem, the man told him to choke on it. Catching this hot stone with his bare fingers, the soldier was happy and wanted to thank his comrade, but only until the moment he felt pain. Ignoring his cries, Encred looked at his hair and thought that it had grown too long. The commander asked Christ to cut his hair, and they began to bargain, with Rem at this point indignant that Encred could at least wrap the stone in cloth. Having agreed to 8 coppers, Christ began cutting the commander's hair on the street. Encred noted that the haircut had become more expensive and asked if there really was no discount for comrades. Then the soldier replied that if the commander was not satisfied with something, he could get his hair cut in the city barbershops. But Encred did not want to go to such places, since they usually gave bad haircuts. It suddenly started snowing, and Christ noted that it was now clear why it had gotten so cold. Rem called the snowflakes the damned excrement of the devil, to which Ranga agreed. While Auden noted that it was a test given by God, Jackson was standing nearby, but he just remained silent. Encred did not understand why they all suddenly crawled out. The commander wondered how the assassin could have penetrated the security zone, and how long ago Jack, Bo, and Rotten joined the ranks of spies. He assumed that someone was definitely behind this. Encred asked if Christ knew the 3 dead men and inquired where they were from. The soldier replied that Jack had been caught stealing and had then joined the army, while Bo had slandered the aristocrat. Rem had noted that these guys were good, and the commander had told him to shut up. Christ continued to tell that Rotten was supposedly a security guard for a failed trade guild. All 3 of them had joined the service at the same time a year ago, which meant that they most likely worked together in the same guild. There was one place in Encred's memory where the lineup had just changed at that time. It was a thieves' guild, which was only a guild in name, but in reality it was a den of bandits, which was a pretty decent option, considering that they knew all the loopholes in the city. The commander asked Jackson if he had any acquaintances in the thieves' guild, and the soldier asked why they asked him about it. Encred replied that he assumed Jackson should have known about it. Thinking that the commander had become more insolent, Jackson replied that after the Reformation he had cut off all ties with the guild, so he could not say anything about it. Finally, Christ finished the haircut, and Rem noted that Encred at least now looked human. Looking at the sky, the commander noted that the snow was only getting heavier. When Jackson then stated that he needed to leave, assuming that his comrade wanted to avoid the hard work, Ram demanded that the soldier not make up excuses not to shovel snow. Encred was unhappy with this quarrel and told the boys to stop doing it. He suggested that the soldiers, as a commander, make a strategic sortie. If they agreed to this, Encred was ready to free them from clearing the snow. Ram stated that they would leave immediately. Jackson also agreed with this. Christ also did not want to clear the snow and stated that he was already prepared. Encred noted that he needed to get permission from the company commander first, and Ranga asked if he still hadn't done it and called him lazy. The soldiers hurried back into the room, the last one being Auden, who asked the commander to hurry up. Only at such moments did the guys become surprisingly unanimous. The company commander asked if Encred suspected that the assassination attempt was carried out by the Thieves Guild and that he was planning to eliminate them. The guy replied that it would be so if the fairy agreed to it. Holding her chin on her clasped hands, the girl pierced the man with a searching gaze. She then asked if it was definitely not about snow removal, and while enduring the pressure and mentally noting that the company commander was being very smart, Encred replied that it was not at all. Walking through the snowy streets, the soldiers were surprised that, out of the blue, they had to destroy a thieves' guild. Christ clarified whether he understood correctly that they were talking about the Gilpin Guild. He asked whether the commander had any information at all. Encred answered negatively and explained that they would now gather it. The commander told Jackson that they would wait at the inn and ordered the soldier to find out where the Gilpin Guild base was. And the man asked how he was supposed to do this. Encred responded that his subordinate should use several methods. A puzzled Christ did not understand what kind of order this was. Jackson, accepting this, said that he understood everything. Now Christ wondered if it was really he who was strange here. The entire fourth squad, except Jackson, visited the inn Vanessa's Pumpkin Soup. Craze asked what they would do if Gilpin was innocent, and Encred replied that even if they had not been involved in the assassination attempt, they were still criminals. This means, in the commander's opinion, it would be a good idea to get rid of them. Lost in thought, Craze called the waitress over and she asked what he wanted. Then the guy started whispering something in her ear, which caught the commander's attention. Encred wondered about Jackson being late, but even if it was him, it was pretty hard to start a case without any clues. Assuming that he had given too thoughtless an order, the commander even felt a little ashamed. Meanwhile, Jackson was somewhere on the roof of one of the buildings and monitored the situation. The cold penetrated to the very bones, and the snow sticking to the man made his situation worse. Finally, the soldier noticed two suspicious people. Someone asked if Christ knew the waitress, and the soldier replied that her name was Lisa. Her father was a shoemaker, and she dreamed of opening an inn in the capital. The man stated that he knew such details because all the ladies seemed to be his future clients. Covered in snow, Jackson entered the inn and announced that he had found out where they lived. But there, the soldier found his comrades sitting in the warmth and devouring juicy meat with various drinks. Encred froze, looking at Jackson's disappointed expression. Then the commander handed him some meat on the bone and told him to eat it, but the man refused. Encred continued eating his meat, and Jackson asked why there was any need to waste time and suggested that they set out immediately. Ram said he really didn't want to go out in the cold, and a gloomy Jackson asked if he should bathe him in his own blood, which would immediately make him feel warmer. The commander replied that if it were up to him, they would move out at that very moment. But the heavy snowfall would reduce their mobility. They needed to approach the matter carefully and move out as soon as the snowfall ended. The commander glanced at the snow-covered window and realized that the weather was not going to calm down. Then, Encred said that this snowfall would not end, and it was time for them to move out. Christ asked how this was a balanced decision, and the commander replied that he had thought about it enough. And so the whole detachment set out on its journey, accompanied by rapidly falling snowflakes. Shivering from the cold, wrapped in some kind of blanket, Rem noted that he liked the inn much better. The guys walked past two beggars dressed in rags and torn shoes. One of them was missing one shoe. The blade of a knife flashed in his hands. The man suddenly rushed at the soldiers, and a second armed beggar followed him. But these scoundrels decided to attack the wrong guys. Throwing off the blanket, Rem plunged an axe into the skull of one of the enemies. The second man knocked him out with just one punch to the nose. Indignant, Rem asked who had attacked from behind, and whether these people were relatives of the stray cat. And Christ suggested that perhaps they were people from the Gilpin Guild. Lifting a blanket from the ground to reveal a wooden door, Jackson called the boys over, explaining that this path led to their lair, and the homeless were guards. After tugging at the handle, the brown-haired man realized that the door was locked. Then, Auden, who had sat down next to him, asked him to move over and said that he would try knocking. Raising his hand to strike, smiling good-naturedly, the man said, "Knock, knock." Then, with one blow, he smashed the door into splinters, some of which got stuck in Jackson's hair. Now the way was open, and Auden invited his comrades to enter. Rem asked if the man didn't know what knocking meant, and Encred said that he opened the door, and that was already good. Descending the steps, Rem wondered what Encred would ask first when he met the enemies. The commander replied that they would first put aside all talk and subdue the opponents by force. At the end of the torchlit corridor, the squad came across a door. Through it, people could be heard talking. Someone was asking if the other person was sure that this commander would come to them, and another answered positively, explaining that he had checked this fact through information channels. These people stood on the other side of the door and waited for their guests. One of the men said that he was racking his brains over how to report the botched murder. But everything should have been easily resolved if he had killed the commander himself. One of the thieves, nervously, said that he didn't know if they would be able to do it, since Encred had his subordinates with him, and the leader replied that they were just a bunch of small fry. The next second, Auden kicked the door down. Then, with a broad smile, he uttered his signature knock-knock. This action, proving that the people in front of them were not such weaklings, slightly worried the leader of this gang. A joyful Ram shouted that he would kill everyone here. The more serious Encred nevertheless began with a conversation. Drawing a line on the ground with his sword, the commander said that those who had never killed a weak person in their lives, who were willing to meekly go to prison, and who did not want to die, had to lay down their arms and cross this line, otherwise everyone would be dead. Rem asked if the commander hadn't wanted to suppress the enemy by force, to which the soldier replied that he had changed his mind. Encred thought that he had been pretty cool just now. The leader of the gang was unhappy that some pathetic soldier was looking down on them. Auden noted that there was evil in the thieves' eyes, and they would not obey until the boy showed them by example. In this case, the commander offered to show them his power and asked who was the strongest in the guild. The gang leader thought it was supposed to be fun. He introduced the strongest swordsman of their guild, Wyvern. The leader then ordered his man to fight Encred. Approaching the soldier, Wyvern asked if the man could withstand his sword. The swordsman declared that he had never lost since childhood, and at that very second he rushed at Encred. However, the commander was able to easily parry the blow, forcing the enemy to stagger back. After that, Encred mercilessly pierced Wyvern's shoulder. The commander determined that this man had mastered the sword technique of the mercenary Valen, which was characterized by an attack during a conversation. Encred himself had once been at the same level. Nervously, the leader of the gang of thieves began to break out in a cold sweat. Encred stated that if this was the strongest among them, the rest were not even worth considering. The man said he would give them one last chance. Either they would cross the line or die. The soldiers standing behind him wondered if Encred was trying to look tough. Suddenly, there was silence in the room. No one dared to take the next step. Finally, it was broken by the fall of a mace onto the cold concrete. Stepping forward and raising his hands, one of the thieves said he had decided to surrender. The leader, dissatisfied with this, called the traitor a non-entity. He rose up abruptly and tried to inflict a serious wound on the man. However, for this, the gang leader caught Encred's whistling dagger on his head. The frightened thief watched in a stupor as his leader, who had tried to kill him, himself fell dead. Now in this small space there were already two corpses of thieves. Rem grimaced and thought for a second that it all really did look amazing. Auden and Kreis were delighted with their commander. Jackson thought Encred had done quite well, but Ranga and Rem were still irritated by this. The commander was convinced that he had indeed acted coolly. All the thieves immediately fell to their knees, admitting their defeat and begging not to kill them. Rem asked what they would do next, and noted that it would be easier to kill all these people so that there would be no unnecessary fuss. Pleading for mercy, one of the thieves said that among them were those who were caring for their sick mother, barely making ends meet. Encred replied that difficult circumstances did not wash away the guilt for the crime. Shedding tears, the thief asked that in that case only he be killed and introduced himself as Gilpin. The commander asked if he really was Gilpin of the Gilpin Guild. Encred assumed that this man was the leader of the thieves then, and not the one who was killed with the dagger. But Gilpin explained that it was the dead man who was the leader. Then the commander asked again whether the leader himself was not Gilpin, and the thief replied that that was his name, and not the dead man's. Encred was very puzzled by this, and Kreis explained that sometimes guilds were specifically named after one of the members so that if captured by the army, the leader could escape by framing his subordinate. Gilpin couldn't vouch for the leader, but he assured that the rest of the guild members hadn't done anything serious. But if Encred really wanted to kill someone, the man offered himself to do it. The remaining thieves began tearfully begging the commander not to touch the kind Gilpin, who always helped them, looked after the elderly mother of one of them, and helped with wounds when the leader beat them. Rem, barely holding back tears, asked if the commander was really going to kill Gilpin after that, calling Encred a demon. The man said that he did not expect that from him, and the commander replied that it was Rem who suggested killing them. Gilpin said that if the party spared them, they would give all the guild's savings. Hearing this, Kreis smiled, wanting to get such a benefit. Showing the soldiers a wooden safe, Gilpin explained that there was a lot of stuff inside, but they needed to find the key. Then Auden just took the door and tore it open, breaking the chain. The commander said that the guys could take all of this, and Rem happily rushed to the safe. The man wrapped himself in the leather, which warmed up nicely, giving him the warmth he longed for, and Ranga asked if this was really what was most valuable to Rem. Encred decided to check what was in the safe. He discovered armor made of strong and elastic leather and decided to keep it for himself. Unexpectedly, Kreis approached him with a certain proposal. The soldiers said that they could take over the guild. Encred asked if the boy had really been suggesting that they become thieves, and Kreis replied that he had, but with a caveat. He suggested becoming thieves who don't kill people. Kreis explained that even if they eliminated Gilpin's guild, at most, In a month, someone else would organize a thieves' guild, and it would be better then to put this friend at the head and take real power into their own hands. Encred thought that the plan sounded so detailed, as if the soldier had planned it from the very beginning. The commander suggested that it could have started back when they were at the inn. Encred guessed that Kreis had shared the information with the waitress, which was why the entire guild was there. And the guy then noted that at least they had managed to deal with the guild members in one go. Kreis promised that if Encred agreed, he would receive a ransom of crowns every month, and the soldier would bring information. The commander would not say that he needed money, but he would feel calmer if he had a lot of it. Encred nevertheless agreed to Kreis's proposal, who told Gilpin that it was now a thieves' guild that did not kill people. The soldier said that they would catch all the villains, put them behind bars, and gradually carry out a reorganization. However, Gilpin admitted that if their guild was not disbanded, they would all die. As it turned out, the dead leader received money from Aspen, carrying out their orders. Every year in the spring and autumn, Frog came from Aspen to check on the guild. But if they found out about the changes, Frog, the mad beast, could kill them all. Kreis stated that it was not a problem because the mad beast of their squad was the best, which outraged Rem. Encred said that if the soldiers had taken everything, then it was time to return. Then Ram said he was wondering if all the snow had been cleared yet. This made the commander suddenly change his mind. He looked out the window, where heavy snow was still falling. Lying down on the floor, Ranga said that he thought they still had some business to do here. Warming himself by the fireplace, Auden admitted that he wanted to stay there and commune with God a little longer. Jackson stated that he still had things to do and would return tomorrow morning. Also lying down on the floor, Encred said that he saw how busy his comrades were. The next morning, Encred reported to the company commander about the return of the entire detachment and that the guild had been found and destroyed. The fairy asked him if he liked skipping snow removal. Understanding that this girl could not be so easily deceived, the soldier still stated that this was not the case at all. The company commander asked if the boy had ever refused anyone a sparring match, and Encred replied that he usually didn't do that. In this case, the fairy invited him to fight her. Taking out his sword, the guy happily agreed to this. He wondered if the girl was really angry since she decided to fight him instead of punishing him. The company commander delivered a sudden blow to the enemy's leg, causing him to lose his balance and drop his sword. The girl commanded the groaning Encred to get up. The soldier reached for his sword, but the fairy made him fall on his back again. The boy didn't understand what was going on at all. He wondered if the commander's sword had always been as light as a rod. So the girl continued to knock the guy down and force him to get up. Exhausted, Encred was already lying on the ground, breathing heavily. The fairy reflected on the fact that she had seen how skillfully the soldier reacted, as if he had glimpsed the future, and sometimes, as now, he could not predict a single blow. He was an unpredictable man, but that didn't stop Encred from breaking the spell and eliminating the 4 mercenaries. As she exhaled, the girl noted that it had started snowing again. As she walked away, she said that she would keep an eye on the soldier, and Encred wondered if all of this was really because of the snow. Mentally calling himself a loser, the boy was unhappy that after so much training with a sword, he still hadn't learned to control his body. Now he knew what else he was missing. It was an art that involved the whole body, arms and legs, which was hand-to-hand combat. While training with a piece of wood, Auden talked about this very hand-to-hand combat. Throwing the log off his shoulders, the man declared that the basis of hand-to-hand combat was a trained body. Someone nearby was complaining that some idiot had uprooted a tree again. Encred wanted to ask a question about it, but Auden didn't let him, saying that in order to train to the limit of his capabilities, the soldier had invented his own personal method, and it was called the isolation technique. Auden stated that the commander was in for unbearable torment. It could be considered that Encred would have died a couple of times. The commander replied that he was an expert in this, and now Encred was already standing with a huge stone behind his back, making a lunge. Auden explained that the isolation technique was based on the load. The muscles were ready to explode from the overwhelming force. Feeling intense tension, the commander trembled. The soldier, pressing on the stone, told Encred to hold on for another 10 seconds. He assured that the commander would be able to do it. Auden knew his limit. The man asked why he should know about his limit. Auden asked if Encred regretted not taking up training earlier. The soldier noted that in order to use the art of hand-to-hand combat, he would have to build up his mass for a long time. He began to talk about what could have happened if Encred had started doing this earlier, and the commander replied that he did not want to waste time on regrets. The past was just the past. It was worth focusing on the present, otherwise Encred still would not have been able to free himself from the first today. The commander told his subordinate to show more exercises instead of just chatting. Auden wondered where such straightforward people came from. Since their first meeting, the commander's passion for training had not faded for a moment. This is why Auden respected Encrid. The soldier said that they would move on to the next exercise. Today, the commander had to crawl to the guard bridge and return back. Auden told Encrid to be patient, assuring him that it was entirely possible, while the panther on the roof watched all this. Then the commander stood with his arms outstretched to the side, holding a boulder in each. Encrid was shaking, sweating, and grimacing under the weight that had fallen on him, and the cat continued to watch. Finally, returning late in the evening to the wooden house, an exhausted Encrid collapsed in the doorway. Ram, lying in bed under the blanket, asked if the commander had really been bullied in the detachment. The soldier sympathized with the commander because he was constantly walking around beaten, and Encrid, having reached the bed, explained that it was a normal training session. As the boy was getting into bed, a panther immediately flew up to him. Realizing that Encrid had decided to keep the beast for himself, Rem advised the commander to give it a name. After thinking about it, the commander decided that since the panther was warm, he could name her Cayman. But the beast roared in response. Then the guy thought of calling her Blue Eyes, but the panther did not agree to this either. Rem noted that the cat didn't seem to like it and told her not to bully the child, and Encrid asked if Blue Eyes didn't sound cute. Feeling a little better, the commander stretched out on the bed. Since the panther was staying here, the guy decided to think carefully about her name. So Encrid quickly fell into a slumber. The commander woke up in a strange place filled with glowing flowers. Rising to his feet, Encrid couldn't understand what was happening. Looking around, he saw a beautiful night landscape with the northern lights. The commander guessed that it was most likely a dream. Boatman here. In principle, this was not the most suitable place for this energy list. Flower petals were flying everywhere, but Encrid heard a special rustling sound behind him. Turning around, the commander saw a girl in a robe. She had long black hair with straight bangs, and her cat-like eyes had a blue tint. Encrid looked at her openly, seeing the girl for the first time. The stranger said her name was Esther. Quite suddenly, the commander woke up and discovered that he was not alone. The same girl was lying naked on the bed with him under the blanket. Realizing that she was in human form, Esther became alarmed. It was deep night, illuminated by the glow of the moon, and everyone in the town had long since fallen asleep, unable to witness such a sight. Finding herself in the man's arms under his sleepy gaze, Esther felt embarrassed. The commander only wished the girl good night. Hugging Esther tighter and moving closer to her, Encrid fell asleep again. None of the sleeping squad could see their comrade making out in bed with an unknown girl. The sun was coming out from behind the mountain, causing the snow and icicles to sparkle and people to wake up. Encrid rose from the bed, on which was no longer a girl but a panther, and Rem asked where he was going again, and the commander replied that training awaited him again. Somewhat indignant at this, the soldier noted that Encrid had returned yesterday looking extremely exhausted and asked if he really hadn't had any pain. And the commander, only now noticing this, replied that he really did feel lightness in his body. The panther mentally noted that this was how it should have been since she had used magic. She needed Encrid to break her curse. It would be bad if he died by accident. Rem asked if the commander had really gone to the priest in the middle of the night, and the man replied that he hadn't done that. But he had had a dream in which there was some woman. The soldier noted that Encrid did not act like he had such dreams, and he asked who the woman was. After thinking about it for a while, the commander only replied that she was beautiful. Sighing and lowering her head onto her paws, Esther thought that Encrid's eyes were in place. The study of spells and mysticism in magicians was at the level of instincts. Esther was cursed due to her obsession with spells, turning into a beast and losing all her powers. And then one day, when she was wandering aimlessly through the field, she was attracted by the smell of a curse, where she met this man. While performing one of the exercises, Encrid held boulders between his hands and feet. Auden couldn't believe that the commander was okay, because it should have taken at least a week to recover, and yet the commander became stronger than he was yesterday. Having finished the exercise, the man continued to move one stone after another and caught his breath. Noticing the panther on the roof, he wanted to address her as Blue Eyes, but this angered the cat. So Encrid corrected himself and asked Esther how long she had been watching. In the world of spells, a name had its influence, and carelessly calling her by someone else's name could cause a blow to her world. So Esther gathered the last of her strength to come to Encrid in a dream and say the name. True, she made a mistake due to the unstable power, so now she was glad that the commander turned out to be narrow-minded. Esther was sure that the commander was also subject to the curse. While she didn't know the details yet, Encrid's curse was much stronger than hers. The powerful curse gradually absorbed the weaker curses nearby, so that by staying close to it, the girl could be sure that she would be able to regain her power. Early in the morning, as usual, Encred was training. Auden and the commander confronted each other, holding hands and pushing. Encred saw his opponent's knee approaching him. Breaking free from his hands, the commander dodged, avoiding the blow. However, suddenly Auden touched Encred's head. Then the soldier forced the man to slam into the ground. Auden explained that hand-to-hand combat was similar to fencing and that it had distance and was based on endurance. But it was all for naught if you were clumsy. Even though Encred moved at a snail's pace, Auden could see the changes in his body. The soldier noted that the commander really did not know what surrender meant. The month flew by in the blink of an eye, and the time came when shoots began to break through the ground. Encred spent every day without exception in training. For example, he sparred with Rem. The soldier noted that the commander had noticeably improved, and now it was at least fun to fight with him. One evening, after eating a dish, Encred placed the plate on the table and turned to Ranga. He suggested going and shaking down the dinner, and the soldier replied that he was still eating. Sometimes the soldier saw no need to continue teaching the commander the basics. Now he needed to drill the knowledge into his muscle memory so that Encred could move even in his sleep. He needed to repeat this until he went crazy. Ranga warned him that it would be difficult. Smiling, the commander replied that it was the easiest thing for him. The sun had set behind the horizon, and it was time to get ready for bed. Sitting on the bed, Encred thought that sparring with his comrades was, of course, good. But it was time to take part in a real fight. All of a sudden, he heard a weapon rapidly approaching him. The commander stopped Jackson's knife that was rushing towards him with his hand. The soldier noted that at least Encred wouldn't die from a knife in a blind spot, which was a big improvement. Lying under the blanket, Christ told them to go outside if they wanted to fight, and the commander asked why his comrade had started going to bed so early, since it was impossible to earn a crown that way. With a growl, the panther stretched and left its place. Dreaming of 10,000 crowns, Christ began to frantically move his hands over the bed on which the large cat lay, searching for at least one fallen claw. At that moment, the commander heard someone approaching their house. The door was opened by a fairy who asked Encred to leave for a minute. The soldier noted that the snow had already melted, and the girl told him to forget about it. The company commander informed her that a new mission had come up, and Encred had to deal with the order that had come through the soldier recruitment system. The soldier recruitment system was one of the two major policies in operation, along with the soldier ranking system, and it existed so that city residents could give orders to soldiers during training. The cost was lower than that of mercenaries, and the higher quality of workmanship and outstanding craftsmanship created a high demand, which was just in time for Encred, who was looking for a real fight. Yawning, one of the soldiers thought that his service was almost over. Every day was the same. Service, rest, service again, and no excitement. While wandering around the camp, he suddenly came across the company commander and Encred. Encred asked the girl how many people were in the squad, and she replied that there were only 3. He and one of his squad. The third person turned out to be the company commander herself. Encred was surprised that the fairy personally dealt with the orders. A passing soldier found it strange that the two were together so often. He even heard that they had recently sparred. The man assumed that there was something between them, and perhaps they had started dating secretly. Seeing his less than pleased face, the girl asked if it was really a burden for Encred to be her. Hearing this, the eyes of the man who happened to be in this place at the wrong time widened. In no time at all, the soldiers began to spread rumors that the elf commander and the witch destroyer had had their eye on each other for a long time and had started dating even before they joined the army. One person even stated that this was not all because he heard that they even had a child. This day ended and a new one began, full of surprises for Encred. The commander of the 4th squad was doing push-ups with heavy stones on his back, while soldiers passing by whispered that he could seduce even an elf with such a face. These guys thought that the commanders were still a good match. What he heard outraged Encred, but he did not say anything about it. When the commander returned to his squad, he was greeted and called a young dad. Rem asked how many months old his child was, since they said the baby was born only recently, and Encred replied that this was not the case. The commander explained that it was all a misunderstanding and someone had spread stupid rumors. Christ noted that there was no need to be embarrassed, since everything would have become known anyway, and Encred once again pointed out that it was a lie. Ranga said the commander could get married and become a fencing coach, and Auden said he would pray for his well-being. Rem asked when the commander had a date planned, as it was awkward to interrupt between lovers, but he would have to go anyway, and Encred felt like he was being bullied. The commander stated that he was not going to take Rem with him on the mission. The surprised soldier asked who would go instead of him then. Jackson approached and said that he was ready and they could move out. Then the men, as if ignoring their comrade, turned away and headed for the door. Rem was angry that Encred had abandoned him for a stray cat and asked if he had been hit on the head, and the commander replied that the soldier could have thrown an axe into the customer's head if he had gotten angry. Encred noted that Rem's brother would never have done that. When the boys left the room, Jackson asked if the commander had hired him in the hopes that he wouldn't cause any problems, and Encred explained that the soldier often took orders in the recruitment system, so he could be useful. Jackson asked if he could offer advice as someone with more experience, and Encred was already ready to listen attentively. The soldier told him not to develop deep feelings for the woman, as it could lead to a deep wound. The dissatisfied commander replied that he did not need such advice. When the men approached the company commander, Encred asked when the customer would arrive. The girl said that he would be satisfied soon, and Encred hoped at that moment that the rumors had not reached her ears, which would only complicate the situation. Suddenly, the elf asked the commander if they had ever done anything to produce children. The gloomy guy replied that they hadn't done anything like that, and Jackson turned his head away and grinned. The commander of the 4th Squad was indignant that his subordinate found it funny, and the soldier replied that he did not understand what he was talking about. Then Encred noted that he heard his chuckle. The girl asked if Encred was angered by her question, and he answered in the negative. Then the elf asked the man if this question made him happy, not knowing what to answer. The soldier, stuttering, first answered in the negative and then in the positive. The commander asked what he liked the most, and Encred did not understand what was wrong with the elf and why she asked all this. Finally, a carriage approached them. At this point, sweat was already pouring down Encred's nervous face, and Jackson, turning around, announced that the customer had already arrived. The company commander clicked her tongue and noted that their fun had been interrupted. Shocked, Encred couldn't understand how this could be funny. He wondered if the girl had really joked like that with a stone face. The essence of this order was to protect the heir of the trade guild. The decision was currently being made as to which of the 2 heirs would become the next head of the Lockfried Trading Guild, and an order was placed for security to prevent them from harming each other, and also to help them reconcile. A fair-haired girl was descending the steps of the carriage. Encred imagined the heir to the Merchant Guild as something like a greedy toad. But now he saw before him the beautiful heiress of the Lockfried Trade Guild, Leona. As politeness required, she said she relied on the soldiers. The city was filled with gray buildings rising up towards an equally gray sky. Leona was surrounded by guards, among whom was Encred. A certain woman was holding the hand of a girl who was whispering something. After the greeting, the soldiers and the heiress did not exchange a word. They even exchanged thoughts through the nanny. The woman said that first they would rent a room at an inn and wait for the second heir. Encred assumed that this was all a hint that the soldiers were only supposed to accompany them and not interfere in their affairs. The man recalled Auden's words that age, posture, choice of location, gaze, all of this was information, and assessing the opponent's strength was also talent. Encred tried to observe and analyze everything, so he determined that one of the female guards was left-handed. Her step was squat, so one could tell that she was wearing heavy armor, and judging by the bastard's sword, she was in very good physical shape. The guy assumed that all these people were below special rank. He was able to obtain very little information. Seeing that the commander was bored, Jackson suggested that he play a simple game, and this game was called Guess the Sound. Walking side by side, the men could distinguish the rustling of a paper bag, a woman near a grocery store on the opposite side, the sound of a hammer, a forge in an alley, and the clicking of a tongue. At some point, Encred didn't have time to name the next sound, but Jackson managed it successfully. The point of the game was to quickly and accurately identify the source of the sound, which was more difficult than it seemed. At the inn, Leona and her guards went upstairs to their room and ordered the soldiers to wait for them downstairs. Then the small squad sat down at the table, and the elf noted that the game of her subordinates was interesting. She also decided to join in. But the catch was that all 5 senses of the elves were many times sharper than human ones. Jackson and the company commander began to mention the sounds of knives near the room on the 2nd floor and near the entrance to the hotel, as well as someone else's breathing through fabric. They said it so quickly that they didn't even give Encred a chance to intervene. Listening to his comrades, the man realized that things were taking a serious turn. Jackson and the elf talked about someone lurking nearby and secretly watching them. Then, with their eyes closed, they realized that someone had sneaked up on them. Jackson and the elf immediately pulled out their weapons and neutralized those who wanted to kill them. Jackson concluded that it was likely an attack. The company commander agreed with this. The guards also encountered hired killers. Behind Encred there was also one of the enemies, whose sword was ready to plunge into its victim. However, the soldier turned around and his blade was much faster. Hearing the screams above, Encred thought that the customer's safety came first. The man rushed to the second floor, hoping to prevent the mission from failing. But one of the mercenaries, not wanting to allow this, threw daggers at Encred. However, Jackson was able to catch them with a wooden studio, preventing them from harming his commander. The elf managed to destroy 3 enemies at once and was already approaching the next one. The mercenaries didn't understand why these people were so strong, but they still hoped to overwhelm them with numbers. After seeing Jackson kill the enemy, the girl thought that this private was significantly stronger than the squad leader. However, they all followed Encred with unwavering faith. When another mercenary rushed towards the elf, she tried to understand what had made the members of the 4th squad like this. This greatly interested the company commander. But now, the girl was killing the next mercenary, forcing the sword through his shoulder and down to his neck. Having knocked down the mercenary who was blocking his path, Encred pierced his chest and rushed forward. First the assassin targeting Krang, then the recent assassination attempt by the half-elf. The squad leader could no longer be killed by such raids. Trying to keep Leona from getting close, an enemy flew out from somewhere towards Encreda. But the man didn't allow the mercenary to harm him and pushed him away with a kick to the stomach. Although Auden said that the commander was still slow and clumsy, he still felt that thanks to recent training in physical strength and hand-to-hand combat, the soldier began to move completely differently than before. When Encred reached the room, a guard suddenly flew out of it. The squad leader hurried to the door to check out the situation. Shouting that it was in the name of Aspan, the mercenary approached the llamas, raising his knife back to strike. A woman stood in front of Leona, spreading her arms out to the sides, sincerely wanting to protect her lady. At this distance, the whistling dagger was useless. With his current level, Encred would not be able to hit the enemy. The commander was not sure that he would be able to reach the mercenary before he killed his victims. The commander had once seen how to cover such a distance in one go, but he could hardly have copied the squire's movement exactly. And yet the man decided to imitate something remotely similar. Pushing off from the floor, the commander quickly covered the distance. The blade was already approaching the women when the squad leader suddenly appeared in front of him. The next moment, the blade slashed across Encred's back. The killer was shocked because the knife wound remained, but there was no wound thanks to Gilpin's leather armor. Encred invited the mercenary to come down and talk. The soldier then rushed into his opponent, grabbing him by the waist and knocking him down. Continuing to push the killer forward, Encred jumped out the window with him. The landing for the commander turned out to be much softer than for the mercenary who found himself below. Having hit the ground with his back, the enemy lost more air from his lungs than he should have, which is why he was struggling to regain his breath. With Encred already getting to his feet, things were much better, as he had softened the blow of the fall by using his opponent as a cushion. An alarmed Leona looked out of the window, and the nanny covered her mouth with her hands, feeling horror. The commander was sure that there were no more enemies on the second floor. The man in front of him was finally able to stand up as well, considering that the mercenary had taken the entire blow on himself. It could be said that his endurance was quite astonishing. The killer asked if Encred was from the border guard, to which he replied in the negative. The mercenary noted that in that case there was no need to worry about losing. The commander analyzed his opponent. He was armed with 2 swords of different lengths, but the balance was not disturbed. The soldier wondered whether this was meant to intimidate, and if not, how it could be countered. The mercenary stated that he would first kill Encred and then cut up the woman he had hired. Interrupting his enemy's speech, Encred waved his hand and asked how often the man had heard that he talked too much. The enraged killer immediately rushed at Encred. The commander hadn't fought seriously for a long time, and the enemy looked like an impressive force. As he took a fighting stance and prepared to parry the attack, the commander considered which technique would be best to try. The 2 swords differed in amplitude. It was a duet in the style of Valen. Seeing the blade approaching him, Encred dodged to the side. The mercenary then made a slashing blow with another sword, but the commander managed to duck. The next time the enemy decided to strike Encred's legs, but the soldier pulled back in time. The commander was in a low stance, and the killer maintained a middle position. The mercenary lunged, but Encred rushed forward past his opponent. The commander stood behind, never wounded, while his enemy was in shock. The killer could not understand how a simple private managed to evade all these attacks. The soldier admitted that he envied the enemy because Encred lacked the talent to master this technique. He thought that this speed and accuracy were at their best, and if the mercenary had hit him, the commander could have been left disabled. insulting Encred and asking what he was muttering under his breath. The assassin rushed towards the commander. Then the soldier concentrated on one point, as Ranga had taught him. This way he could see the enemy's line of attack. This helped the commander understand how to proceed further. Encred swung his sword at you, cutting through the air, and the next second his blade pierced the mercenary's chest. However, the commander was not happy with this, because he was aiming for the very heart, and the blade hit a little to the right than he would have liked. The death rattle of a bloody man was heard. As he drew his sword, the commander thought that he still had a lot to master, to train with Ranga, or, better yet, with Jackson. The dead mercenary fell, and Encred looked at him with a dark gaze. He looked back at the screams of the enemies running out of the inn, having decided to retreat. The commander thought that he should catch up with these people too, but Jackson appeared behind him and noted that the man was fighting too noisily. Pointing his finger forward, Encred noted that the Aspany henchmen had escaped, and Jackson confirmed this, and the commander asked if they weren't going to catch them. Jackson explained that their assignment did not include eliminating the criminals. Since the rest of the gang had escaped, the client was now safe. Encred realized that he needed to focus on protecting the order. The elf also came out into the street, noting that Encred had done well, and the soldier asked if the company commander was okay. At first, the girl just looked intently at Encred. Then she asked if the guy was worried about his beloved, and said that she was so excited that she would not be able to close her eyes today. Encred, displeased with such sarcasm, instantly darkened. Leona, who had also joined them, asked if the two had actually been dating, and the man replied that this was absolutely not the case. Then the elf, with the most serious expression on her face, asked if the soldier had really had sex with her, and then abandoned her. Encred's face darkened even more as he tried to figure out what was wrong with the company commander. Leona was asked what Encred's name was, and he told her his own. With her head bowed, the heiress of the merchant guild thanked him for protecting her from danger and said that she would pay for the injuries she received later. However, Encred, bowing politely to the girl, replied that there was no need to do this, since it was his duty. Soon night fell, which gave way to an early dark morning. The soldiers handed over several captured attackers to the local army, and reinforcements were sent in case of a second attack. Sitting at the table under the light of a small candle, Encred wondered who these killers were. There was even a very talented guy among them, and it was unlikely that their goal was robbery. The detachment commander decided that the second claimant to the inheritance should be suspected first and foremost. While the man was thinking, Leona came down to him. The girl noted that the man woke up early. Finally paying attention to her, the soldier replied that he was on guard duty. Turning to him, the girl sat down opposite him. Leona offered him to join her and said that she would give him a chance to become a bodyguard for the Lockfried Guild. She had a thriving medium-sized guild. Moreover, the guild's main customers were the wasteland shepherds living on bad land. Besides them, there is an organization of hunters from the Black Skin Guild, which is engaged in capturing dragons. Also, the client was the Glacier Ranger, which guards the glacier. Moreover, if someone were to steal and sell Lockfried's trade route map, which depicted the trade routes of the entire continent and locally produced goods, the proceeds could provide oneself with a comfortable old age. The girl believed that for the idiot son of the previous guild leader, this was an unaffordable luxury. She had to inherit the will of the previous generation and protect this guild, and for this, she needed people. Leona believed that Encred was a talent that saved her at the moment of imminent death, and at the same time possessed a selfless character. The heiress was sure that anyone would want to join their guild, and Encred was no exception. The girl said that she would give him everything he wanted, and asked him to join her and become the guild's bodyguard. However, completely unexpectedly for Leona, the squad commander refused this. The heiress was surprised that he didn't even think for a second and asked him why Encred did it. Jackson approached and said that it was unsightly to cling to the person even after refusal. The elf who came down to them agreed with the soldier's statement. She said that the second heir of the guild was supposed to arrive in the morning, and she needed to prepare. After this, the girl silently left the group of people. Jackson asked if the soldier had even seduced the guild's heiress, and wondered if he had a preference for inscrutable women. An unhappy Encred replied that this was not the case. Then his subordinate said that the guy would be better off getting rid of the habit of throwing flirtatious glances, and the commander replied that he had not thrown anything. The elf also joined in this mockery, calling him a traitor who had wounded the company commander. Due to growing anger, the man began to grind his teeth. Trying to pull himself together, Encred apologized and stated that his tastes had changed. Jackson and the company commander were surprised that the man had chosen to parry their sarcasm in such a way. Encred heard the soldiers outside the window, who had overheard this conversation. whispering that he was a demon who had seduced another woman in front of the company commander. The elf was pleased with this state of affairs. She was only amused by these rumors. But Encred was completely dejected. He did not like at all the attention to his person that the lie was creating. After some time, Kreis also arrived at this inn. He stated that he heard how Encred spent the night with the client after a day of dating. The soldiers sitting nearby were surprised that the commander had now also seduced the guild's heiress. They declared that the man was a destroyer not of witchcraft, but of women's hearts. Encred asked if Kreis had also come here to make fun of him, and his subordinate replied that he had come because of the Gilpin Guild, as they needed to be kept an eye on. It was necessary to catch a gang of escaped robbers and check something. The former head of the Lockfried Trade Guild, Renos Lockfried, was a distinguished businessman and a man worthy of respect. He believed that his adopted daughter, Leona, with her assertiveness and wisdom, was the perfect candidate for the role of heir. However, the man still could not decide to make a choice because he could not abandon his own son. As a result, the previous leader, Renos Lockfried, died without bringing clarity to the future of the guild. A black and white carriage drove through the city streets. Inside was Renos's plump son, who was informed that, unfortunately, the assassination attempt had failed. The men present in the same carriage told Follett that this was precisely why they should have been entrusted with this, but the guy was hasty. They were willing to do anything to resolve the matter and asked if the agreement was still in force. Follett replied that, of course, he would not forget to reward them as soon as he became the head. Finally, the tavern door opened and Follett Lockfried appeared before those sitting inside with the rest of his retinue. Jackson and Encred began to closely examine the people who entered. Waving his hand in front of his nose, Follett was dissatisfied with the smell of dust and the fact that he was called to such a hole. He believed that nothing else could be expected from Leona. The heir to the merchant guild was of no interest to Encred at all. His attention was more drawn to the long-haired brunette man with a beard, who seemed to be a clearly strong guy. Suddenly, the man looked at the squad leader and just as quickly looked away, showing at that moment Encred was glad of his choice. The squad leader was absolutely sure that Rem would insult this man and drive an axe into his head. Suddenly, Jackson stood up from his seat and began to pull a knife from behind his back. Seeing this, Encred hastened to take his comrade by the hand so as not to allow him to make such a mistake, and the heir continued to shout, insulting the soldier. Finally, Leona came down to them, asking what the shouting was about. She forgave the people who had arrived so as not to disgrace themselves. The girl also noted that Follett was late. Approaching her, the disgruntled man stated that she should teach her security some manners. Not wanting to tolerate such rudeness, the girl slapped Felida. Encred sighed and was indignant that the girl had immediately started with a slap. The commander considered that, apparently, he was the most normal one here. Clutching his cheek, Follett said that Leona had gone crazy, and the girl replied that, on the contrary, he was out of his mind. The heiress asked if Follett had really decided to touch the soldiers from the regular border guard army and wanted to spend his whole life in prison. Alarmed, the men replied that he only later learned that they were from the regular army. Hinting at silence, one of the men accompanying Follett cleared his throat. Then the heir screamed that it was not he but Leona who wanted to slander him. Follett was outraged that some simple girl from the street dared to shout at him. Leona replied that the guy was right. She was picked up on the street, but she also noted that Follett was her own son, who was incapable of either deciphering a trade route map or calculating a budget. The heir, enraged, claimed that the butler could have done it. Leona said that if it weren't for the leader's final words, "Decide by agreeing with your son, the direct heir to the guild," she wouldn't have wasted her time. Encred thought the previous leader was soft-hearted. It was immediately clear that Leona was better suited to the role of heir. The soldier assumed that the father wanted to give his son one last chance. The heiress said that the only reason Follett was supposedly supposed to inherit the guild was because he was related to the previous leader, and the man asked if there was a more important reason. Squeezing Follett's cheeks in her hand, the girl said that, no matter how you looked at it, the guy didn't look a bit like the previous chapter. She asked from whom did Follett inherit this ignorance and terrible face. The angry man, using strong language, grabbed the hilt of his sword. Since the client was in danger, Encred also took up his sword. Looking at the brunette, the soldier saw his seriousness and readiness for battle. In one step, the squad leader found himself ahead of Leona. One of his escorts immediately stood in front of the frightened, chubby man. Looking at the brunette who had previously caught Encred's attention, the soldier realized that his pose belonged to the fast style of the dancing sword. The squad leader wondered how fast the man was, whether he was faster than Rem's axe or a whistling dagger. The soldier wanted the enemy to already attack him and show him his sword. The brunette finally began to draw his weapon, which provoked Encred, who began to do the same. Suddenly, the door of the tavern opened and a man told everyone to stay where they were. It was a small detachment, led by Thores, who said that they were border guards under direct command of the kingdom, and if those present did not immediately lower their swords, they would be accused of rebellion. Hiccuping with fear, the worried Falad looked back at these people. Encred had to obey the order silently. But he was still a little unhappy that they were interrupted. Jackson recalled the commander's words that there was no one adequate here except him. Now he was indignant about what everyone was thinking, and Jackson mentally noted that it was Encred who was the most abnormal here. Torres said that since the attackers who were handed over to the army turned out to be mercenaries from another country, the border guard took the matter into their own hands, and the mercenaries admitted that they were acting on orders from the merchant guild. Torres asked if Folad had approached these people on the day of the appointment of the heir. Stepping forward, the brown-haired man accompanying Lockfried asked if the testimony mentioned which particular trade guild it was. He stated that this was not enough for an arrest. Torres wondered if this man really thought the border guards weren't even capable of picking up the trail. Leona offered to find the culprit again by providing special evidence. She said that for these 2 days, while the investigation was ongoing, both heirs would sit in custody, which Falad did not agree with at all. Encred was surprised that the girl herself suggested arrest after the attack. Torres said that most of the prisoners turned out to be small fry. They knew nothing and, to a man, insisted that they were simply doing as the captain ordered. And the heiress replied that there were still targets for interrogation. They were a gang that escaped from the scene of the crime. It was quite possible that the captain mentioned was among them, so it was necessary to seize them and interrogate them. Torres asked what would happen if even this didn't help find the customer, and Leona replied that the border guards would have to investigate further. The girl also said that they could no longer discuss the heir in border guard, so they had to return to the guild's hometown, provided that the border guard could summon each of them at any time. Encred knew that the army would not be able to protect the girl once she left border guard. With Leona's level of security, they wouldn't have been able to defeat Falad's guards, especially that brunette with a rapier. As soon as the girl left border guard, she would have died immediately. The squad leader was sure that the heiress hardly didn't understand this, which meant that she was most likely up to something. Leona said that she was a merchant and did not give out orders without payment. She was ready to give the item that the maid was now handing over to her as a reward to whoever caught that gang. This was the 4th masterpiece from the Carmen Stiletto Carmen collection. The girl was ready to hand it over if someone caught the criminals. Jackson told Encred he would handle it. The man was surprised that the taciturn Jackson took the initiative. Now the soldier was curious about what kind of dagger it was. Falad was unhappy with this statement. Carmen's stiletto was worth a fortune, so Lockfried didn't like the fact that she wanted to give it away as a prize. Leona said that she was responsible for the dagger, it was hers, and the girl was free to dispose of it as she wanted, and Encred asked his subordinate if this item was really so incredible. Jackson replied that he was more surprised that the commander had not heard about it. The soldier explained that the stiletto was made by Carmen, a famous gunsmith. A former slave, Carmen became an assassin to exact his revenge using 7 blades he crafted himself. The 4th of them was just a stiletto, and there were those people who were ready to part with their lives to obtain such a weapon. Thors concluded that the border guards would take all those present into custody for 2 days, and none of them would be able to leave the inn. Encred told Jackson not to worry about the stiletto. The commander ordered Christ to catch them, so news should come soon. Trembling with anger, Folad was outraged by this outcome. Encred and the long-haired brunette's gaze met silently.